This pint-sized toddler struggling against the crushing waves wasn't merely some forsaken orphan, but a desperate contestant in a lethal high-stakes gauntlet to be crowned the Empire's next princess. The spectators, ravenous for status and gold, ruthlessly prodded the cradles with poles, frantic for their offspring to breach the finish line, completely deaf to the haunting symphony of terrified shrieks erupting from the other infants. Little Sujun alone possessed a visible spark of defiance, silently seething at these cold-blooded monsters masquerading as parents. Even her own biological guardians were absolute fiends, eyeing her as mere livestock rather than their own flesh and blood. In her previous life, Sujun was just vibing with her boyfriend until Truck-kun abruptly ushered her into the afterlife. She awoke to find herself reincarnated into the fragile 2-year-old body of a butcher's daughter, only to be forcibly dragged into this macabre and twisted imperial power struggle. The architect of this madness was the sovereign, a literal tyrant who scoffed at the children for being feeble crybabies. The panicked head scholar nearby desperately scrambled to pacify his rage, insisting she was their final hope to salvage the realm. Prophecy declares that in 10 years, a great rebellion will ignite and claim the prince's life unless a heaven-chosen girl martyrs herself to avert the apocalypse. Inevitably, Sujun's indignant pouting snagged the emperor's frigid attention. But the king wasn't about to grant her a free pass. He intended to test if this brat actually possessed true grit. With a casual flick of his wrist, he ignited a magic array that churned the water into a violent, lethal maelstrom, plunging the remaining toddlers into a state of sheer, unadulterated hysteria. Suddenly, parental instincts finally surged through the crowd as they scrambled to salvage their kids, abandoning all hope of glory. Only that sociopathic butcher duo lurked on the sidelines, screeching for Sujun to seize the victory. Unfazed by the surrounding carnage, Sujun didn't even break a sweat as she white-knuckled her tiny vessel. She timed her movements with surgical precision, rebalancing her cradle against the savage surges. Tactical maneuver that left the emperor genuinely fascinated by this miniature prodigy. The tiny tot was suddenly hoisted up to his eye level before she could even register the situation. The man had the audacity to brand her hideous right to her face, leaving Sujun stunned and utterly speechless. Before she could even process the insult, he tossed her to the scholar like a discarded sack of potatoes, barking orders to fatten her up. If she proves useless in a decade, execute her. Also, no free rides. When she hits 3, she's on chore duty. The scholar knew the emperor was a world-class menace, yet he sensed a deeper mystery unfolding. The man notoriously loathed women. Anyone who dared touch him, even the queen, met a swift demise. Yet he had personally reached for this little girl. There was undeniably something more profound brewing beneath that glacial exterior. And so Sujun was installed within the princess's palace, flanked by a squad of elite attendants and long-legged beauties. While most of the ladies were diligent, there was one glaring mean girl in the flock. This curvaceous servant was too preoccupied caking thick layers of foundation onto her face to acknowledge the princess, leaving Sujun to seriously question her new reality. She'd only received a single serving of milk since her rebirth. Starving, she began wailing at the top of her lungs, essentially screaming, "Hurry up and serve your king." When that servant's overly powdered face finally drifted close, Sujun was hyped, certain her meal had finally arrived. But this woman clearly skipped the nanny training because she snatched the girl from her crib like a piece of luggage. The milk bottle was shoved violently down her throat, nearly suffocating her, while the servant pinched her tiny back so viciously it felt like her skin was being shredded apart. Trapped in a toddler's frame, she couldn't retaliate. She could only pray for a hero to tank this aggro. Fortunately, a brown-haired servant swooped in to rescue her. Otherwise, Sujun would have been headed for reincarnation round 3. Witnessing that woman treat a royal princess like absolute trash, Sujun's inner detective connected the dots. With that much makeup and desperation, she's clearly aiming to seduce the emperor. Just then, an oppressive presence arrived. The hallway was suddenly swarming with grim imperial guards and high-ranking officials. The kid might be small, but her grudge-holding skills are legendary, so she smirked as her revenge arc officially commenced. She took a sharp breath and unleashed a blood-curdling scream. Unfortunately, the brown-haired girl was totally oblivious to the scheme. She kept trying to muzzle the princess with the bottle to silence her, forcing Sujun to swat it away with her chubby palms. Seriously, this girl's ability to read the room is practically non-existent. Luckily, the chaos alerted the emperor. His aura turned murderous as he demanded to know why the princess was in agony. The sheer pressure forced both servants to their knees instantly. Sujun was ready to pop the popcorn and watch that toxic viper get erased, until the woman suddenly pinned the blame on the brown-haired girl, weeping crocodile tears and playing the saint as she lunged for Sujun. It was her first time encountering a snake this thick-skinned, so the little girl decided to show her how a professional handles a snake, unleashing her secret weapon to penalize her wailing with escalating ferocity whenever she was touched. Realizing the servants were utterly incompetent, mere mouth breathers squandering imperial resources, the emperor was forced to personally hoist the princess. While branding her unsightly trash, a smug smirk danced on his lips because Sujun fell deathly silent the instant she hit his arms. The toddler pouted, thinking, "I'm the most adorable being on this planet, yet you're stone cold. What a total tsundere." Glimpsing a rare facet of the Emperor, a once-in-a-decade gaze of genuine gentleness, that delusional woman thought she actually had a shot. She lunged forward, recklessly choosing the path of execution by thrusting her stiff, artificial assets against the Emperor. Sujun immediately snitched, flaunting her porcelain little back that had been pinched until it was raw and weeping blood. The moment she glimpsed the Emperor's murderous aura, the infant got hyped, praying he wouldn't show that wicked hag an ounce of mercy. Right then, the woman, clearly suicidal, had the audacity to suggest siring more princesses with him, forgetting exactly who she had provoked. The Emperor crushed her hand, his gaze turning obsidian as her blood stained his predatory talons. He commanded his knights to drag this wench outside and butcher her into 8 pieces to feed the hounds. As she shrieked in sheer agony while being dragged away by the guards, the Emperor refused to halt his vitriol. He spat that women were nothing but worthless garbage, yet he continued to tenderly cradle and coddle the infant in his arms. He seemed to have conveniently forgotten that this very princess is also just a child. But he didn't forget to threaten the staff they were there to serve the princess, not to seduce their way into his bed, for he loathes women above all else. Yet the moment he finished his tirade, he looked down at his tiny daughter with an incredibly soft, melting expression. While Sujun was vibing aggressively, chugging down the delicious milk bottle in her grasp, the brown-haired maid noticed and fretted over the weeping wound on the infant's back. Seeing this, the Emperor shoved her aside and roughly snatched the baby up himself, despite just acting all affectionate. Little Sujun's face couldn't mask her indignation. Even a death row convict gets a final meal in peace, yet she couldn't catch a break today. The Emperor then manifested a glowing magic circle in his palm. It was high-tier healing magic intended for the infant. But instead of mending the flesh, the mana was devoured into her tiny body, leaving the Emperor utterly paralyzed with shock. Still reeling in disbelief, he attempted an even more potent concentrated form of sorcery. Terrified the infant's frail body would shatter, the brown-haired servant spoke up to stop his reckless testing. But her anxieties were misplaced. Faced with such a staggering deluge of mana, Sujun only felt a bit dizzy and remained completely unscathed, because the girl's physical vessel simply continued to absorb every single drop of the Emperor's divine magic. Witnessing such an anomaly, his eyes glinted as he declared the situation interesting. It sent shivers down Sujun's spine. She didn't recognize that predatory look and began to panic. But her minuscule body couldn't squirm out of the Emperor's iron grip as he lugged her like a sack of potatoes down the corridor. He hauled the infant into the Imperial Council room, where high-ranking officials were all staring intensely at Sujun. 2 of them immediately unleashed their own sophisticated spells. But even with this focused trial, the mana wasn't absorbed like the Emperor's. Instead, it was repelled, prevented from even grazing her skin. This was a peerless miracle because their magic was being deflected, or more accurately neutralized, by Sujun's presence. The baby was also eavesdropping and was low-key impressed that she possessed such a VIP pro-tier ability. Unable to merely spectate, the Emperor intervened and summoned his favorite monstrous pet to the stage. But the feral lightning crackling inside its maw couldn't leave a scratch against the baby's absolute protective barrier. Under the intense judging stare of that little dough ball, our mighty dragon felt because it couldn't comprehend why its power was failing. Then Sujun simply spat at its face with nothing but pure, unadulterated disdain. It was the first time the Emperor had ever encountered such a fascinating infant. He casually scooped Sujun up and ordered all her princess privileges stripped, tossing her into the woodshed to be reared like a peasant. On the surface, he acted repulsed, but in reality, he feared that if today's secret leaked, rival empires would hunt this little life. But how could a baby know the Emperor was just shielding her until she turned 10? She just kept spitting gems as she tumbled into the old scholar's arms. Suddenly, from the infant's back, a volatile surge of bottled resentment erupted. It manifested into a jagged dagger that lunged straight toward the Emperor's heart. The moment it drew near him, the blade dissolved into a terrifying ancient curse. Sensing the shift, the Emperor glanced at his hand and saw the blackened cursed script etching into his skin. Right then and there, 3 years down the line. Sujun had grown considerably, but was occupied with chores in the woodshed, struggling to hoist herself over a high threshold. Just then, a pair of boots appeared and violently kicked the little girl over. Turns out, this was all a calculated scheme orchestrated by that brat who's sparkling like a tacky Christmas tree ornament. She happens to be one of the 3 foster daughters the Emperor adopted to fill the void. This is Jen, the ultimate spoiled brat, which explains why she's perpetually draped in the flashiest designer threads. Sujun knows better than to poke the bear, so she bows her head and silently swallows the blame. On the inside, she's constantly suppressing her volcanic rage. A true pro knows revenge is a dish best served ice cold. But despite her playing the submissive role, that brat doesn't know when to quit and viciously backhands Sujun across the face. She then haughtily demands the little girl drop to her knees and beg for forgiveness. Meanwhile, the old scholar and the emperor are lurking in the shadows, scouting the drama through binoculars. He hears the emperor grumble that the kid is far too weak, which is exactly why she's getting trampled. But how is she supposed to retaliate? She's a mere toddler of 3, while the bully is 5, taller and backed by a lethal bodyguard. Still, the old man sees through the emperor's tough guy facade. He secretly treasures the kid more than he lets on. He sneaks into her room every single night using the pathetic excuse that he must keep Sujun's miserable life intact, simply so she can serve as a disposable pawn to save the prince later on. Brown Hair immediately lunges in to shield the little one, only to be ruthlessly crushed under that guard's heavy boot. Seeing her maid risk everything to protect her makes Sujun tear up. She'd rather endure the shame of licking his boots than see her hurt, but at the end of the day, the kid is a princess and can't degrade herself. Who would marry her if such scandalous rumors leaked? Witnessing the two of them acting all lovey-dovey, little Jen flashes a villainous smirk and orders the guard to finish them. Instantly, the man ignites his magic, and from within those ominous blue flames, a colossal serpent manifests and coils its deadly body around the two of them. Seeing Sujun under siege, the scholar panics, terrified her magic absorption secret is about to be exposed to the world. But when he turns to check, the emperor has already vanished into thin air. Instead of wasting words, he dives into the fray and doesn't forget to unleash his monstrous pet. With a single earth-shattering roar, our dragon tears the serpent into bloody ribbons. In the blink of an eye, even the treacherous servant is disintegrated into mere ash and dust. Glimpsing the dragon, Sujun's heart flutters, thinking the emperor has finally come to her rescue. But when she sees little Jen wailing and screaming, sprinting to tattle to the emperor, and then being coddled and comforted within his powerful arms, Sujun figures she was just delusional, convinced he really only showed up to save Jen. But human patience has its breaking point. That wicked brat actually had the nerve to demand punishment for the one who killed her guard. This causes the emperor's mask to shatter. He can't maintain the charade anymore and shoves the brat violently to the ground. He's livid that she dared to aim for his life, so he commands the servants to swap the two princesses' statuses, leaving Jen pale with horror. Sujun is then hoisted into his arms with an incredibly doting gaze, but being forced into Jen's clothes is essentially just painting a massive target on her back. The kid gets chills just contemplating the fallout. Now, before a sea of high-profile guests from every corner, the emperor personally carries Sujun into the grand hall. This leads the nobles to believe she's Princess Jen, the one the emperor supposedly pampers and adores. While he settles onto his throne and acts extremely attentive toward Sujun, he casts a sideways glance and sees Jen looking utterly disheveled like a common servant girl sitting nearby. Looking visibly repulsed, he uses a single finger to flick the brat away, sending her rolling across the floor with a dull thud. This leaves the little girl completely floored. Why would he treat the daughter he supposedly loves with such coldness? Turns out he kicked Jen aside because he wanted Sujun to sit right by his side. Then he obliterated all the false rumors by whispering Sujun's name with profound gentleness. This leaves every guest jaw-dropped. Contrary to the whispers of her rotting in a woodshed, Princess Sujun is the one being spoiled rotten. Jen is forced to swallow her burning resentment, shooting a venomous glare directly at Sujun. But whatever, the emperor is still busy doting on his little girl and even goes as far as to personally feed her. Sujun is totally cringed out, failing to comprehend the sudden shift he abandoned her for 3 long years. And now he's putting on this grand display of affection. Fearing this sudden change of heart might trigger a literal disaster, the kid rejects the treatment, claiming she's worried the emperor will overexert himself. Hearing that, he orders Jen to crawl over and feed Sujun, making the room go dead silent. Even that brat couldn't believe she'd hit rock bottom, but she dares not disobey, so she just sits there, fuming with rage as she feeds Sujun spoon by agonizing spoon. Watching this scene play out, the emperor of the Kai kingdom falls silent and begins running the lethal math in his head. Suspecting he'd already sniffed out the assassination plot against Jen, he'd staged a masterpiece drama to prove she wasn't the favorite. Looking back, 3 days the Kai kingdom discovered the empire had just adopted a new daughter, who possessed the terrifying talent to summon ancient magic beasts. If the emperor harnessed that power to strike the Kai kingdom, their entire elite squad would be absolute toast. So, to safeguard his realm, that old fossil asked a high and mighty emperor like him to assassinate a mere child. Seriously, who's the actual king in this scenario? Yet the man actually humored that old geezer and set out to find the child the emperor cherished most. And just as years of rumors suggested, it was confirmed that Jen was the most precious princess in the land. Seeing the old man fall hook, line, and sinker into his trap, the emperor prepared to end the charade and ordered Jen to beat it so he could move more freely. But the brat remained stubborn, wailing and throwing a tantrum because being kicked out meant total humiliation in front of the elites. However, the emperor cruelly and coldly swiped her hand away, leaving her to retreat in a puddle of tears. Witnessing that spectacle, the noble aunties began their vicious gossip mocking Jen while eyeing Sujun convinced she was some master manipulator. Seeing those hens acting like they were in a low-budget palace drama, the emperor grew livid and wanted to purge them. But his magic instantly flickered out the second little Sujun touched his hand. She used the convenient excuse that she was feeling faint and wished to return to her chambers. In reality, she was desperately dampening the emperor's bloodlust, terrified she'd end up on another hit list. However, that subtle display caught the eye of the Kai Emperor, who began to narrow down his true target. If given the chance, he'd eliminate Sujun too, just to snip any future trouble in the bud. He commanded his loyal shadow subordinate Shri to escort Sujun back to her room. Meanwhile, he had to play chess with the old fox before him, though his gaze kept drifting toward his daughter's departing silhouette. While the two were trekking back, the kid wondered if the emperor actually had a soft spot for her. But suddenly, detecting a disturbance behind them through his heightened senses, Shri caught a suspicious sound. He stepped right in front of Sujun, his eyes scanning the perimeter like a lethal hawk. To ensure the princess's safety, he sought to end this skirmish instantly by summoning his murderous swarm of crows. But the birds barely let out a single caw before they were instantly incinerated into BBQ quails. Realizing these intruders weren't mere amateurs, he left the baby behind to go handle the trash personally. The moment he vanished, Jen lunged onto the scene and started picking a fight. She wanted to tear Sujun limb from limb to avenge the utter humiliation she suffered today. But in a desolate underground chamber, there sat a blindfolded girl, none other than the fourth foster daughter, May. She was definitely far from ordinary. Even though her eyes were shrouded in darkness, she sensed the emperor was hosting dignitaries and that the two kids were brawling like wildcats. She was consumed by a tidal wave of envy and tears began to spill. Ever since being dragged to this hellhole, she'd lived in subterranean isolation. The nearby attendant scrambled over to refasten her blindfold, strictly forbidding her from tapping into her power for more than 10 minutes. But May could already sense that both Sujun and Jen were in mortal peril and reached out her trembling hands to intervene. By now, the corpses of men and crows were stacking up. They had fatally underestimated Shri's lethality, but unable to win. They fused the dragon whelps into one gargantuan eldritch monstrosity. But facing that mid-tier trash was a total joke compared to the Emperor's legendary guardian beast. Shri swiftly summoned his dark murder of crows once more to settle the score, and they fanned out in every direction. Like a swarm of relentless starving ants, they pecked those fools to a bloody, gruesome death. While the two girls were bickering and caught off guard, a jagged spectral claw suddenly erupted from the earth. It tore straight into Jen's stomach, but the brutal assault didn't stop there. It kept creeping closer, aiming to erase Sujun as well. The infant was paralyzed, praying the darkness wouldn't reach her. But before it could even graze the girl, the spectral claw instantly dissolved into nothingness. Because it was merely a hollow construct birthed from inferior magic. Then descending from the heavens, a familiar dragon appeared. It was the Emperor's prized high-tier guardian. It unleashed a freezing torrent of blue energy, instantly locking the creature in a massive block of ice. Only then could Jen wheeze out a final desperate plea for salvation, but Sujun was still spiraling, unsure how to even react. Then she spotted the Emperor and was flooded with relief, certain she was saved. But when he was begged to spare Jen's pathetic life, he claimed there was no point because her heart had already ceased its rhythmic beating. Just when we expected a heartwarming embrace, the Emperor flipped the script and knocked Sujun into total unconsciousness. That was when Shri finally finished slaughtering those assassins and came rushing back, repenting for his pathetic failure to protect her. Sujun was tossed into his arms like she was nothing more than a discarded plaything rather than the Emperor's own flesh and blood. He then banished the infant back to her freezing woodshed and commanded everyone be told that following the assassination attempt, Sujun remained in a vegetative coma while Jen had perished on the spot. Finally, the Kai Kingdom crew packed up and retreated since they checked off their mission, but just look at the Emperor's face. As if he possessed even an ounce of respect for that pathetic excuse for a king. It made that king's face darken with murderous bile, but he quickly withdrew generously, ignoring the Emperor's toxic attitude for one day. Once they had all vanished, the old scholar felt it was a crying shame to let those rats escape so easily. But the Emperor isn't just petty. He's an apex predator who looks down on the entire world with absolute disdain. They abducted one of his princesses, so he dispatched an elite hit squad to claim the heads of that guy's princes lose 1 take 10. He definitely holds a lethal grudge. That night, Sujun was shivering next to the brown-haired maid who was coughing uncontrollably in the depths of the freezing woodshed. Sensing the Emperor had stalked in, the kid woke up, completely ruining his plan to secretly play the doting daddy by the fire. So he immediately cast a high-level sleep spell to force her eyelids shut. But the mana was simply devoured by Sujun. Truly, he's getting senile in his old age, forgetting that magic is useless against this brat. When he heard Sujun's fragile voice ask if he had actually come to visit her in the stump, he went full tsundere mode, denying everything and averting his frigid gaze. Hearing that made Sujun's heart sink. She feared that because the Emperor's favorite princess died for her, he was here to deliver her execution. But suddenly, Brown Hair coughed violently, and it didn't stop there. She started hacking up thick pools of visceral blood. Seeing the toddler spiral with panic, the maid began to whisper her final tragic farewell. Then she did something truly unprecedented. She begged the Emperor to take Sujun back and raise her with the royal dignity she deserved. Hearing those words, as if Brown Hair was slipping into the abyss, the baby burst into tears, refusing to let her go. She pleaded with the Emperor to save the maid since she was the one who acted as a human shield and took a critical hit for her. But faced with such a gut-wrenching plea and those shimmering, tear-filled eyes, he remained an immovable, icy statue. The moment Sujun tugged on his royal sleeve, begging for just a spark of magic to salvage her life, she was coldly rejected because a noble like the Emperor couldn't waste mana on a lowly commoner. But he forgot Sujun was tiny and shook her off too roughly. This sent the baby tumbling violently off the bed. It was only when he saw his little daughter lying motionless on the floor that he finally started panicking and rushed to check on her pulse. But Sujun was doing her absolute best to suppress even a single tear, continuing to beg him through her heavy sobs to save Brown Hair. Instead of throwing a tantrum, she forced a heartbreaking smile, hoping that by being a bit more adorable and obedient, she could melt his heart of stone. Right then, the maid used the last of her fading strength to stop Sujun, terrified she'd provoke the Emperor's legendary wrath. Fearing her own head would roll before she even died, she told the kid to stay strong and then coughed up another spray of crimson. Sujun was left completely paralyzed and utterly speechless with horror. It felt like a jagged bolt of lightning had struck her very soul to the core. She immediately dropped to her knees and begged the Emperor, putting him in a severely awkward, compromising position. He had no choice but to walk back his words. While he wouldn't save her personally, he could still summon a professional. So he used his magic to violently yank the old scholar out of his warm, cozy dreamland. The scholar had no clue why he'd been teleported to this dump. Truly, the life of an Imperial salaryman is a living nightmare. But hearing that, a man of his stature had to treat a lowly servant left him even more bewildered and annoyed. However, after being held by Sujun's tiny trembling hands and told that a brilliant sage like him surely wouldn't ignore a cry for help. If he refused now, he'd look like a narrow-minded, egocentric jerk in front of his sovereign. The old man had no choice but to weave his high-tier healing magic over the dying maid. She also felt this was wrong, believing a commoner like her didn't deserve such a miraculous divine intervention. But Sujun cut her off because she wouldn't allow her to self-deprecate like that. She saw the maid was deeply moved by the gesture. Sujun confidently comforted her, saying she just needed to focus on a speedy recovery. If she truly felt guilty, she could just double down on taking care of her later. Hearing this kind of regal aura, this enlightened mindset made the old scholar jump in shock. Then he gazed at the girl with a look of pure, unadulterated joy. She truly is a child of the heavens, a world apart from those other spoiled, entitled princesses. Thanks to the scholar's immense power, the maid's treatment was complete. From now on, physical wounds would barely leave a mark. Hearing that, Sujun was overwhelmed with gratitude and bowed frantically, offering a relentless barrage of thanks. With the crisis averted, the Emperor turned on his heel and vanished, leaving the old scholar to scramble after him. No matter how much wisdom he dropped, he was utterly ghosted. You'd think the Emperor was livid, but he was actually just pouting. He was salty that his own daughter didn't even acknowledge his help, forcing the scholar to pull his hair out while chasing him, down to soothe his bruised ego. Fortunately, the old man's gears turned fast enough to concoct a scheme for Sujun to have an early encounter with the prince. Hearing a strategy that actually sounded plausible, the Emperor gave the green light for them to meet organically. The scholar's master plan, while the girl is strolling a wild bear, suddenly raids the palace and the prince swoops in like a hero to save the day. Somehow, such a cringy plot was actually greenlit by the Emperor. They're truly all losing their marbles together. No sooner said than done, they snatched Sujun and dumped her onto the grass, forcing the poor kid to have a picnic in the wild. She couldn't fathom why she was being swarmed by a literal army of flies and mosquitoes. Meanwhile, the scholar dragged the prince to hide in the shrubbery and play voyeur on our girl. Instead of playing it cool, the old man boasted with pride, explaining that in 7 years the prince would face a catastrophe and this child was his sacrificial savior. But witnessing the girl's carefree vibes, the prince felt a pang of guilt. If she was destined to save him, what would be her price? The scholar ruffled his hair, pitying his soft heart, but he couldn't mask the grim reality the girl would have to pay with her life. The sun was a scorching 40-degree furnace, hot enough to sizzle an egg, yet suddenly a violent hailstorm began to pelt the earth. Turns out they couldn't source a black bear, so they used the Emperor's pet and its frost magic to stage the entire disaster. Sujun, trapped in the chaos, felt as if this old geezer was trying to cave her skull in with falling ice boulders. Seeing the kid in the line of fire, the scholar nudged the prince to hurry up and play the knight in shining armor to secure the girl's heart, but the prince's core personality was the polar opposite of his father's cold-blooded tyranny. He was a genuinely pure soul who refused to let anyone shed blood for his own benefit. This display gave the emperor watching from above a massive migraine. How could he father such a spineless, useless weakling? He decided to intervene personally and gave a casual, effortless flick of his finger. Sujun's entire body suddenly became weightless as a feather, and she went completely airborne. Before she could even process the physics, her foster dad snatched her by the scruff of the neck to go meet a friend. He demanded she be on her best behavior. Since he couldn't engineer a rom-com meet-cute, he just forced a mandatory introduction. Realizing the boy before her was the legendary Prince Cone, she noted that he was actually quite the little cutie. Seeing the two youngsters had finally crossed paths, the old man vanished instantly to give them some forced alone time. But Sujun felt the vibe go rancid because of Prince Cone's sharp, murderous aura, looking like he was ready to throw hands. She had barely stepped into the library when the boy shoved her so violently she almost glimpsed the pearly gates. Sujun ate dirt, but the boy's mask slipped into a flustered mess as he instinctively reached out to help her up. Though she was fuming internally, thinking, the apple doesn't fall far from the trash tree, she knew better than to provoke this royal. She mustered every ounce of her acting skills to flash a friendly, harmless smile. But once again, she was stonewalled as Cone doubled down on his cold, edgy persona. He slapped her hand away again while the prince's mind spiraled into a dark place. He kept replaying his life like a tragic movie, remembering how he was born with a constitution so frail he was practically a ghost. He had fully expected to go join his ancestors prematurely. But then the emperor's overbearing tyrant aura used forbidden magic to hijack his only son's fate, refusing to let him die. Because of that desperate intervention, the old scholar was able to divine a prophecy that the prince wouldn't survive past 15. Even the adoption of foster princesses 3 years ago was a cold-blooded move to preserve him. Cone was well aware of the cost, but he never expected that his survival would mean another life had to be snuffed out. Deep thoughts, but those were cut short as Sujun was now using her max speed to hunt him down. The kid might not share the emperor's DNA, but she definitely inherited his legendary ability to hold a grudge. She immediately lunged at the prince like a feral cat. Pinning the royal boy to the floor, she unleashed a torrent of insults, asking who the hell he thought he was to treat her like dirt. Absolutely livid, she balled her tiny fist and delivered a solid punch right to the prince's face. The emperor's golden child had just been hit with a brutal reality check. Yet, instead of exploding in rage, Cone felt that being humbled and insulted was exactly what he deserved, until a voice cut through the air. That voice was unmistakable, the emperor's chilling, bone-deep tone. Hearing it caused Sujun to turn pale as a ghost as she scrambled to her feet. Witnessing the assault, he wondered if his son's nose was still in one piece. Initially, the boy was visibly rattled under Sujun's lethal gaze, which looked like she wanted to devour him, so Cone could only stammer that he was totally fine. Surprisingly, the emperor was remarkably gentle. Though his tone remained sharp, berating his son for being incompetent, he radiated paternal concern. Witnessing that scene made Sujun cringe, as it was a complete 180 from his supposed cold-hearted character design. But it also tugged at the little girl's heartstrings, making her ache for her parents back in the 21st century. She also mourned the loss of her hot boyfriend, whom she hadn't even devoured yet, all because of that damn rogue truck. At that thought, tears began to overflow. Seeing Sujun weeping inconsolably, the emperor patted her head, questioning why she was throwing a tantrum when she was the one who threw the punch. This sparked the kid's memory that she had just assaulted the sole prince of the empire, so she panicked and feigned a debilitating stomach ache to dodge execution. But even if she delivered a Hollywood tier performance, she couldn't pull a fast one on a man like him. 1 second she was faking it, and the next karma struck with a vengeance as agonizing pain caused the kid to writhe on the floor. Discarding all remnants of her dignity, she scrambled forward, clinging to the emperor's leg and howling for him to save her life. Only then did he start to spiral, realizing the genuine torment etched onto Sujun's face. Even Cone could witness with his naked eye that the toddler's belly was suddenly ballooning. The world, if she collapsed, really have made her pregnant. Seeing the child convulsing in agony, the emperor dropped to his knees and channeled magic to investigate. But instead of relief, the baby's body feasted on the mana, and her belly expanded further, making the dad freak out, utterly clueless. Suddenly, a violent internal kick was followed by a peculiar "bah" sound, making the child question her entire existence. Had she somehow conceived without realizing it? But that's too logic-defying even for a 3-year-old's vessel. Yet for some reason, it felt like she was in active labor, causing her to shriek in pure agony. The emperor was paralyzed with awe. He never imagined such a tiny dough ball could harbor such an unfathomable reservoir of mana. Turns out it wasn't the biological disaster she feared, but a tiny, teeny-weeny baby panda. The prince was also beyond floored, wondering if his offspring was actually this little fluffball. Feeling like the kid was spewing nonsense, the baby panda growled a fierce warning, making our cowardly prince jump out of his skin. Like owner, like pet, this thing is fiercer than a hag at a wet market. However, it made the emperor find the situation intriguing, truly one shock after another. He hadn't even initiated her magic training yet, and she was already manifesting her own magic beast. Deciding that this raw talent shouldn't go to waste, he decreed she live with the prince. So, Sujun could master magic to defend herself. Shri immediately manifested and scooped the baby into his arms. He watched the panda attempt to follow its master, waddling along with tiny, clumsy steps. He couldn't help but be awestruck. So minuscule and already capable of materializing this magic entity. That night, when she finally fluttered her eyes open, she saw brown hair watching over her. She had been relocated to an incredibly opulent, flashy suite fit for a princess. Once she gathered her wits, she immediately seized Brown Hair's hand to recount the trauma she'd endured. Terrified that she had actually gone through childbirth, it felt too visceral to be a dream, but Brown Hair just stroked her head to soothe her. Sujun was perfectly fine. In fact, she was radiating health. The blackout was merely the result of channeling an excessive surge of mana for her tiny frame, nothing to lose sleep over. She began clarifying to the kid that no one had given birth to anything in this room. She told her to quit talking crazy or no suitor would ever want to marry her in the future. Then she presented the baby panda Sujun's own magic beast. Brown Hair explained the mechanics of this world. A magic entity is the physical crystallization of one's mana. Every high-level mage possesses their own magic beast, typically an animal, and it will evolve and grow based on the master's burgeoning power. Hearing this made Sujun's eyes sparkle with wonder because she didn't expect such a miraculous phenomenon to exist. Deciding her newborn panda was peak cuteness, she greedily wished for a few more provided they were painless. She then let her imagination run wild, visualizing the emperor wailing and clutching his belly in labor pains like she did. Just as the two were about to touch paws, Brown Hair intervened. She forced Sujun to down her medicine before she could play with the puppy. This made the kid cringe. Was this lady blind or something? It's clearly a panda no matter how you slice it. Brown Hair is incredibly tender while nursing Sujun, doting on the toddler with every fiber of her being. The kid is far too embarrassed to correct her, so she just gulps the medicine down. Turns out Sujun never actually has privacy, when her obsessive father is lurking and monitoring her 24/7. So that's the real motive behind him granting her such a lavish high-end chamber. It makes the old scholar want to howl with laughter. The way this man is addicted to his kid but refuses to admit it is just unreal. He even spews such venomous words, constantly trash-talking Sujun as a useless brat who almost met her ancestors after manifesting one tiny beast. The old scholar is so floored he can't cover his mouth fast enough. Who compares an untrained toddler to a master like that? Outwardly, he praises the kid as a rare, once-in-a-century prodigy. Hard to come by, but in his head, he's trolling the emperor, asking how god-tier he was at 3 since he couldn't even summon a fly back then. He still believes Sujun is light years ahead of everyone else and is bursting with pride. Yet the emperor dismisses it instantly, though he can't mask his smugness with a grin stretching from ear to ear. This makes the old scholar sigh in pure exhaustion. Honestly, he'd almost forgotten what the emperor's smile even looked like. In his youth, the emperor was a literal psychopath who would use his blade to paint the blood of any woman who dared to breathe near him. Even Kone's mother, the queen, met the same gruesome fate and bit the dust. Luckily, Sujun intervened. That's exactly why the monster inside him was tamed and became significantly softer. The kid was blessed with a $1 million smile by the author, making everyone simp for her, and now Sujun has been granted permission to join the elite magic training classes, and even May, who's always isolated underground, gets a seat. Even though the other two have been grinding for a year, the kid can't sense a drop of mana from them, unlike Princess May, who's a total loner, lurking underground, yet radiating an incredibly formidable presence. The instructor who just strutted in is a total freak with a chin shaped like a literal butt crack. That guy is so arrogant because his family has a legacy of tutoring blue bloods, but in his generation, only the prince is S tier. While he treats the princesses here like low-class peasants. He immediately targets Sujun to vent his insecurities, sneering that her panda beast is just a common pet. Claiming it's forbidden inside, he abruptly summons his venomous serpent to teach them a lesson in hierarchy. It sends all the students into a state of absolute hysteria. Meanwhile, the snake swallows the panda whole. Sujun is beyond horrified. Did her precious pet just get fast-tracked to the afterlife and reincarnated into another world already? The infant desperately clarifies that it's her magic entity, not some common stray. This strikes the teacher as hilarious, and he cackles mockingly right in Sujun's face. A 3 or 4-year-old Where would a brat like her obtain a magic beast from? Meanwhile, even as the general tries to block the kids from school, why be so frantic about a check-in? But the emperor is stubborn, demanding the kid be trained by the general himself. If she fails within a year, 10 years of his salary are forfeit. That makes the old man flinch, forcing a smile while crying a literal ocean inside. The life of an employee is truly tragic. Before they even reach the classroom, they hear the blood-curdling screams of that instructor. Being insulted by him without provocation makes the emperor's expression turn completely murderous. But he's in no rush restraining the general from charging in to witness the carnage. So the two grown men decide to play spy outside and watch how these 4- and 5-year-olds handle the smoke. Unexpectedly, Prince Kon, who was always a shy flower, is now standing up for Sujun and engaging in a brawl. The scene inside is pure bedlam. Princess Pan is sobbing because the vibes are so terrifying. But in total contrast to that girl, May is incredibly icy, demanding the teacher commence the lesson this instant. Seeing the pathetic, mangled state of the teacher leaves one speechless, but then he notices a magic-inflicted laceration appearing on the guy's arm, and he immediately pins it on these kids, because this is a classic locked room mystery case. But children couldn't possibly beat an adult into such a sorry state. The emperor finds it fascinating and boots the door open. He stalks in to demand exactly which one of them laid hands on the instructor. Glimpsing him makes Sujun jump. She's positive she's about to receive a royal beating. But considering Cohen was playing shield for her, she was about to confess before he could. To stay in the prince's good graces, the teacher pinned the entire blame on Sujun because he didn't dare cross the prince. So the emperor scowled, interrogating the 2 toddlers who managed to beat a teacher to a pulp on their very first day, leaving the little girl with no alternative but to tank the heat for Cohen weeping her eyes out. Naturally, the emperor saw straight through the charade, yet he watched the prince just stand there, avoiding eye contact. But Sujun doubled down on taking the fall, claiming the old man had it coming for slaughtering her magic beast first, so she simply retaliated. Seeing her constantly provide cover for Kon while the crown prince remained paralyzed made the emperor feel a surge of disappointment in his heir. Contemplating whether he should scout a new successor, he forced a chance for Kon by telling Sujun that if she was truly the culprit, she should strike the teacher again right in his presence. That guy was so stunned, he nearly coughed up a brick. Who even plays like that man? But Sujun was even more flabbergasted, wondering if the emperor's IQ had suddenly hit rock bottom. Standing nearby and unable to stomach it any longer, the prince finally found the spine to take responsibility even if it was late. It satisfied the emperor, yet he still applied pressure, claiming Kon couldn't have done it since he lacked a magic beast. He then commanded Sujun, who was hesitating, to go ahead and beat the instructor to a pulp. Since she was doomed either way, the kid went full savage and used this chance to avenge her fallen panda. Obviously, it wasn't some pathetic slap. The kid actually channeled her mana into her fist and unleashed a beatdown that made the teacher shriek in agony. He never expected a toddler of that age to have already awakened her magical core. But that guy was still trapped in his arrogance, refusing to let a lowlife without royal blood like Sujun humiliate him. So he weaponized his magic, commanding his venomous serpent to strike the defenseless child. Finally, the prince stepped up to be useful and snatched the snake right out of the air. But before he could play the hero for long, the serpent suddenly ballooned into a massive pulsating beast. That guy was clearly suicidal, using the snake to coil around and crush the very life out of Kon. Seeing the prince acting like a brave martyr, Sujun played her part. Even though magic didn't scratch her, she wailed piteously for the sake of the performance. She quickly lunged and clung to the emperor's leg, a cowardly move sure, but it's a literal lifesaver. Even without the kid's plea, he was going to intervene since that fraud dared to assault his children right in front of him. In a heartbeat, the snake that was so lethal a second ago was flash frozen into solid ice and shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She quickly scrambled over to check on the prince. Kon couldn't even win a basic brawl, but still insisted on playing the main character for some reason. But having been pushed to the absolute brink and becoming truly enraged, the prince actually succeeded in summoning a magic beast, a tiny bunny, though its tough guy image evaporated instantly. Now he was ghostly pale and hacking up blood, looking like he'd been broken for quite some time. Immediately, the old teacher dropped to his knees and begged for mercy, claiming his family's eternal loyalty to the crown. He thought he'd be spared, but there was zero chance he'd be allowed to poison the kids' minds any further. The emperor stripped him of his title and tossed that fraud of a teacher into the dumpster of history. As predicted, leaving him with a pulse was a mistake, as that guy didn't know when to fold his hand. He only stewed in his own toxicity, setting his sights on the emperor with murderous intent. Only now did the general realize why he was tasked with training the royal heirs personally. Because he had spotted a treacherous gemstone from the Kai kingdom on that teacher's neck. Whether he was a lone traitor or his entire bloodline was dirty, things were about to get incredibly intense. Instantly, Kon collapsed to the floor, coughing up blood. Before Sujun could reach him, Henry shoved her aside to hijack the spotlight. Suddenly, the magic beast that was just summoned emerged, trembling like a leaf in a storm. The emperor immediately scooped his son into his protective, powerful embrace. With just one terrifying glare from him, the bunny was so traumatized it started foaming at the mouth and twitching. The general standing behind could only let out a heavy sigh. This fragile bunny was the spitting image of its owner. He feared the emperor would be drowning in stress over Kone's antics. Meanwhile, Sujun's heart truly ached for the prince, because it looked like he was about to literally cough up a lung. Seeing this, Brown Hair advised the kid that since the prince sacrificed himself for the cause and got mangled, she should probably hit him less in the future. Sujun could only offer an awkward, guilty smile. One catastrophic mistake, and you're branded a menace for life. Meanwhile, inside the infirmary, Kone was being stabilized by the elite magic physicians. Sujun rushed in to check on him. He insisted he was fine, but then he literally coughed up a mixture of blood and teeth. This sent the kid into a spiral. What kind of horrific plague makes your teeth fall out like that? The emperor, surprisingly, was extremely attentive, personally wiping away the crimson stains his son had spat out. He then consoled Kone, promising that no matter how many teeth he lost, he'd use high-tier magic to regrow them so his son wouldn't become a toothless disaster. Hearing that the prince frequently sheds his teeth like a lizard triggered a core memory in Sujun. She impulsively grabbed the prince's jaw to examine his gums. These symptoms were far too familiar. This move startled the entire room as they couldn't fathom what kind of disrespectful nonsense the kid was pulling now. The lead doctor seemed to realize Sujun had something to contribute and granted the toddler permission to speak. But deep down, he was secretly praying the emperor would execute this insolent little brat. And just as expected, Sujun wasn't just playing doctor, she actually had a groundbreaking theory. He couldn't exactly throttle the child to silence her, so he gave an annoyed, begrudging nod of approval. Yet the kid ignored his foul mood and happily proclaimed she could cure the prince. It's just scurvy, a bit of vitamin C, and he's golden. This caused the doctor to tremble with indignity, feeling professionally insulted by a 3-year-old squirt. He implored the emperor to execute the kid. Otherwise, he'd resign immediately and go back to his village to farm and raise fish. He snatched Sujun by the collar to eject her since he was the top-ranked physician in the empire and had been treating the prince for years, yet Sujun displayed absolutely zero fear. She remained firm, insisting that this medical crisis had absolutely nothing to do with magic. This sent the old man into such a rage he nearly had a coronary, as if anything in this world was beyond the reach of magic. So, Sujun flexed her intellect by citing ancient forbidden texts to give her diagnosis more gravity. She argued that magic has only been the dominant force for the last 10 millennia. Before that era, humanity cured ailments with herbal medicine, psychology, or even spiritual restoration. The doctor cringed. Is this sophisticated jargon really coming out of a 3-year-old's mouth? Thinking back to when he was her age, he was just a snot-nosed brat. Based on those words alone, the emperor found the child increasingly fascinating and let out a dark smirk. Amused, he granted Sujun permission to attempt the cure. However, if the prince wasn't healthy within a month, she would be permanently deleted from this world. This revelation shocked the doctor to his core. The emperor was gambling his heir's life on a toddler. It was pure, unadulterated madness. But suddenly, Kone stood up and placed his absolute faith in Sujun, which sent the kid into a state of pure joy. Still, she decided to retreat home and sleep on it, planning to tackle the disease tomorrow, witnessing the two children forging a pact with their very lives hanging in the balance. The doctor could only shake his head in disbelief, but he decided to hover nearby to protect the prince. That night, Brown Hair frantically packed up valuables and gold to help Sujun make a run for the border. Even if it cost her own life, she was determined to smuggle the kid to safety. But she was intercepted by the kid who reassured her, claiming she was a total powerhouse, a literal 1 in a billion genius. With the flex of her unreal stats talking at 4 months, walking at 6, and devouring technical manuals at age 1, even if the language was alien, she was a pro. But even if she were the mother of a literal god-tier genius, Brown Hair still tried to bar her path. After all, the prince's mysterious illness had stumped the greatest medical minds in the entire kingdom. But because Sujun's life had been a series of tragedies, she was determined to use this gamble to flip the script on her fate. And also because she harbored a secret desire for both of them, to live a tranquil life where no royal bully would ever dare lay a finger on them again. This heartfelt confession moved Brown Hair to a flood of tears. Meanwhile, the old scholar questioned if the emperor would truly bury Sujun alive if her medical experiment failed. Hearing a denial from his lips, one might think the cold-blooded emperor finally developed a soft spot for his daughter. But the emperor is always a pragmatist. Obviously, he must keep Sujun alive, so she can be the sacrifice to save Kone in 7 years. The old scholar was left stunned and speechless, but gazing at that innocent, cute face. He wasn't sure if the emperor could actually be monstrous enough to go through with it when the time came. Suddenly, the emperor felt a chill of suspicion. He lurked in her shadows every night, yet never noticed when Sujun learned to read. looming at the head of the bed like a lingering wraith. To avoid suspicion, Sujun visited the old scholar every morning to devour ancient tomes without asking a single question. Just speed reading through volume after volume, hearing that a mere 3-year-old had exhausted the entire knowledge treasury of a legendary sage left the emperor stunned. Unable to suppress his curiosity, he secretly spied on Sujun only to be caught red-handed. Despite only uttering her first words at 4 months old, the author buffed this little girl into a total freak of nature with god-tier intellect reading faster than a scanning machine. The emperor couldn't help but be impressed, never expecting to sire such an elite daughter. Meanwhile, in the Kai Empire, the king was busy kicking his own son while hurling venomous insults. All because he was outperformed by Sujun and Kon of the Lok Empire. This 7-year-old kid still hasn't summoned a magic beast despite being the prince and the guy's own flesh and blood. Yet that king didn't give a damn about his own lineage summoning a massive mace, with the intent to use brute force to exile his son from the palace. Facing those razor-sharp claws, the boy surprisingly didn't flinch and obediently retreated. This only fueled the king's rage, leading him to smash everything in sight. He'd murdered one of the emperor's foster daughters, only to have 3 of his most beloved sons slaughtered in a brutal blood-soaked retaliation. Hearing that the prince and princess of Lok already possessed magic beasts made him even saltier, so he took it all out on his son. After taking a heavy hit from his deadbeat dad, the kid coughed up blood and desperately tried to crawl away. It turns out this 17th prince is actually a reincarnator, just like our lead, and he was sent here by that very same legendary truck. He was reborn as a prince of the Kai kingdom, but because his internal mana was so overwhelming, it literally exploded and killed the mother who gave birth to him. Yet that king didn't care about his wife or the corpses littering the floor. He only felt pure joy at having a son with such raw power. But because the boy refused to manifest his magic, the guy lost all patience and used whips to torture. Brutally, but that was just a facade. The kid had actually already perfected his magic beast. He simply flashed a dark, knowing smirk. Then he transformed into a full-grown adult. This is Ni's magic beast, his own peak body and power from the future. However, his current strength is still lacking, so he has to stay low to remain under the radar of his old man. But the moment he learned Sujun and Kon had bonded with their magic beasts, his interest peaked, and he immediately unleashed a blue aura that sent Ni flying off to find them. The Lok Empire was once a mediocre third-rate nation, but after the emperor seized the throne, it evolved into a global superpower overnight. The moment Ni breached the high-security defensive barrier, the emperor's sharp senses immediately locked onto him. Seriously? The man can't even enjoy a peaceful afternoon nap without some drama. He wanted to see which suicidal brat dared to disturb his slumber and projected his voice for miles demanding the intruder show himself. Realizing the jig was up, Ni had no choice but to reveal his dusty face and present himself to the throne. Seeing a young boy with the audacity to shatter his personal barrier, the emperor felt a dark amusement and wanted to lightly rearrange the intruder's bones. Facing a beast radiating such terrifying mana made it blindingly difficult for Ni to even maintain eye contact. Ni realized that even if he were reincarnated 10 more times, he wouldn't stand a ghost of a chance against this monster. So, Ni quickly tried to slip away. But witnessing such a talented youngster made the emperor feel this boy was quite a catch, declaring, "You can't escape my grasp." In that instant, Ni took a heaven-shattering hit that left him critically injured and hacking up blood. Forced back into his original form, he crawled away inch by inch to hide, but he didn't realize that his leg was still being pinned down by the dragon's massive crushing claw. At the same time, our Sujun was about to pee her pants, but no matter where she searched, she couldn't find a toilet. Who builds a palace this grand without a single restroom? Remembering what Brown Hair said. The prince's palace didn't have a single designated place to handle one's business, because they don't use bathrooms. Yes, they literally don't go. It's not about holding it or weird alien biology. It's because they all use magic to purify their bodies, making even internal waste vanish into pure energy. Prince Kon isn't a magic prodigy, but that's basic level stuff that every royal student is expected to master. Luckily, Princess Pan's palace has 2 servants who are magicless, so there absolutely must be a toilet there. So now our little princess is forced to hijack a stranger's latrine despite the lack of rapport, eventually trekking back toward her woodshed. Despite being stuck in a fantasy realm, this place boasts a restroom that's high-end, even by 21st century standards, real MVP treatment from the author. Just as she finished her business, she suddenly caught a suspicious rustle from above and assumed it was a stray rat or some petty thief. Who would have guessed Ne would plummet from the ceiling? The two nearly collided, which would have been a total catastrophic disaster. He quickly channeled his mana to manifest a shimmering protective shield over Sujun. She managed to stick the landing, but it made the kid question her sanity. Is this some perverted creep stalking the girls' restroom? Before she could dial the authorities, Sujun's world shattered when she saw her beloved toilet had been pulverized thanks to this guy. It left Nee standing there dumbfounded. She didn't fear for her life, only for the plumbing talk about being a total eccentric weirdo. But first he had to evacuate the girl, so he quickly shoved the kid away while she was still mourning and sobbing over the broken porcelain. Only now did Nee notice the spectral dragon claw still death-gripping his leg like a curse. He grew paralyzed with fear that the Emperor could use it to track his exact coordinates. Immediately, Sujun realized that was a high-tier item belonging to her surplus dad's legendary pet. She started cosplaying as Sherlock Holmes to deduce if this guy was a legitimate villain or just a lost soul. But it seemed Nee was actually a decent person, fearing the child would be executed by the Emperor just for appearing in his palace. He used his magic to intimidate Sujun into making a lightning-fast exit. Though it had zero effect on her, she played along with an Oscar-worthy performance, acting frail and fragile with tears in her eyes. But suddenly, she ended up aiding the intruder by faking a stumble and touching the dragon claw with one hand, absorbing it whole. Since neither Nee's magic nor his aura felt aggressive, it proved he couldn't have any malicious intent toward her. This instantly made the boy question reality because the claw suddenly evaporated thanks to a kid who doesn't even know basic cleaning magic. Immediately, Sujun started throwing a tantrum, reaching out her hand for him to pull her up. Then they suddenly heard a voice calling the kid's name from the darkness. At this moment, Brown Hair was in a puddle of tears because she couldn't find Sujun anywhere. It was already way past bedtime, so she teamed up with Shri to sweep the entire palace grounds. Very quickly, he consoled Brown Hair, telling her to stay composed and that they would definitely track her down. This made the young maiden's heart skip a beat, and the whole romantic scene was witnessed by Sujun, who was lurking in the bushes. The kid wanted to give them some spicy privacy, but couldn't let Brown Hair spiral further. So, she poked her head out of the thick foliage. The moment she spotted the kid, Brown Hair was so overwhelmed she burst into tears of pure relief. She started nagging that no matter what time she had to hit the toilet, she must wake her up, making Shri chuckle. With the palace being so heavily fortified, how could anything happen to the princess to cause such a frantic panic? As soon as the words left his mouth, he got slapped by reality as he detected someone hiding in the shadows. Thinking Nee had been compromised, the kid jumped and held her breath in terror. Luckily, it was just the disgraced teacher who had been stripped of his rank to go home and farm. Seeing him made everyone recoil in surprise, wondering why this absolute fraud had suddenly resurfaced here. It made that guy's face turn crimson. He claimed he was just taking a stroll and happened to catch those two on a date forced to eat dog food. But there was no way Shri would buy that old man's lies. He got aggressive and used his magic to strike right at him, demolishing an entire wall, which left those two standing there in utter despair as they watched the restroom get leveled right before their very eyes. It made both of them collapse as if the apocalypse had arrived, making Shri wonder, is a toilet really that mesmerizing? But it made the guy feel insulted and livid. Just as his resentment started to simmer, the Emperor arrived with the old scholar. He was demanding to know what on earth was going on in his palace. Sujun was extremely anxious, fearing he was hunting for Nee and praying the boy had escaped far enough by now. But at this moment, the Emperor's eyes were hyper-focused on a single tear still clinging to the kid's lashes. He immediately became incandescent with rage, seizing Sujun and demanding to know who dared to make her cry. The old scholar grew suspicious and began to piece together the timeline from the intruder's breach. But following the trail here, the scent went cold while the kid was present, leading him to suspect Sujun absorbed the dragon claw to shield the fugitive. The kid immediately lied through her teeth, claiming she was just strolling when dust hit her eye, insisting she wasn't crying at all. In reality, she couldn't admit she lacked a latrine to vent her needs, so she wept out of pure, unadulterated humiliation. Naturally, that couldn't deceive the Emperor when he witnessed Sujun's heartbroken, devastated expression. But the kid still stuck firmly to her alibi and buried the truth until the bitter end, leaving the Emperor feeling incredibly salty that his own flesh and blood would lie to protect a total stranger. He redirected his lethal focus toward the two people standing nearby, shamelessly eavesdropping on the royal drama. Seeing everyone offer pathetic excuses about just happening to pass by only fueled his rising volcanic temper. He discarded Sujun to the side like a useless sack of laundry. He then issued a completely unhinged decree imposing a total blackout on anyone wandering out at midnight. Witnessing the Emperor so triggered that he sulked and stormed off, stomping his feet in a royal tantrum, Sujun anxiously wondered what kind of capital crime she had actually committed. In a shocking twist, the Emperor retreated to a flower garden to pout, acting exactly like a drama queen miffed at her husband. He became absolutely livid, manifesting his ice magic as he fixated on the fact that his daughter had let the intruder escape. The old scholar, still failing to read the room, blurted out the blunt suggestion that Sujun went soft because the intruder was a total hottie. But hearing the brat was handsome made the Emperor immediately compare the boy to himself, claiming the kid wasn't even 1/10 as attractive. Watching the emperor spiral into such an irrational, jealous fury, the old scholar began to break into a cold sweat. Finally, his ancient gears managed to shift into overdrive, suggesting that Sujun had actually been threatened. After all, the kid is a mere 3 years old, so she likely was coerced by that thug into aiding his getaway. Hearing that only served to make the emperor even more bloodthirsty. His ice magic instantly flared into fire magic as his blood hit boiling point, and he barked a command to the general. Sujun must be grinded to become an intermediate tier mage within a single half year. If she fails, 20 years of the general's salary will be forfeited. Furthermore, he deployed his elite shadow guards to serve as Sujun's personal high-security bodyguards. At the crack of dawn, the moment Cone fluttered his eyes open, he was forced to consume a terrifying liquid. It was a vile greenish sludge, but just as he brought the cup to his lips, he spotted Sujun strolling in. She was casually clutching a fresh apple in her hand. The physician reminded him that he must finish his medicinal breakfast before playing with the princess. The boy obediently followed the grim orders, squeezing his eyes shut and holding his nose as he tried to chug the filth. Sensing the concoction was borderline biohazard, Sujun lunged and snatched the bowl. Judging by the hue and the stench, it was a witch's poison brew. Horrified, she demanded to know what this death juice was. It looked exactly like dinosaur vomit. The old doctor, nursing a massive migraine and fed up with the interference, reclaimed his precious remedy from the kid's tiny hands because this was no ordinary potion. It was the essence of heart blood harvested from dragon hatchlings raised on a strictly controlled diet. He explained that consuming normal food would cause Cone's stomach to go into a violent seize, so this was the only thing, keeping the boy's pulse steady until now. Hearing this, Sujun was utterly bewildered. Could the poor kid really not even handle a simple bowl of porridge? But then she was hit with even more staggering news. His body was completely intolerant to any kind of fruit. This gave Sujun pause. She finally cracked the code on why Cone was perpetually knocking on death's door. It was a severe textbook case of vitamin C deficiency. Surviving on nothing but dragon blood 24/7 wouldn't provide the vital nutrients. It was actually accelerating the boy's decline. Meanwhile, Brownhair was desperately trying to block Sujun's biological parents, but the mother was assaulting her without mercy. While she and the girl's deadbeat father were busy looting all the high-end valuables in the room to claim as their own despite Brownhair's frantic protests. She was violently kicked aside by the greedy woman. Not satisfied with their own thievery, they egged on their 2 children to grab everything in sight since palace access was a once-a-year event. The 2 older siblings were carbon copies of their greedy parents, while only the youngest felt the weight of the sin and stood there trembling. Hearing Brownhair's desperate warning that these heirlooms belonged to Prince Cone and this theft would only doom Sujun, that plague-ridden old man delivered a brutal kick as a reward for her loyalty. He roared that everything would eventually be inherited by his daughter, so he had every right to pillage. Truly human avarice knows no bounds. Eyeing Brownhair, the old man even demanded Sujun hand her over, to be dragged back as a forced labor for his own household. Speak of the devil! The kid returned at the perfect moment, flanked by the doctor and the prince. The moment she clocked the power gap, she pathetically tried to play the family card, and scurried over to pat the head of the daughter she had abandoned years ago. Sujun instantly recoiled from those filthy hands, and seeing Brownhair beaten to a pulp, she snarled, ordering them all to vanish immediately, which caused the woman's face to turn purple with rage, as she lunged forward to teach the brat a lesson. But she was met with a bone-chillingly warm gaze from the doctor and the prince, sending her into a panic as she pulled back to save face, masking her fear with a fake smile. To hide her humiliation, desperately claiming she was just playing with her own child. Sujun shut her down, instantly telling her to zip it because she didn't even recognize these people. Cone, watching from the side, assumed the kid was just being petty since no one had visited for 3 years. He figured Sujun was drowning in misery from being used, so he seized the little girl's hands to console her and boldly stood as her shield, ordering the intruders out. But that old man, the biological father, refused to budge and shamelessly vented his malice on Brownhair, stomping forward aggressively, proclaiming his parental rights while one by one they tried to strike the little girl's face. Cone panicked, fearing the kid would get mangled, and reached out to intercept the blow. But Sujun was done playing nice, and her entire being erupted with a surge of uncontrollable magic, sending the old man crashing to the floor in pure terror, never imagining that in 3 years, Sujun had become a monster. But before the kid could go nuclear, the emperor stepped in to dispense his own brand of justice. And with a casual flick of his finger, the old man was bounced like a ball by magic, slamming face first into the tiles. At his arrival, Sujun's murderous rage began to simmer, and her volatile magic started to fade. He cast a lethal frozen gaze upon the lowlifes who dared to turn his palace into a circus. In that instant, her 2 useless brothers turned ghostly pale, so shaken they fumbled an ancient porcelain vase, shattering the priceless relic into 100 jagged shards, but that pocket change didn't even register with him. He only cared to investigate why Sujun was weeping so piteously. Facing this unprecedented display of paternal concern from the emperor, the kid broke down in tears, unable to even stammer out a coherent sentence. He didn't rush her, simply ruffling her hair and advising that if anyone ever bullied her again, she should just break them all while marveling internally at her growth. Her power had become so massive that had he arrived a second later, she might have leveled the room. Taking the reins of vengeance, he ordered the couple and those two brats to be seized and flogged as a warning. Even then, they were thick-skinned enough to beg Sujun to save her family, only making the emperor more repulsed. So he gave the cold command for the lashing to commence. With every crack of the whip, they couldn't stop shrieking insults at Sujun for being ungrateful. A heartless traitor and a wretched, disobedient child. Shri quickly tended to Brown Hair's injuries as her skin was mapped with brutal purple welts. Suddenly, the kid's third brother crept forward, his every movement a jagged mess of fear. He tried to force a pathetic smile to appease his sister while his entire body vibrated with tremors. This sight left Sujun paralyzed with shock because he looked exactly like her. When she was groveling to the emperor just to survive, seeing her brother kneeling to beg her made the kid's heart ache. She felt a wave of pity crying along with him. Those adults were monsters, but this child was innocent. When she first woke up in this world, Sujun's mother was working as a wet nurse for the wealthy, and she refused to give her milk to Sujun, hoarding it all for her employer's golden child instead. She only fed her own daughter a pathetic watery porridge that left the baby starving. Seeing both of his arrogant older brothers constantly tormenting their youngest sister, Sujun's third brother couldn't stand it, and being the only soul with a heart, reached out to protect her, using his teary puppy eyes to beg their mother for a drop of milk. It was total disgusting discrimination. She doted only on the greedy older sons. He didn't want the nourishment for himself, but wanted that milk for Sujun so the baby wouldn't wither away. Back then, it was only thanks to this boy acting cute every day to secure milk that Sujun even survived. So she can never ever erase it from her mind. The life-saving debt from that day. She wouldn't be standing here without that boy, so she resolved to bail out this pathetic family. She then tugged pleadingly on the emperor's sleeve to plead for mercy for her wretched kin, and seeing Sujun's resolute gaze, it seemed she wanted to let the trauma slide. He could do nothing but indulge her and turn a blind eye after witnessing that display. Prince Cone then put on his most dignified front and barked at them to get out. The doctor was stunned. The usually frail and timid prince was now radiating a dominant aura just like the emperor, but seeing those blushing cheeks while he stole glances at Sujun, he realized the kid was just trying to flex, to impress her. After the emperor made his exit, they immediately flashed their shameless true colors once again. This was a faster turnaround than a low-budget movie plot twist. Witnessing Sujun's desperate struggle to suppress her tears, the third brother scrambled forward to offer a frantic apology on their behalf. He stepped up and solemnly vowed that moving forward, he would personally ensure their parents stayed far from the palace and ceased their harassment. Even his other siblings were being tormented and commanded to hoard as much gold and shimmering jewelry as their greedy hands could seize using the pathetic excuse of medical funds. Truly, birds of a feather. Their father spewed the exact same line, claiming that if they were left with scars, it would be impossible to snag a wife later. That sent the sons into a frantic spiral, desperately looting every shiny relic in their path. Unable to stomach the blatant greed, Brown Hair tried to intervene, but knowing she'd just be a punching bag, Sujun restrained her. Just let them pillage the place. Consider this the final blood money for the labor of bringing her into this world. From this moment on, every single biological tie is scorched and severed. She then turned hesitantly to the prince. These stolen heirlooms should be put on her tab, and she promised to repay the debt later. Watching them haul away every scrap of wealth, every family member greedily hoarding spoils to take home. Maid May, watching from her underground abyss, feel a pang of pity through her clairvoyance. She once believed being neglected made her the most tragic soul alive, but she never imagined Sujun's life was such a nightmare. Seeing May strain her mystical power, her attendant quickly intervened because it was taking a brutal toll on her fragile vessel. But May clasped those hands to soothe her, declaring that, since she began channeling mana, she hadn't suffered a single setback. This blindfold was a direct Imperial order, otherwise, May's vision could pierce even the deepest horizons. The servant was terrified that if word of the child tapping into her forbidden power reached the Emperor, it would be a one-way ticket to execution. But in this subterranean void, there were only the two of them. If she didn't snitch and the servant kept quiet, who would know? Today marked the day of royal amnesty for the kin of the foster princesses to enter the inner sanctum for a visit. Among all the sisters, May envied Pan the most. Even if she wasn't the favorite, she enjoyed top-tier luxury, and her entire family showered that child with genuine affection. Suddenly, her vision snapped onto a familiar figure, one that looked identical to General. May was struck with absolute horror. That child was confirmed deceased, yet here she was standing tall and proud. Meanwhile, the maid who used to serve Jen was now acting like a complete doormat to this mysterious child. Turns out, this wasn't some arrogant brat, but actually her biological older sister. The maid expected a massive reward, but unexpectedly, the girl discarded her like trash and ordered her immediate execution, to tie up every loose end, leaving the maid screaming in agony for her role in framing General. She perished because the madam ordered her to bring the sister in as a puppet replacement, only to be backstabbed for her loyalty. Witnessing that cold-blooded betrayal made Maid tremble with visceral bone-deep fear. At this time, Sujun and Cone were trapped in a water affinity class, but they could only manage a few pathetic splashes. Even though the general suggested the two kids go rest so he could finally clock out, the prince insisted he was still ready for more despite being absolutely drenched in sweat. Both of them were fueled by the same burning ambition they needed to become absolute powerhouses, to protect the precious souls in their lives. Seeing their relentless stubbornness left the general speechless, wondering who had injected them with such shonen-style passion. A legendary general was now reduced to a glorified babysitter. He'd rather be on the front lines. Death would be a mercy compared to this. Watching their fiery determination looking like the MCs of an epic anime made Pan wonder. She couldn't grasp what trauma had sparked this fire. Even though she knew the truth, May played dumb and claimed she had no clue. But watching their grueling training sessions was actually top-tier entertainment for the girls. Furthermore, Sujin's panda beast was still kickin'. Turns out, as long as the master hasn't bit the dust, it can be resummoned in all its adorable glory, and yearned to possess a mystical companion of her own. So she dived headfirst into their arcane training, leaving Pan sitting there in total isolation. May was clearly no ordinary child, possessing the raw talent to manipulate matter with pure telekinesis. Even the water basin that the two kids struggled to nudge was a mere toy in her hands. It transformed into a hovering liquid pillar, making the general marvel at how this sleeper talent eclipsed everyone else. But at the end of the day, a genius who skips the grind is as useless as a commoner. She lost her grip on the pillar and it collapsed directly onto the general's skull, giving the veteran an unexpected bath in the sweltering heat. May quickly bowed in a frantic apology. Since she is visually impaired, it was impossible for anyone to stay mad at her. The mishap turned into a comedy set that made the kids howl with laughter, while the general could only use his magic to flash dry his uniform. After all, these children were the emperor's precious bloodline. He couldn't reprimand them or dish out a punishment, but seeing those innocent faces, the old man could only swallow his pride. May then confessed that she was desperate for a magic beast, so she wanted to master the craft instantly. It was logical since both Sujin and Cone already had theirs, and Pan had received prior tutoring. But May seemingly had no clue how the summoning mechanics actually worked yet. He let the kid lead the explanation, so she recounted her childbirth journey. At first, it was pure agony, but the second time she was a pro, so it hurt less, leaving everyone in awkward silence. They didn't know how to process that trauma dump, leaving the two clueless kids with a massive question mark. They couldn't tell where the logic failed or if they were doing it right, so the general intervened to correct them. It's not about biological birth. After cultivation energy is channeled, it was his oversight for not teaching Sujin the fundamental theory. Mana manifests only when the spiritual gauge hits the limit. The ritual relies on the physical body as a catalyst to forge a corresponding magic beast. From that point, one utilizes intent palms and digits to command the magic. From the general's palm, an incredibly adorable tiger suddenly materialized. Though it looked like a plushie, this was merely a scaled-down simulation. In reality, the beast is gargantuan, just like the Emperor's guardian. After realizing only she birthed a beast, Sujin felt mortified. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the late Princess Jen's estate, the barrier had been breached with a massive hole. Shri stepped up to take the fall for the security lapse. Evidently, villains had exploited the family visiting day to infiltrate the sanctum. Despite the chaos, he still felt a stroke of luck that the threat didn't reach Sujin. Otherwise, his head would have been rolling across the floor long ago. Naturally, the Emperor didn't execute Shri because Lok Lok was a global superpower. It's no surprise. Other empires coveted its throne, though the true cataclysm wouldn't strike for another 7 years. So he could breathe easy, knowing these pests weren't high-level threats. What was alarming was their target, the princesses, as the enemies surely suspected the anomalous existence of one of them. In this climate, if the fact that Sujin can devour magic ever leaked, it would trigger a massive shockwave like the old days. If it's too much, dump it on the general. He commanded him to forge the kids into weapons so they could defend their own lives. He gave the green light to ignore their royal status and train them ruthlessly, assuming he had to transform these little girls into legendary heroines. But the old scholar, observing the Emperor's current gaze, felt he was drowning in his own childhood memories. Specifically, when the late Emperor had just breathed his last, the Emperor looked helpless, then tears falling as he stood paralyzed, unable to change fate. Back in the present, Sujun was using Pan's restroom in the dead of night. In the downpour, brown hair held an umbrella for her to handle business. Meanwhile, Pan used her own mana to weave a top-tier designer raincoat. Watching that small figure trudge away, Pan wondered, with basic self-cleansing magic in the curriculum, why on earth did Sujin refuse to learn the life hack? Turns out that DIY raincoat wasn't an exclusive look. Even the Emperor was hopping on the trend. They intercepted 5 intruders who had infiltrated the palace, and now the general and the old scholar were breaking them. Not only did he not execute them to tie up loose ends, but he also commanded the assassins to be deported back to their home nations safely. Of course, it wasn't an act of mercy or pity, but simply because he wanted to troll those foreign kings for his own amusement. Witnessing his precious daughter brave the deluge in the dead of night like a stray plus, confirming the humiliating intel that they were borrowing Princess Pan's latrine, left our clueless emperor utterly shell-shocked to discover that his own imperial palace lacked even a single dedicated sanctuary to answer the call of nature. He felt a pang of guilt, but maintained his icy facade, decreeing that a toilet be installed every 3 meters throughout the palace. Talk about a cracked solution. But he didn't stop there. He threatened to fire the general unless he immediately taught Sujin cleansing magic to match her elite peers. The general felt the heat and could only salute prepping the basic spell. Yet, instead of being annoyed, he felt like a total failure for neglecting the 2 rookies. Finding herself the center of attention, May flexed that her attendants had mastered that trick for her ages ago. This left Sujin dying of embarrassment as the only one out of the loop, making Cone feel deeply sympathetic toward her. Since the kid previously had no place to handle her business and was the only novice left, the general promised her a private tutoring session later. As for the current curriculum, the lesson shifted to manifesting magic beasts in the physical realm. The moment he finished the lecture, both the bunny and the panda evaporated into thin air. He commanded them both to stay calm and instructed them to utilize the specific technique the general had drilled into them to resummon their mystical companions. Even Pan and May, who were still beastless, were required to practice the flow and learn the art of control. After putting his entire soul into it, the prince was finally able to manifest the bunny with ease. A total success on his very first attempt. He earned a promotion to the big leagues, which involved specialized rank training. On a blood-soaked battlefield, that adorable bunny would be nothing more than a snack for the enemy. So it required rigorous training to sharpen its instincts and haul ass to safety more effectively. But turning around, he noticed Sujin's face was flushed beet red from the sheer strain of overexerting her core. She still possessed zero control over her volatile, overflowing mana. The kid's magic beast is a savage panda. If honed correctly, it could literally tear an enemy's head off, no cap. But judging by her current struggle, she desperately needed a crash course in mana stabilization, before even thinking about moving to advanced combat systems. Just then, the chatter of the kids was drowned out by a radiant magical glow. It turns out by simply following the basic blueprints, May was able to summon her own mystical beast, a butterfly, which is a legendary high-tier crowd control type. In the entire empire, only Shri was elite enough to possess one. Nobody anticipated a child like May could harbor such a rare beast, especially one pulsating with such a heavy aura. He cast a cleansing spell on the girl and couldn't help but offer her a reward for her insane talent. But he didn't miss the chance to warn her that until she achieved full mastery, she must keep that butterfly on a tight leash. Suddenly, May called out to Sujin. Since the kid had dubbed the panda a mere puppy, May followed the trend and casually named her butterfly Little Butterfly. Everyone was rocking a fresh guardian now except for Pan, who still hadn't manifested a damn thing. Noticing the girl's mounting anxiety and visible distress, the general immediately stepped in to reassure her that there was absolutely no need to spiral. Thinking back, those two, along with the Emperor, were hailed as the Empire's triple geniuses for summoning beasts at age 10. But these kids were straight up broken, unlocking god-tier abilities at a mere 3 or 4 years old. Thankfully, Pan was still somewhat normal. If she were that cracked too, he'd probably have a midlife crisis. Suddenly, Sujin collapsed to the turf, clutching her midsection in agony as it bloated with volatile energy. Despite the general's expert guidance and precise instructions, she still couldn't stabilize her magic beast like a functioning human being. In that tense moment, the Emperor descended riding a monstrously powerful magic beast of legendary proportions. He gave the cold-blooded command for it to go ahead and devour the child. At that instant, everyone was losing their minds in pure hysteria, especially Sujin, who was so terrified she nearly lost control of her bladder. Luckily, in that do-or-die heartbeat, staring down the jaws of certain death, Sujin finally managed to summon the panda the right way. The instant it manifested, the panda's eyes were consumed by a void of pure bloodlust. The little dragon was paralyzed with terror. Immediately, the panda evolved into a literal kung fu panda. It lunged forward on all fours and delivered a strike that sent the little dragon spiraling, stunned by how ferocious that guardian truly was. The Emperor stood toe-to-toe with Sujun to gauge if she'd finally mastered the summoning arts like the others. Only then did the kid realize he was merely training her by commanding the dragon. She beamed with joy, making the Emperor's heart swell. He couldn't even suppress the genuine rare smile forming on his stoic face. He informed Sujun that a visitor was waiting and hoisted the little dragon to lead the way. Watching the kid trot after her father, Kon also scrambled to follow their lead. Once the crowd vanished, Pan finally let her mask slip, drowning in envy because Sujun received the Emperor's personal touch. Suddenly, the prince's little bunny abandoned its master and clung onto Pan instead. Startled, both of them turned toward the general, demanding a logical explanation for this anomaly. He channeled his mana to investigate and sensed a mysterious ancient presence within the child. Deep inside, there was a glowing blue stone radiating immense power. Seeing him grinning like a madman, she wondered what was so funny to this old fossil. But the general clearly intended to keep this secret buried, breaking into a cold sweat as he hid the truth. However, nothing escapes May's perception. It turned out the person hunting for Sujun in such a panic was actually her third-born brother, looking completely disheveled. While Brown Hair wept uncontrollably, the boy stood there hesitating, paralyzed by not knowing if he should approach the kid or seek out another savior for their family. Incredibly, it involved their parents. Those two parasites had returned from the palace and trashed everything in a fit of rage. Worse, they stormed Brown Hair's home, assaulted her family, and illegally seized the property. Hearing that news made the kid's expression go completely dark with a murderous fury. She had to draw blood from her lip just to endure the surge of raw anger. Brown Hair fell to her knees, pleading for Sujun to rescue her suffering family from those monsters. Seeing her cry such bitter tears left the kid absolutely heart-wrenched and reeling. She was stuck in a bind. If she petitioned the Emperor, he would undoubtedly find the drama beneath his royal status. Furthermore, she refused to spend her entire existence as a puppet relying on that man for every single favor. She loathed her own current weakness, feeling utterly useless and unable to take direct action. But after stealing her resolve, the kid decided to confront the Emperor to demand an exit from the palace to settle this score. However, she was quickly intercepted by Kon because the situation was far from ordinary. Normally, a commoner shouldn't be able to manifest such high-tier elite magic. But every single princess possesses an innate god-tier talent that defies all logic. A light bulb went off as she realized there was something fishy about their sudden power. Magic potential is one thing, but mastering it with such ease is nearly impossible for a toddler. The reason the nobility dominates is because of the absolute purity of their bloodline. It's as if the arcane arts have been woven into their very DNA for countless generations, and passed down to every heir. When the kids first arrived, the Emperor sowed a seed by fusing his own sovereign blood into the veins of these foster children. Technically, they now share his exalted lineage, though that seemed like a mere distraction from leaving the palace. But there exists a lethal unwritten law. Unless you ascend to the rank of mage, you are forbidden from leaving, or you'll be sent to meet your ancestors. This revelation shattered the kid's world. If she was a gilded prisoner, how could she ever save Brown Hair? Just as despair set in, both Pan and May suddenly materialized from the shadows. And they were ready to back the kid up. Unlike May, who was under a 3-hour lockdown, the Maid was perfectly free to traverse the grounds without being intercepted by guards. Hearing that May would deploy her own personal agents to help made the kid incredibly emotional. Even Pan jumped in to offer sanctuary, suggesting Brown Hair's parents stay at her family's private fishing estate. Sujun was so overwhelmed by the support she pulled her sisters into a hug. Unlike her past life, she finally had a real squad. The report of the third brother's arrival was thoroughly vetted. It was confirmed those two lowlifes had occupied the house and broken a man's leg. Hearing this made the old scholar's body tremble with fury. They were truly dragging the kid's reputation through the dirt. He immediately scanned the room to see if the Emperor would intervene, knowing Brown Hair held a sacred place in Sujun's heart. But he didn't utter a single syllable, just stared pensively at the documents as if he'd been paralyzed for who knows 200 years. Unable to restrain his frustration any longer, his fists clenched in white-knuckled anger. The old scholar observed the shift and realized the truth in a heartbeat. It turns out the Emperor was stubbornly waiting for the kid to come crawl and beg him for help, but she was nowhere to be found. This left the man completely speechless at his own monarch's petty behavior. But fortunately, deep down he still possessed a shred of human emotion. Years ago, when Empress Tuyetni breathed her last, the Emperor became as frigid as a glacier. Fortunately, the Empire was in desperate need of a king back then, while Kon was still far too fragile. Only his son's frail condition could force the heartbroken tyrant to pull himself back from the brink of madness. But it seems there's no cause for alarm, because now the dad is just sporting a sulky pout since his daughter snubbed him 2,000 years later. Yet the Emperor maintained that same terrifying stone face, making them both shudder with unease. Shri had no choice but to roast his old friend by summoning the Shadow Guard to check on Sujun's status while her dad was busy waiting until his very bones rot away. As it happened, those little troublemakers were all huddled together watching a live broadcast tracking every move of the elite rescue squad, dispatched to liberate Brownhair's parents from those parasitic monsters. Exerting her own latent power, May acted bashful since it was her first time flexing her strength. She worried her radar was glitching. Watching the action unfold just like a modern-day livestream made Sujun hyper-excited and craved that level of dominance. By now, Shri's reconnaissance crow had managed to intercept the kids' secret frequency and was retreating toward the throne room at breakneck speed. Meanwhile, they remained blissfully unaware, still engrossed in the high-stakes drama while virtually munching on popcorn. At this moment, Tan Yang stood tall to demand absolute justice for Brownhair's parents. But those two were truly beyond redemption, disregarding authority and trying to use a crude stick to intimidate a mage. They bullied her, assuming her outfit marked her as a mere servant, but they had picked a fight with the wrong goddess. Because Tan Yang was a certified powerhouse and actually wielded formidable magic. That menacing purple-flamed aura immediately invaded those two's bodies, causing wisps of smoke to rise as they shrieked in soul-crushing agony. The third child, witnessing his parents' torment, looked absolutely devastated. But those phantom flames didn't actually inflict direct physical damage to their wretched bodies. At this moment, Sujun was being a total nosy Parker, wondering what Tan Yang did to trigger such a panic, so May dragged them into their inner world. Her entire silhouette surged with a terrifying magical current. Seeing her surplus parents getting hammered by intense psychic lightning, the kid's eyes sparkled with delight. This was her very first time witnessing the majesty of high-tier illusion magic. It left Cone floored. Seeing May's true potential made him realize he was falling dangerously behind. Even Pan couldn't stop gushing over the geniuses in her circle, but they failed to notice the crow from earlier had already vanished. The second he returned, Shri quickly downloaded the intel and reported directly to the Emperor. May's seal was rapidly disintegrating, and she was currently broadcasting her vision to the kids like a cable TV premiere. This made a man who was usually stone cold act like he was sitting on a bed of needles, breaking into a frantic cold sweat. Meanwhile, the kids were still gossiping about the sheer scale of Tan Yang's power. Why would someone so gifted be a lowly maid? Even May was in the dark. Despite her being a close confidant, it made the kid curious about the true bond between these two and the real reason they were entombed underground. Just as the livestream reached its climax, a jagged ice pillar suddenly erupted and shattered the psychic screen. Turns out, after receiving the alert, the Emperor rushed over to stop his kids from meddling. Then Sujun suddenly caught a glimpse of May's eyes. They were hemorrhaging blood and her sacred blindfold had slipped off. While everyone panicked, not understanding the toll on the child's body, May herself was oblivious because she felt zero pain. Suddenly, the Emperor blurred into the room and delivered a precise strike that knocked May unconscious. The sudden move made the kid sitting beside her jump out of her skin. He scooped the little girl up and didn't forget to penalize the other troublemakers with 20 grueling laps around the yard. Sujun alone was slapped with a staggering 30 laps. He departed with the cold air, not forgetting to command a sentry to stay behind and supervise the kids. It shook them to their core. They were in utter disbelief, their faces turning ghostly pale. Who could possibly endure this agony? The Emperor gently unfastened the girl's blindfold. Though he felt a pang for her, he remained icy and blunt, stating she deserved it for overestimating her limits. Yet his hands never ceased channeling healing mana into May's eyes. Witnessing this scene, the general couldn't help but marvel. Time truly flies. His mind drifted back to the events of 3 years ago. In a desperate bid to conceal Sujun's anomalous power, the Emperor personally braved the torrential rain with his inner circle to track down other suitable children for adoption. Looking at Jen and Pan now, everyone was awestruck that he would go to such extreme lengths for Sujun's sake. But that wasn't enough. Just as he prepared to expand his search, it seemed the heavens answered by sending a woman to obstruct their path. Materializing from thin air, she had the audacity to call the Emperor directly by his name. The sheer boldness of it startled everyone present. They couldn't fathom what kind of monster she was fearing. She was some bone demon, but it turns out she was an old acquaintance of Empress Tuyet-Ni. Hearing that name made him freeze in his tracks. Everyone held their breath because since the Empress's passing, her name had become a forbidden taboo. Yet the woman standing before them from the legendary Barrier Clan, a titan in her field, was now confronting them head-on. Realizing he had urgent business to settle, the Emperor ordered the unit to escort the two children back. Only the general was granted permission to remain by his side. Swiftly, Tan Yang utilized high-tier teleportation magic to whisk him away to their destination. The two were transported to an ethereal dimension blanketed in golden autumn leaves. But the shock here wasn't some wandering deer. Instead, the inhabitants were acting far more mindless than forest animals. The general couldn't help but be intensely curious, wondering what sort of bizarre affliction had gripped these people. But Tan Yang ignored the chaos as if she were far too accustomed to the sight. They were merely trapped under the influence of a low-level spell. Hearing this, the Emperor deduced the truth instantly. The culprit behind this was likely a mere child. Because judging by the behavior of those dazed villagers like infants sucking their thumbs, they were clearly under a primitive influence. Hearing Tan Yang confirm his suspicions made the general jump in surprise. He hadn't anticipated this because even if the spell was technically low level, this child was way too god tier to be able to brainwash an entire village simultaneously. Without wasting another word, Tan Yang unleashed her magic to shatter the enchantment for the villagers, but they weren't conscious for even 3 seconds before they relapsed into being high as a kite. It made the general jump out of his skin, unable to comprehend what kind of dark sorcery was at play. But the Emperor had already pieced it together. Surely the reason she led him here was to deal with the supernatural child. When she ushered the two of them inside, they found a woman reclining on the bed, also ensnared by the spell. That was Tan Yang's mother, and the one weaving the magic was none other than her own sister. But more accurately, it was the unborn child still residing in the mother's womb. This was an absolutely unprecedented case because even before taking her first breath, she already commanded a reservoir of power that could exert such a massive influence. It forced the Emperor to recall Empress Tuyetni's final plea while she was still drawing breath. She hadn't petitioned for vanity or immense fortune, only praying that after her light faded, he would honor their bond and shield her kin during their darkest hour. Bound by that promise, the Emperor stepped in to intervene, but only this once. He channeled his mana to probe the child's status. When his magic manifested a complex array of arcane symbols, he commanded Tan Yang to wait outside. She was strictly prohibited from entering the chamber without his explicit royal permission. Watching her exit left the general completely floored. With just 2 men, how are they supposed to handle a woman in labor? Normally, he's the high and mighty sovereign, yet now he proposed the insane idea of delivering the baby together, sending the general into a panic. As a lifelong bachelor with 0 experience, how on earth was he supposed to know the first thing about delivering a child? But it had to be him, because Tan Yang was a clan member. Remaining in close proximity would corrupt her soul as well. Furthermore, regardless of the Emperor's supreme status and absolute power, there was his lethal curse. He was strictly forbidden from touching any grown woman. So all these taxing noble duties were dumped directly onto the general's unfortunate head. Without a second of hesitation, he hoisted the laboring woman up. The general had a massive question mark hovering over him. As a bachelor, if rumors leaked, he'd never find a wife. But before he could even begin her entire physical form, suddenly, erupted in a purple magical glow, it was the unborn child's primal violent resistance. Without uttering a word, the Emperor grabbed his old pal and shoved him directly into the line of fire. While the general screamed internally as a proxy for the mother, outside Tan Yang was drowning in anxiety, completely blind to the chaos within. But since she was strictly ordered to stay out, she could only stand there paralyzed with fear. Waiting until a sharp cry finally pierced the air, she rushed in to find the infant safely born, even though she had only been in the womb for a mere 7 months. Out of respect for his late empress and his need for foster heirs, the Emperor offered the child the palace's protection, absolute facts. That baby was May, the very soul the Emperor personally helped deliver that year. Upon seeing Tan Yang return, the Emperor immediately seized the girl to collect the favor, not forgetting to drop a lethal warning. If you value her life, it is best to never teach her that forbidden clan sorcery. Hearing that, persisting with the clan's specific magic could cause May to suffer a fatal mana backlash and explode. Tan Yang couldn't believe her ears and instantly collapsed to her knees in shock, vowing that she would never dare to tutor May in those forbidden arts again. Even though the Emperor permitted the child to learn standard magic, out of sheer pity for her sister, Tan Yang accepted the burden of protecting her for life. Truthfully, it was a heavy cross to bear. She followed them back then, solely to stay by her sister's side, volunteering as a mere maid, forfeiting her prestigious position as the chosen saintess of her entire clan. Just gazing upon her made the general feel an overwhelming wave of sympathy. Meanwhile, the little brats were enduring their grueling punishment, but only 10 laps in. While Sujun was still going full throttle, both Cone and Apan were already gassed out to the point of collapse, dragging their feet with agonizing difficulty. Luckily, the 2 kids had a buff from recovery magic cast by the old scholar who watched over them with strict determination. But on the flip side, he realized Cone's stamina had surprisingly leveled up. It seemed he'd made massive gains. Shri kept hyping them up, shouting, fighting, fighting, while also being floored by Sujun's freakish endurance. He knew kids were bundles of energy, but he didn't expect her to outrun a grown man, because while the other 2 had the scholar's support buffs, this girl's unique constitution meant she had to rely purely on her own grit. Despite the sweat, her face remained tough and resolute. She definitely has a legendary future ahead. At this time, the Emperor also arrived to inspect the progress of the kids' suffering. Seeing they weren't at the finish line yet, he ordered the general to give them a little motivation. Even though it felt like a crime, since they were just tiny kids looking into his intense, unyielding eyes, no one dared to defy the sovereign's cold command. The general immediately summoned his colossal, terrifying lion. It sent a shockwave of fear through them, making them nearly lose their bladders on the spot. Willing or not, they had to haul ass and sprint. Finally, 2 hours later, they completed their laps. Both Cone and Pan were wheezing as if they were literally about to meet their maker. But then they heard of the Emperor's even more sadistic decree: 20 laps every single day. Their souls practically ascended from their bodies, from dodging bullets in the womb to running marathons out here. Seeing Sujun still trailing behind alone, he barked at the kid to hurry up and move those legs, to finish alongside her peers. But the reason she wasn't done was her 10 extra laps talk about a brutal handicap. Yet he wanted to push her to the absolute breaking point, letting his pet snap at Sujun's heels. But ignoring the fatigue, she only used the threat to force Brown Hair to run with her. The kid immediately ignited with sheer determination. She just kept sprinting from the magic beast's fangs, only worried that Brown Hair would collapse because of her. This left the 3 officials completely stunned, not knowing whether to praise Sujun for being too tanky or too tragic. But even that didn't satisfy the Emperor's high standards, and he immediately issued a new order. Later, she'll be forced to grind 40 laps a day to satisfy his elite standards. Although it's for her own benefit, ensuring she evolves into a top-tier powerhouse in the future, in the eyes of the public, he's nothing but a bloodthirsty, cold-hearted tyrant who's ruthlessly brutalizing his own precious daughter. He worked her to the bone, yet that night he still lurked in the shadows to monitor the kid's recovery. Normal adults hit their breaking point after 7 hours of cardio, let alone a toddler. Yet surprisingly, Sujun possesses superhuman stamina. With every 10-lap set, she continues to shave down her personal record until finally she clocks in at a mere hour. Even elite warriors back in their prime might struggle to keep pace with a monster kid like this. The Emperor caressed his daughter's sleeping face, finally showing a flicker of paternal affection and praise, but just when the moment felt wholesome, he flashed his sadistic side, yearning to see exactly where the girl's absolute limit lies. At this moment, a desperate voice suddenly called out to Nee. Turns out it was the 18th prince. But strangely, this child was mangled with wounds and collapsed right into his protective arms. It turns out the 18th wasn't a prince at all, but a princess forced into a male disguise just to survive, but her secret had been cruelly exposed by the 4th prince. The Empire of Kai is home to 18 princes. Of course, the king himself was the monster who slaughtered his own 9 biological daughters. Recalling the time before the 18th was born, Nee was commanded to verify the infant's gender. But seeing the mother clutching her newborn and weeping piteously, he felt a profound sense of empathy. So when the king returned to pressure him, Nee shielded the mother and child by reporting a false son, but claimed the infant had a frail constitution and wouldn't survive long. Although the king saw no utility in the child since it was an heir, he permitted the baby to live. From that day on, Nee became the sole guardian standing between life and death for the 2 of them. But that fragile secret exploded when the 4th prince discovered the 18th was actually a girl and marked her for death, hunting her down like prey. He even threatened to massacre her innocent mother and her entire lineage, leaving the 18th absolutely paralyzed with terror. She huddled against the younger one in her arms, trembling to the core. Nee reassured her that as long as he stood his ground, no one would lay a finger on the child. But luck was a cruel mistress. In no time, the 4th prince managed to corner them. He wore a deceitful, sweet-talking mask, whispering that if she wanted to keep her secret, she should step closer. But the child was petrified and begged him not to expose her, causing the 4th to lose his cool. He shrieked out a lethal order for her to quickly surrender her life to his blade. Unable to wait a second longer, he prepared to seize the 18th and drag her away like a stray animal. But Nee wasn't about to let that atrocity happen on his watch and immediately blocked his path. His hands concealed behind his back were secretly gathering a surge of magic. Seeing his irritatingly brilliant younger brother suddenly standing in his way made him hesitate, but he didn't miss the chance to mock Nee for being a failure who couldn't even summon a magic beast. Turns out that disgraced teacher was actually a mole planted by this 4th prince. But even then, he acted like a top-tier powerhouse when he only managed to summon a beast at 17. Yet here he is, shamelessly trying to flex on everyone. Being looked down upon by a mere brat made him see red, and he immediately summoned his magic beast. Turns out his grand summon was just a pathetic, filthy little vermin. Nee quickly shielded the 18th, stepping forward to act as her ultimate bodyguard. He warned that the king wouldn't let this slide, but it seemed the 4th had orchestrated a flawless trap, deploying a barrier so no outsiders would witness the slaughter. Because not long ago, the Emperor of Lok Lok had executed 3 princes. The 4th planned to use that as the perfect cover to murder the 2 siblings and frame the rival emperor for the crime. The fourth had long craved Nei's death because Nei was more gifted and favored by the king, aiming to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but he never expected that. The arcane energy in Nei's palms was already surged and primed for total destruction. The fourth assumed Nei had finally surrendered and was reaching out to embrace his inevitable demise. But he lunged forward at Godspeed, propelled by a massive magical burst that buffed his agility to the absolute limit. That velocity was so terrifying even a seasoned fighter like the fourth felt rattled. Nei was moving faster than a vengeful phantom. Nei stuck to the scripted alibi that the Emperor of Lok Lok was the true culprit and he was merely a witness. With a fist cloaked in dark magic, he buried a punch into the fourth's gut, forcing him to vomit blood as his heart suffered a critical rupture. He died in utter disbelief that a mere 7-year-old child possessed such monstrous power. His eyes remained frozen wide in shock. Nei leaned down and kindly closed the man's eyelids so he could begin his journey to the underworld in peace. Witnessing this, the 18th didn't just feel relief. She was paralyzed with terror of the savior before her and collapsed to the floor. He seized the kid's hand and strictly commanded her to testify that an assassin had executed the fourth. It had absolutely nothing to do with them, and besides that, piece of human trash was never truly her brother. So there was no reason for tears. It was far better to prune him now and eliminate any future threat to their lives. Nei then immediately slammed a fist into his own chest, carving out a fresh wound as an alibi to make the bloody drama even more undeniable so no one would dare get suspicious of the truth. And so the 2 siblings played the crocodile tears card, wailing for help and sobbing with theatrical despair. This chilling performance was honestly more convincing than any high-budget Hollywood blockbuster. Upon receiving the report, the king was so tilted he began smashing furniture in a blind, chaotic rage. He immediately began interrogating the 2 siblings about the exact gruesome details of the slaughter. Nei confidently spun a web of lies claiming they were playing together when they heard the fourth scream and rushed to investigate. He swore that upon arrival, they witnessed the guy locked in a death match with a man in black. The 18th quickly chimed in, sobbing as she started fabricating how the shadowy assassin wanted to murder them both, but thanks to Nei's heroics, they narrowly escaped the blade. Seeing his child on the brink of death, that man didn't offer a single word of paternal comfort. Instead, he delivered a brutal kick to the 18th's stomach, making Nei's blood boil with protective worry. He secretly channeled healing magic to numb the agonizing pain for his sister. But he couldn't deceive the green scholar, who grew suspicious because the prince's palaces were miles apart. There was no logic for the fourth to be near Nei's estate. Plus, there was a ceiling barrier, and the glaring hole was, if a 17-year-old was slaughtered, how did a 7-year-old walk away? But that wasn't nearly enough to corner a genius like Nei. He replied with stone-cold confidence that the barrier was likely set by the assassin to trap them, then faked coughing up blood from internal ruptures. He claimed he only survived the encounter because the assassin had already been heavily depleted and wounded by the fourth's final desperate stand. But no matter how many plot holes existed, the king was simply too salty to think straight. He chose to believe it was all the Emperor of Lok Lok's sabotage. According to Nei's narrative, it appeared the assassin was hunting the royal heirs to cripple the throne. So the king didn't waste a second mourning the fourth. Instead, he felt a stroke of luck that a top-tier talent like Nei was still on the board and alive. He let the investigation die, but forced Nei into a specialized high-intensity training program to guarantee his survival in the upcoming conflict. This made the boy wary. He didn't expect the matter to be swept under the rug so easily, but it turns out the king wanted to push Nei into a 3-month hellish crash course to pass the intermediate magic exam. The boy was floored. That was essentially a death sentence, since the world knew he hadn't manifested a magic beast yet. Turns out, this old fox planned to play dirty by harvesting someone else's magic for Nei to wield. And the endgame for the fateful day of the exam was to exploit that opening to assassinate the prince and princess of Lok Lok. Hearing of the theft of magic beasts made the scholar turn ghostly pale with dread, shivering at the mere thought of the ritual because that procedure is not nearly as clean as it sounds. It's a barbaric ritual that forces the mage to remain conscious while the magic beast is violently ripped from their soul. The process is excruciatingly painful, yet they are forced to keep the victim alive, so they can suffer a fate far more horrific than a simple death. But the nightmare doesn't end there. Grafting someone else's magic beast into your own spirit is also a process of absolute mind-shattering agony. The old scholar gazed at the king and was left utterly speechless. Back then, he had usurped the throne from the former emperor's grasp. Now he expects his own flesh and blood to endure the same harrowing agony he once suffered. But it seems this green-clad scholar is totally brainwashed, believing the king can do no wrong, if he does see Rule 1. After all, he bore that torment in solitude without a single complaint. Perhaps this time with the old fox's aid, Nei's suffering will be mitigated. Meanwhile, Sujun had a bespoke latrines installed every 3 meters. She found it life-changing and no longer had to endure the torture of holding it in. But upon entering, she was floored. She didn't expect the emperor to go full overkill the entire throne, for her business was plated in blinding gold. Recalling when Shri was first deployed here, he formally introduced himself as Sujun's elite personal guardian. From that very second onward, he bashfully unveiled the masterpiece the emperor had poured so much effort into for his little princess, a top-tier designer porcelain throne that put 5-star hotels to absolute shame. For the first time ever, Sujun laid eyes on such opulence, it was honestly more glamorous than her actual bedroom. But extreme luxury has a creepy price. Suddenly, the toilet spoke, welcoming the guest to the experience, which made Sujun break into a frantic cold sweat and immediately bolt out of that haunted restroom. Right then and there, she decided she'd rather crash Pan's place than deal with that golden nightmare again. After lightening her load and feeling revitalized, Sujun found herself with free time and decided to grind her skills. Since her mana control was still shaky, she practiced with relentless focus to reach a level of absolute perfection. Arcane energy surged from her tiny palms, instantly swirling and molding the water to her will. But that dedicated training session didn't go unnoticed by a certain royal stalker. Cone was busted in his room by the physician. Instead of resting, he'd snuck out to act like a love-struck simp forgetting his meds. Yet the prince snatched the bowl of medicine and chugged it without flinching, his eyes locked on Sujun, which left the physician stunned. Normally, it took a grueling half-hour to choke down a bowl of dragon blood, but he downed it with superhuman speed. But witnessing Sujun standing right there, the old man finally grasped the deep-seated motivation driving the boy. Having just pinky promised to return to bed, Cone got greedy and wanted to train with her, so he dismissed the physician, ordering him to retreat first. Unlike his previous disdain, the old man now held our Sujun in the highest regard. Thanks to the girl's influence, the prince's health was improving by leaps and bounds every single day. But that disgraced teacher was more persistent than a parasite. He lurked in the brush and popped out, spewing venomous lies to blame Sujun for his unemployment, slandering the child as a cold, calculating manipulator pulling everyone's strings. When he heard the absurd claim that Sujun had manipulated Cone into assaulting his own tutor, the physician feigned total belief in the deception. This made the villainous teacher celebrate with a truly wicked, triumphant smirk. At this time, the emperor was deep in slumber when he was suddenly dragged into a parallel dimension. Inside that void, a mysterious girl was trying to rouse him. She was hunting for him, desperate to track down her nemesis and settle a blood debt. But hearing the emperor refer to himself with the royal "we," it finally clicked. He was the sovereign of this vast land, Lok Lok. The emperor realized the shift too, and immediately unsheathed his blade, sensing a foul vibe in the air. Sure enough, she'd been stalking him. Had she known his identity, she'd have sent him to the afterlife much sooner. The emperor was ready for the smoke, asking, "What do you want with your daddy?" which left her totally speechless. Unable to counter, she pivoted to a classic honey trap. She grazed a flower petal against his cold steel, playing the part of a fragile, helpless damsel. Then she turned away with a pouty look, acting as if they were star-crossed lovers. It made the emperor's skin crawl. He must have had some cosmic bad luck this morning to run into such a psycho. Unable to stomach the act, he unleashed his beast to tear her apart. He clearly doesn't know how to be a gentleman to such flowers, but her power was no joke. She actually commanded a legendary Phoenix Guardian. This sent a shockwave through the emperor. It was truly one insane revelation after another. That was the forbidden royal magic of the Sion Empire, a realm that was wiped off the map ages ago. Without another word, he lashed out, turning ice shards into lethal projectiles that rained down on her, demanding to know how she wielded such pure magic. But faced with his overwhelming aura, she didn't flinch and instead maintained an eerie composure. Because the primal forces of ice and fire suddenly harmonized. The jagged ice shards instantly melted and evaporated against the phoenix flames she unleashed after her interrogation. On the contrary, it involved the ancient seal regarding the tragic demise of the Empress, of the fallen Xi'an Empire from long ago. Before the mystery could be unraveled, the Emperor bolted upright in the middle of the night, keeping the entire palace awake. He immediately dragged the old scholar into his chambers. But seeing the Emperor drenched in a cold sweat, the scholar swiftly cast a defensive barrier around them to analyze his erratic condition. It turns out the face haunting his vision was Empress Tuyet Ni. That dream was a fragment of their shared history. This left the old scholar reeling. After so many years, the Empress was haunting his dreams once more. It must be triggered by the mounting stress of Princess May losing control of her volatile powers. So even though the Emperor is a powerful man whenever a nightmare strikes, he drags the old scholar out for a midnight stroll, which annoys the old man to no end. He secretly prays the Emperor finds a new wife soon so he can finally enjoy some decent sleep. It seems the Emperor picked up on that vibe and immediately became incredibly irritable. Before the old scholar could even offer an explanation, the sound of vibrant laughter echoed through the air. They were stunned to find Sujun and Kon playing together in the darkness. The kid was already manipulating control magic with such precision that the prince ended up completely soaked to the bone. This sent the two adults into a panic because Kon's constitution is incredibly frail. A drenching like that could be fatal. But the emperor immediately blocked the scholar from stepping in because the boy seemed to be thriving. Just as Sujun was celebrating her impressive display of power, the water on Kon's head suddenly vanished into steam. Turns out, they weren't the only ones, skulking in the shadows as Shri was also keeping watch. But it seems the prince isn't the easy target he used to be. He's learned how to set a lethal trap. The dark soil suddenly transformed into a quagmire, causing Sujun to sink directly into the muck. Shri quickly rushed forward to retrieve the kid and cast a cleansing spell on her. But even this mana was swiftly absorbed. Sujun struggled, refusing to concede that she had been completely outplayed. Only then did the emperor emerge from the shadows, curious to see why this bratty child refused to admit defeat. The sudden appearance nearly gave the children a heart attack. Do adults seriously make a hobby of eavesdropping on children like this? He quickly utilized magic to scan if Kon had suffered any physical strain, but found nothing. The boy had undeniably leveled up. Sujun began manufacturing excuses for her loss. Though the prince's trap was clever, Kon had been tagged first, so she technically scored the first knockout. Her logic was surprisingly sound. Being so young while mastering water manipulation and being so persuasive made Sujun believe she'd won the round. She was riding a high of pure joy, feeling like she hadn't let anyone down and was certain she'd use this power to protect brown hair. But the old man brutally crushed the kid's dream, stating she'd be a corpse if she fell into an enemy's trap like that. This cast a shadow over the kid, making her realize just how much she still lacked. But immediately, a gentle hand reached out to pat Sujun's head in a soothing gesture. It was none other than the warm and kind-hearted old scholar, moving the kid to the brink of tears. Even her panda was completely captivated by the man's aura. Sujun quickly lunged at him, hugging the scholar as if he were her own grandfather and acting incredibly adorable, vowing that she would grind even harder. Seeing the two of them bonding and whispering while leaving him out in the freezing cold, the emperor immediately snatched Sujun back, though his words were still toxic, branding her filthy for touching his scholar. But the kid took the insult literally and got defensive. She's definitely not some stinky sewer rat. Seeing Sujun about to face a penalty, Kon stepped up for a hero saves the girl moment, admitting they'd been grinding here for 2 weeks. Hearing this, the emperor immediately performed another check and could clearly see that the boy's physique has grown significantly more robust, and even his mana reserves have surged to new heights. Upon overhearing, both Kone and Sujun Shri immediately dropped to his knees in a panic. He desperately tried to shoulder the blame, claiming this brutal training regime was his own mastermind brainchild. But the emperor instantly donned a mask of pure fury and flatly denied his involvement. This sent a wave of panic through the group, fearing that the upcoming punishment would be absolutely ruthless. But that so-called punishment was actually a decree for the two kids to sleep by his side. Everyone nearly coughed up blood in disbelief, while the kid felt a literal shiver of dread down her spine. She'd honestly rather sprint 100 laps around the courtyard. At least that would make some sense. Only the old scholar grasped the deep-seated trauma. Perhaps the emperor was haunted by nightmares and feared the cold void of loneliness. Ever since his youth, he had never known the comfort of a peaceful night's rest. He was eternally plagued by soul-crushing nightmares and dark visions. Therefore, even as a dragon, he couldn't clock out on time and had to sing nightly lullabies just for the emperor to drift off. Fortunately, he's no longer a solitary soul. Having his 2 children nearby will surely bring him a sense of serenity. At the arena, Shri and Brown Hair were already awaiting the kids. Seeing them arrive gave him quite the jolt. Because not only was Sujun shattering records by crushing 40 laps in a mere 3 hours, but even Kon and Pan blitzed 30 laps in 3 hours, a massive upgrade from their previous 6-hour slog. Brown Hair quickly provided the rationed savory sausages that the little ones absolutely adored. They inhaled them in record time, and even Kon pinched his nose to down the vial of dragon blood. Today, Shri was the sole instructor, while the general remained inside mentoring Princess May on her beast-taming arts. But no one could fathom why they were stuck studying outdoors while the sun was hot enough to melt solid fat. Naturally, it's because theory must be forged in the fires of practice. He then flexed his ominous murder of crows. As those crows dived with lethal speed into the straw, training dummies prepared earlier, the effigies were instantly possessed and became fully mobile. The sight of the dummies twitching to life sent the little ones into a blind panic as they turned tail to flee. Only the panda was completely locked in, ready to throw hands at a moment's notice. There were 100 of them in total, yet he heartlessly ordered the kids to neutralize them all. Failure to comply meant they would be skipping lunch entirely. After dropping the mission, he affectionately wrapped an arm around Brown Hair's waist to escort her from the danger zone. Shri and Brown Hair effortlessly levitated into the sky to spectate. while below the kids were instantly swarmed by the Straw Legion with every exit cut off. Brown Hair was sick with worry because Sujun had only been training for a little over a month. Thrusting her into a live combat simulation was basically setting the kid up for a total wipeout. But this was an inevitable move because rival nations knew the two kids possessed magic beasts. Therefore, the cunning old king of the Kai Empire played a dirty card by inviting Kon and Sujun to participate in the intermediate mage exam together. Crucially, they couldn't decline since that old fox had already invited the world. If Lok Lok was the only empire to duck the challenge, the rumors would start spreading like wildfire. The most critical issue now is that this exam is 10,000 times more lethal. If other nations sniff out the kid's magic-devouring gift, her future path will be a gauntlet of non-stop assassination attempts. While the others were brawling with the straw dummies, Sujun was being relentlessly hunted. But the kid isn't the type to just roll over and take it. Determined not to let anyone worry, she unleashed the panda onto the battlefield with a heroic vibe. Fear doesn't exist in her vocabulary. Instantly, with a single punch, she sent a dummy flying into the distance. Seeing that the kid didn't need his protection or help at all left Kon speechless. It seemed his concern was misplaced, but currently, these straw effigies simply don't know when to quit, so just bashing them isn't the solution. Even with a Kung Fu Panda, it just drains time and yields zero results. Unlike Kon and Sujun Pan was drowning while being swarmed by the straw mob. Immediately the two kids rushed in to back her up. But before they could even intervene, the little bunny suddenly lunged into the fray. They assumed the tiny creature wouldn't be able to do much damage, since its bite appeared totally harmless. But to their utter shock, she immediately sank her teeth in to gnaw and shred the straw man to pieces. Everyone stood frozen. Even though the Straw Legion was immune to standard physical strikes, the secret was to literally rip them to shreds, so Sujun instantly commanded the panda to unleash its claws and tear them apart with an overwhelming aura. The tables had turned as the kids used their bare hands to sweep through the straw army, terrorizing the spirits by decapitating the dummies and ripping their torsos wide open. Finally, they achieved a total wipeout, leaving only one survivor who trembled before the three predatory glares of the brats like little demon straw flying everywhere. This meant the trial was officially over, leaving Shri dazed because he had infused those straw men with years of mana only to see them trashed like garbage. The three of them happily celebrated together, basking in the glory of their hard-earned win. Seeing that these little rascals weren't nearly as innocent as they looked, made Shri force a nervous laugh and dismissed them for lunch. As soon as the brats vanished, the general emerged from the shadows. Truly mentoring these kids was no walk in the park. It was light years away from what he expected, especially Sujun, whose talent was terrifyingly elite. But the most pressing concern was forcing them to reach intermediate rank at such a tender age, which was a monumental task, making the general worry his salary for the next 20 years would vanish like dust in the wind. The entire spectacle was observed by the emperor and the old scholar, who couldn't help but offer praise. The kids handled the chaos beautifully. The scholar praised Sujun endlessly with sparkling eyes. Not only was she incredibly sharp-witted, but she could also pinpoint the enemy's fatal weakness with brilliant precision. But the emperor maintained his salty facade, claiming those were just petty life hacks and the real battlefield wouldn't be so forgiving. His "I don't care" act was immediately seen through by the old scholar, acting all ice cold yet sneaking here to watch them. Finally, the kids got to feast. Sujun quickly inhaled her food because she was absolutely famished. But even though the kid was eating like a speedrunner, she still maintained a certain refined grace. She was certainly neater than the panda who was using both paws to devour drumsticks like there was no tomorrow, making its owner cringe with embarrassment. The panda didn't just eat it stuffed itself like it had been starving for 10 lifetimes. But that didn't matter much. Messy eating aside, magic beasts don't technically require food since they subsist on mana, channeled from their masters to recharge their cores, but there are legendary special cases. Some can siphon magic from external sources to merge and synchronize with their master's soul. There are even twisted forms of magic akin to the black arts that force magic beasts to consume other mages to accumulate power. Hearing this, the kid's entire worldview collapsed, fearfully imagining that every single calorie the little pig consumed would transfer to Sujun's body as if in a few years she'd be as round as a barrel. But that was just a baseless worry, as the food only serves as fuel for the beast to convert into mana before vanishing. Witnessing Sujun's endearing silliness, the physician began to doubt the teacher's prophecy about this kid ruining the Lok Lok Empire. Under his intense scrutiny, the guilty kid felt her nerves fray because she had secretly spiked Kon's dragon blood with apple juice. Brown Hair kindly reminded her that a big appetite is fine, but she should mind her etiquette. Looking over, Pan was dining with extreme elegance. One glance, and you could instantly sense the regal aura of a true princess. But both of them completely pampered the kid, finding her chaotic behavior purely adorable. Kon swiftly finished his medicine and strolled over to Sujun, pulling out his handkerchief to gently wipe the kid's mouth. This startled Brown Hair. That was technically her job, yet the prince was handling it himself. But that heartwarming image made the physician blow a fuse. She's already managed to bewitch the prince at such a young age. She's destined to grow up into a total heartbreaker while the kid remained blissfully clueless about the drama. While they were having a grand time eating, the emperor joined the fray and activated his scan, once more on the prince. After a comprehensive checkup, he was genuinely startled, because the boy had truly become exponentially stronger. His physique was no longer the fragile shell it once was. The 1-month vow to heal Kon had been successfully fulfilled, so he presented a grand reward for the kid. Seeing Sujun's eyes sparkle with anticipation, the physician thought, surely this greedy brat will seize this opening to demand something extravagant. But the little girl simply beamed, asking for confirmation one last time if she truly earned a reward. She joyfully wished for Kon to be allowed to eat a single apple every single day, leaving the physician stunned. There's no way she'd snub a chance for Golder status, and even the emperor found the request intriguing, as he immediately crouched down to meet the little girl's gaze. Sujun then confessed the truth that she hadn't actually performed any miracles all month, acting all mischievous while revealing she had been clandestinely spiking Kon's dragon blood with apple juice. Every single day, a revelation that made the physician's jaw hit the floor. That such a tiny child possessed the audacity to trick him into serving the prince something so low class, turned his shock into pure indignation. He truly couldn't stomach Sujun's antics, but then the kid stepped up and grilled him. If the prince's constitution was too frail to digest a solid apple, then why was the apple juice perfectly fine? On the surface, he still looked livid, but he never dreamed that a simple splash of fruit juice could actually be the cure for Kon. He felt himself becoming a relic, treating the prince for years with zero progress while an apple did the trick. Sujun noticed his ego bruising and quickly cleverly snatched the physician's hand, acting weaponized levels of adorable. If Kon couldn't consume it directly, then why not just have his magic beast devour an apple daily? Filtering the nutrients for the boy to safely absorb, she put on a heartbreaking puppy dog face, pleading with the physician to agree because she genuinely wanted the prince to recover. Witnessing that sincerity, the physician couldn't remain stubborn or continue entertaining the teacher's slanders, and finally began to give the kid his silent approval. Seeing Sujun dedicate her entire heart to his recovery made Konei feel an overwhelming wave of emotion, his eyes shimmering with light. But that wasn't enough for the emperor to grant them a complete reprieve. He decreed that Kon must continue running 10 laps starting tomorrow, a sentence that made everyone shudder. Truly a tragic turn of events indeed. But now wasn't the time to pity others, as the emperor's mercy was non-existent, and since May's progress was still stalling, he tacked on an additional 5 laps to her daily grind. Sujun also felt the nerve, since she was a lady who ate with such reckless abandon. Clearing out his royal treasury in a single sitting, he punished her with a kitchen shift to slaughter 100 chickens. The emperor stormed off in a huff, but didn't forget to command his 2 children to sleep in his chambers tonight, making their future look pitch black. At their age, still being forced to have a sleepover with their terrifying dad, they thought the ordeal was over. But unexpectedly, the moment they finished lunch and stepped out, the physician blocked their path, demanding to speak with the kid in private. Sujun, being sharp as a tack, said, "Purple Hair, you head back first, no need to wait for me." Suddenly, the physician became bone-chillingly scary, his face darkened with killing intent, because he suspected Sujun was a plant. It startled the kid, but she maintained her mask of innocent naivety. Then he seized her wrist in a vice grip and hoisted her up. He was, after all, the most legendary physician in the realm, having consumed every medical scroll in existence. Yet, he had found no record of a fruit-based cure like the one Sujun claimed. Squeezed so hard she began to tear up, the kid bluffed that she'd heard of the ailment from Brown Hair, that it plagued poor families who accidentally ate fruit and were healed. Since the prince is royalty, she just lied about reading it in a book. In reality, the physician had heard whispers of such paupers' diseases appearing in slums, but never imagined a prince would suffer from one, so he'd ignored the symptoms. Luckily, she had eavesdropped on Brown Hair, chatting about this before, or she wouldn't have known how to BS her way out of this trap. When he double-checked if Sujun was truly only 3 years old, the kid played the role of a total airhead. The true reason for today's confrontation was because the physician suspected Sujun was a practitioner of the dark arts, who had fabricated a child's vessel for herself to infiltrate the palace and deceive the masses. This made the kid jump. She had no clue such sorcery existed. Truly, anything is possible. She vowed to be more cautious from now on. It turns out it wasn't just the physician, as the emperor shared those same suspicions and had been lurking in the shadows with him, but he immediately turned to leave, seeming to feel a sharp twinge of guilt for having doubted the kid's pure heart. So he's drowning in remorse now and can't even bring himself to face her directly. Leaving the old scholar standing there in solitude observing Sujun, looking radiantly happy, truly a precious and adorable little soul. How could she be anything like Princess Jen? That girl was clearly a 15-year-old soul trapped in a 5-year-old's body. That night, the kid whispered to the prince, "Is sharing a bed with the emperor truly such a harrowing form of torture?" This question triggered Kohn's repressed memories of his darkest, most traumatic childhood days. He had been forced to sleep by his father's side since he was a mere infant, but not a single night. Did he ever rest until the dawn? One minor slip-up and the emperor would kick him right out of bed. Thankfully, Shri was there, always on high alert to catch the falling boy before he hit the floor. Otherwise, his grave would be overgrown with weeds by now, making Sujun feel like she'd turned to stone just hearing the horror. She was absolutely paralyzed with fear at the thought of the night ahead. Of course, not a single night could he evade this recurring violent calamity. Sometimes he was nearly squashed flatter than Jerry the Mouse in a slapstick cartoon. Sujun was shaken to her core. The fact that Kohn survived until now is a literal human miracle. It's a stroke of luck that around his tyrannical and cold-blooded father, there were compassionate souls like the old scholar who would quickly spirit Kohn away to sleep with him. It wasn't until he turned 3 and began mastering magic that they finally occupied separate rooms. Just thinking about it made her pity the old scholar. During the day, he has to supervise Sujun's reading, and at night he's on babysitting duty for Kohn's sleep, all for 0 pay. To boost his street cred, the prince confidently beat his chest, vowing to protect her from being punted out tonight. So, the two of them lay on either side. Sujun didn't dare drift off yet, peeking out, ready to defend her own tiny body at all costs from a royal flying kick. When the emperor cornered her and threatened that if she didn't pass out now, tomorrow's penalty would be slaughtering 200 chickens, the kid immediately pivoted and squeezed her eyes shut, faking total ignorance, just to dodge that brutal and bloody punishment. So that night, the emperor in his deep slumber dreamt once more of reuniting with Empress Tuyetni. But it seemed she was drifting away, and he desperately tried to make her stay by his side. The empress playfully teased him, suggesting that since he was holding her back, he must harbor deep feelings for her. But the emperor scoffed, thinking how could someone of his supreme stature fall for such a chaotic woman? Suddenly, exactly as he feared, the empress revealed her truly psycho side. When her confession hit a wall, she brandished a knife, but her strike failed as the emperor instinctively parried the blade. When the assassination attempt flopped, she instantly switched back to a playful, innocent mask. This wasn't the first time the empress had plotted to murder the emperor, but as the saying goes, persistence eventually breaks the strongest shield. In the end, even a frozen iceberg like him finally discovered how to blush. But before he could savor that rare moment of bliss for long, his dormant curse suddenly erupted with a terrifying vengeance. An uncontrollable surge of deep purple miasma began to crawl up his arm like a parasite. He frantically tried to drive the empress away while he still possessed a shred of sanity. But it seemed she had lost all will to live and refused to budge, even a single millimeter, and just like that, the emperor's hands began to crush her throat. He was a prisoner in his own body, unable to stop as the curse seized full control. Gazing at this dark aura, the empress immediately realized something was fundamentally wrong. Because this wasn't a natural sickness. This was a specialized curse that only the queen mother of the Xi'an Empire could have woven. One could say his own biological mother had branded this curse upon her own son. Talk about ultimate toxic parenting, but at that moment, the emperor was a mindless beast. Driven by pure, unadulterated malice, he tightened his lethal grip on Tuyetni's neck. But in the waking world, the victim of this assault wasn't the deceased empress. It was actually Sujun being strangled and hoisted right up into the air. Making the kid cried her eyes out, completely lost as to why that unhinged emperor suddenly wanted to end her life. Moreover, due to the curse, his aura was so overwhelming that her magic absorption was completely outclassed. While he was still submerged in a nightmare of slaying his beloved, the panda was growling in a feral rage, witnessing its master writhing in agony and sobbing. The panda's fury instantly hit level max. It lunged forward, sinking its teeth into that stinking emperor's face, and crazily siphoning that surge of magic into its own body. Because of that massive intake, its physical form also began to bloat up like a balloon. Once Sujun was no longer bound by the dark magic, she tumbled onto the bed free. But because the panda kept expanding, the sheer weight became unbearable, causing the bed to snap in half with a loud crack. At this point, our hero, who swore to protect Sujun, finally woke up, but before he could process the chaos, everyone was already flattened under the panda's massive weight. In the blink of an eye, the panda transformed into a deflating balloon, zipping wildly around the room like a projectile. Shri, hearing the thunderous crash of the bed collapsing, quickly rushed inside to investigate the situation. But the scene inside was pure anarchy. The bed was wrecked, the kids were dazed, and the magic beast was flying like a loose balloon. He walked over, his heart dropping when he spotted the panda's bite mark on the emperor's face, then looked over at the deflating creature, which immediately slammed directly into Shri and knocked him out cold on the floor. The emperor then coldly ordered him to escort the children back to their own palace. But seeing Sujun covered in bruises, his own heart felt as turbulent as a crashing storm, never expecting that he himself would be the one to brutalize the child. Kon finally fully woke up and checked on Sujun's condition. She couldn't bring herself to traumatize the boy, so the kid could only pin the entire blame on the unconscious, dizzy panda. Watching the emperor leave to wrestle with his guilt, Sujun finally let her guard down. It seemed he had no memory of his crimes. Seeing the marks on the child's body, Shri grew suspicious. This damage couldn't have been caused by a panda tantrum. It was likely a byproduct of the emperor's curse, but that should have been impossible, because back then, Empress Tuyetni had sacrificed her power to permanently suppress that dark curse. It turns out, the reason the emperor wandered out alone in the pouring rain was to track down the old scholar. It seems he still possesses a shred of a conscience, not dragging the man out of bed in this miserable damp weather, and instead choosing to go to him personally. Seeing the soaking wet emperor suddenly materialize at his bedside, the scholar immediately rushed to dry him off. But the emperor insisted on playing the tortured CEO role standing in the rain to clear his head. But if that's the case, why seek out the scholar? The old man couldn't just stand there and watch, hurriedly wiping the water away. It turns out he came here to ask him to investigate a scene from an hour ago, leaving the old man confused, though his hands were still casting drying magic on the emperor. When he learned the location to be monitored was the emperor's own palace, he was even more startled, fearing some catastrophe had struck. He found a way to replay the previous events. It was a simple task as he summoned his magic beast, which was an incredibly arrogant, high and mighty fox. Now a scholar of his status had to lower himself and plead with his magic beast to replay the recent palace drama. But it seems this isn't just an ordinary fox. It acts like a system helping a girl woo a male lead in a romance manhwa. But naturally, its cryptic words left the scholar feeling like a total idiot, not grasping a single thing, making the emperor standing next to him lose his cool. Since when does a magic beast ignore its master and act bossy for so long? After some negotiation, he finally got the little fox to do its job, quickly projecting the past scene like a cinematic movie projector. It was the chilling image of the emperor using the curse to choke Sujun and being bitten by the panda without missing a beat. This vision made him feel an absolute burning fury. As he clenched his fists, the curse really had reactivated, and it had nearly ended Sujun's life. It turns out, he isn't quite as monstrous as the rumors claim. The deaths of the servants and teachers, and even the Empress Kon's mother, were all triggered by the lethal curse. Yet the little fox, when facing the emperor, spoke without a shred of respect, acting like a superior rather than addressing a king. Thanks to the lingering power of the empress, Tuyetni managed to restrain that hex for a while, but it's unexpectedly lost its potency. For that seal to fail, it means the emperor has harbored genuine feelings for a female soul. Even mentor servants or kin are now in the crosshairs. The little fox had issued a dire warning long ago, not a single spark for a female creature for 1 year, which triggered the emperor's memory of Sujun's arrival. Perhaps since that very moment, he had already developed a soft spot for her. But the silver lining is this panda's unique ability to feast on the curse. As soon as the darkness flares up, just let it take a chomp and the crisis is averted. But let's get one thing straight for these uncultured folks. This is a divine panda, not a puppy. In the East, it's a legendary national treasure, so put some respect on its name. Realizing he couldn't bridge the gap with such narrow-minded people, he clarified it was a majestic breed of heroic bear. After surviving the cardio from hell, it was back to the brutal grind, slaughtering chickens before facing the Straw Legion. The kid was escorted into a facility that looked suspiciously like a rustic farmstead, because there were 100 fuzzy newly hatched chicks chirping inside. Just a moment ago, looking at them, they seemed like round, incredibly precious puffballs. The emperor's logic was that Sujun should start by slaying the babies to build her nerve before moving on to adult hens tomorrow. But even with the heavy cleaver in her grip, Sujun found herself completely paralyzed. She simply didn't have the heart to butcher such adorable, innocent creatures. Earlier, Shri had desperately tried to veto the emperor's plan, arguing that a child shouldn't be forced into such a bloody ritual. But this cold requirement was forged with the kid's survival in mind. Currently, not just the Kai kingdom, but rival nations are already hunting her head. Sujun must become intimate with the blade and the sight of blood, so she can ruthlessly execute those who seek her life later. To force her hand, he sent his ominous crows to invade the minds of the birds. Possessing the tiny bodies of the chicks, they began a coordinated aerial assault on the kid. The sudden transformation horrified Sujun, who had just been marveling at their innocent cuteness. They did a total demonic 180, terrifying the kid so much she fumbled the knife right out of her hand. Luckily, the panda was still on standby, acting like a true national treasure to save the damsel, channeling the 3-generation legacy of Kung Fu Panda in one explosive burst of martial prowess. The chicks were humbled so badly they were crying for their mamas and shrieking for mercy. This beast's aura is officially no joke. In the blink of an eye, the tempting aroma of high-quality roasted chicken permeated the air. This was no longer the soft-hearted girl who felt pity for the chicks just seconds ago. Basking in the praise, the panda's ego inflated, and it immediately unleashed its ultimate technique. One devastating punch triggered a thermal explosion that reduced everything to smoldering smithereens. Shri had to snatch Sujun into the air to evade the blast radius, and he couldn't help but be awestruck. The kid's magic beast is an absolute top-tier monster. Despite its compact size, one fist is enough to incinerate an entire royal kitchen. Meanwhile, Cone and Pan were catching pure hell trying to evade the straw dummies because they were strictly forbidden from destroying them. The duo scrambled to find Sujun's location, hoping she had a tactical solution to their problem. But as they reached the kitchen, they found a charred wasteland with not a single pillar left standing. They looked over to see the girl now determinedly snatching up a chick ready to get to butchering. Lord knows what was going through the prince's head, but he viewed butchering a chick as a high-stakes life-or-death mission. He prepared to charge in and play the valiant hero rescuing the damsel in distress. But he was checked by Pan, who actually has a brain cell with a brutal reality check. Cone's power isn't even half of Sujun's, so who exactly is he saving stay put? Thus the kid has to waste her precious mana bailing the prince out instead. Being hit with the cold hard truth sent the boy into a gloom, realizing he currently lacks the juice to protect anyone. But this was no time for Cone to enter sad boy hours because the straw dummies had already locked onto them. Seeing the two of them cornered, Sujun got fired up and charged into the fray like a tiny tank. She unleashed her fire-launching gift to attack, but completely blanked on the fact that straw is a massive fire hazard. The entire training ground ignited into an inferno instantly. The catastrophic issue here was that her two friends were still trapped inside the blaze. Fortunately, the Dragonfire rescue team manifested just in time to douse the flames with a torrential spray. Only then were the two of them pulled from the brink of being roasted alive. Sujun was still giggling, thinking it's a damn shame the Emperor didn't pursue firefighting with a talent like that. But she was promptly hoisted up by him, his face warning her that she'd become far too arrogant. Drunk on her own power, she'd let her guard down and pulled a legendary rookie mistake. While that may be true, Sujun's reckless gamble was driven by a desperate need to save the other two. However, her control is still hit or miss. If she gets too swept up in the heat of magic, she completely loses her grip on reality. Had the Emperor not intervened in the nick of time, his two heirs would likely be smoked ham by now. Facing the Emperor's icy interrogation, Sujun's guardian Shri immediately threw himself under the bus. He knew all too well how much the prince meant to the throne. If the boy were to perish, he would undoubtedly crumble under the weight of his failure. Yet before he could even begin a lecture, Sujun unleashed her ultimate weapon, those shimmering, tear-filled eyes to disarm him. She was fully aware of how much the Emperor had sacrificed for her. But her next remark did a total 180, suggesting he shouldn't be so grumpy since she genuinely didn't believe she'd done anything wrong. This earned a deep scowl from the Emperor as he promptly dropped the girl. It turns out Sujun had the confidence to go full pyro, only because she had absolute faith that the prince would save himself, along with Princess Pan. Hearing such high praise for the first time in his life, and seeing someone actually believe in his son's potential, the Emperor was left utterly stunned. Shri remained skeptical as well, given that everyone knew Kone's body was fragile. Surviving this long was considered a literal miracle. But in the kid's eyes, the prince was a courageous warrior who had summoned his magic at the absolute final second to rescue her from that sinister teacher. Sure enough, as the thick dust cloud finally settled, it unveiled a shocking sight. The two children were perfectly safe and sound inside a shimmering magical shield. This revelation left the two adults reeling. They never dreamed that at such a tender age, Kone was already capable of manifesting a high-level protective barrier. Watching Sujun skip back with pure joy, relentlessly hyping up the boy as an absolute powerhouse. Kone's cheeks flared bright crimson because he never expected a single soul to believe in him. Until this moment, he had been nothing more than a punching bag for critics labeling him as weak. When Kone was only 3, the court officials mocked and insulted his very existence. The boy was so frail that even an ant could have bested him, and they were convinced the prince was unfit to ever sit upon the throne, predicting the kingdom's total collapse. But Sujun dismissed those ancient worries with a shrug. Kone was only weak because he was battling a chronic illness. Once he's fully recovered, he'll undoubtedly be an invincible force. Sujun declared that the prince sparing ants wasn't a sign of frailty, but proof of his noble heart. With that kind of compassion, the realm would finally be blessed with a legendary king. This made the boy's eyes shimmer with newfound hope, but she didn't stop there. She rattled off a laundry list of Kone's amazing qualities. Sujun usually snuck out for 2 hours of practice, but she knew for a fact the prince was grinding significantly harder than that. Once again, this validation hit the boy so hard he was visibly moved to tears. Seeing the two of them so inseparable, Pan felt a sharp twinge of jealousy before, but now the pieces finally clicked. She hadn't looked at the prince with the same fierce devotion Sujun had, so she couldn't compete, yet she still wore a warm smile. Hearing those words, the man behind the training schedule Shri felt a massive surge of shock as well. He never expected the prince to be doing secret extra reps when no one was watching. The boy truly possessed a soul of iron. Seeing his children laughing and bonding so closely while leaving him out of the loop, the emperor immediately got in his feelings and turned to make a dramatic exit. But suddenly, hearing a piercing shriek, he whipped his head back to eavesdrop like a total pro. Clearly, that nosy streak isn't going anywhere even after a literal reincarnation. It turned out, Kone's bunny was glowing intensely. They couldn't tell if it was sick or undergoing a radical transformation. But the vibes were clearly positive as the bunny's entire form began to erupt with raw power. Its ears stretched, its physique shifted, and its overall size was successfully leveled up. This stunned everyone, except for our hilariously naive prince, who thought this was a different rabbit entirely because it looked too cool. But one character was acting very strangely, the panda, who quickly trotted over and stood in awkward silence because it was now smaller than the bunny. Despite the bunny's massive upgrade and newfound size, the moment it felt a tiny threat from that aggressive bear, it simply folded and fainted, literally foaming at the mouth. This made its owner, Sujun, just want to crawl into a hole and die. Why do you have to be so extra, my pet? Even though it's a pet, the panda aggressively shifted the blame back to the kid, implying it's her fault for being too weak to trigger its upgrade. Reading the panda's toxic attitude, Sujun realized it was likely cursing her out and plotting to tear the entire palace down. The spectacle unfolding before them was something neither adult could wrap their heads around. The prince is still a mere toddler, yet his magic beast has already evolved. His son is a certified prodigy. But since the beast had just transformed and remained unstable, he moved to help his precious heir stabilize it. When suddenly his instinct screamed, he sensed a foul energy as the curse began to erupt once more. Recalling the cryptic words of the little fox regarding the panda's unique ability to devour the curse, he instantly commanded Shri to evacuate Kone and Pan. Sensing the gravity of the situation, Shri obeyed without hesitation, snatching up the two children and retreating into the distance while leaving Sujun behind, completely baffled by the sudden chaos. The emperor desperately needed the girl to command that cat to bite him, mirroring the events of that fateful night, but before he could even bark the order, the panda went full aggro for being called a feline, and lunged forward to sink its teeth into the handsome face, looming right in front of her. Witnessing this scene left Sujun absolutely paralyzed with dread. It was one thing to bite an unconscious emperor, but this time she was in serious trouble. But sure enough, after gorging on the emperor's cursed energy, the panda's form expanded, leaving the kid utterly speechless. Then, crackling golden mana, resembling lightning, wreathed the panda and suddenly exploded just like that. It leveled up unexpectedly, sporting a smug, "I'm the goat" expression. Seeing that her little burden had finally evolved, Sujun joyfully rushed over and scooped the panda up, spinning in circles. Only now did the emperor utilize the intel he'd gathered from the little fox to confirm that this creature wasn't a puppy at all, but a panda. Even though she knew exactly what it was to avoid any suspicion that she wasn't a real 3-year-old, the kid played dumb. But it seemed he'd garbled most of the fox's explanation, still insisting the panda belonged to the feline family, leaving the little national treasure fuming with a "bro, I am not a cat" look. Studying the panda from the eastern realms, the emperor finally realized this was no ordinary beast, so he began breathing down Sujun's neck, demanding she ramp up her training to properly cultivate that magic beast. He talked a big game, but that night he was too restless to sleep and sought out the old scholar for a raw heart-to-heart. Just as he was about to drag the old man out of his peaceful slumber in the dead of night, the spark of humanity finally flickered and he suppressed his surging mana, deciding to approach him with a touch of humility instead. So, abandoning all sense of personal space while the man was dreaming, he suddenly stood towering over his bedside and jolted the old scholar awake. Turns out he was feeling isolated and desperate for someone to listen to his deep-seated insecurities. Even the scholar viewed him as a peerless sovereign, having transformed the nation into a superpower in mere years. Yet he wore a soul-crushed expression, declaring himself an absolute failure of a father. Because until this moment, he had only ever viewed his son as a fragile, pathetic child. And yet today, the boy not only manifested a complex barrier, but his magic beast evolved too. It was as if he was a completely different kid than the one he thought he knew. Hearing this, the scholar showered the boy with praise, making the emperor's ego swell with fatherly pride. But he couldn't shake the fact that Sujun was the only one who truly watched over and believed in Kone, while he, the father, did nothing. Because up until now, aside from playing the role of a stern king and raining down legal punishments on his son, he hadn't contributed anything of value to the boy's life. Recalling when the prince was just a tiny tot, weeping uncontrollably because those bizarre punishments were so overwhelming, but back then, he only maintained a cold stoic mask, commanding the boy to stifle his tears because an heir must embody the iron will of a future king. Now he looks back with stinging regret, realizing he only knew how to criticize and never gave Kon a single word of affirmation. Seeing the emperor he had raised since his youth finally maturing into a man who truly cares for his children moved the old scholar to tears of joy. But the sentiment didn't last long, as the emperor insisted on invading his personal space and crashing in the same bed. But the moment he drifted into a deep slumber, his recurring nightmare came clawing back, witnessing his biological mother in a terrifying fit of unbridled rage. She was trembling with a violent fury as she pulverized the furniture around her. Even the young Shizuli was a target of her hatred back then as she hurled a heavy flower pot directly at her child's face. In those dark moments, only the frantic servants were paralyzed with worry regarding Shizuli's physical state, while his mother displayed absolutely zero maternal concern. But the young emperor harbored no resentment, only praying that if striking him eased her pain, he would endure every blow even with blood streaming down his face. Suddenly, the late emperor entered, triggering a mental break that sent her into a spiral of non-stop screaming, vowing to slaughter both the old man and Shizuli, but she was instantly silenced by the late emperor's vice-like grip, who issued a chilling warning that if she dared to end Shizuli's life, she would be condemned to endure the agony of pregnancy all over again. It turns out, the old man was a sadistic monster who shackled the Empress Dowager's soul, forcing her to remain by his side. Haunted by the traumatic memory of his mother's tears, he jolted awake only to find the old scholar had long since drifted off and was sawing logs like an absolute heavyweight champion. This sight drew a tender smile from him as he gently tucked the blanket around the old man. Even if the world abandoned him, the emperor still possessed the old scholar's unwavering loyalty. Then both fell asleep bathed in 7,749 sparkling filters. After a grueling day, the prince's turbulent mana finally reached a stable state. The physician observed the scene, questioning why he was tasked with a job the general should have handled. Given that his expertise in offensive magic was limited, and despite having cared for the prince since his first breath, he felt powerless to intervene effectively. Fortunately, the intervention of a high-level magic physician saved the day, otherwise Konim would have literally detonated from the sheer pressure of his own massive mana reserves. Since the emperor was emotionally compromised, even Sujun's panda's evolution was supervised by the general, leaving the physician floored that in a single day, 2 of the empire's magic beasts could evolve so seamlessly. But the process was far from easy. The prince's royal lineage smoothed his path, but the kid's situation was volatile. At this very moment, Sujun was relying on the general's support to withstand the agonizing surge of mana, triggered by her magic beast evolution, a process that was pure, unadulterated torture. Noting that the emperor hadn't even checked on his own precious daughter, the physician could sense the underlying guilt. It was clearly the fallout of the curse, so he decided to step in and monitor Sujun's condition while instructing Shri to keep a vigilant watch over Kone. After an eternity of feeling like her soul was being shredded, the kid finally stabilized and passed out, leaving the once mighty general, panting like a dog from the sheer exhaustion of the ritual. But he couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for the emperor. Cursed at age 10 by his own flesh and blood, it wasn't until he turned 21 that he found a glimmer of light in Empress Tuyet-Ni. He believed he had finally found sanctuary from his demons, but now he had turned his blade on Sujun. Anyone could see he was drowning in self-loathing. Meanwhile, Brown Hair felt her heart break for the kid. She never realized that mastering magic could be such a traumatic experience, and she pitied the girl immensely. It's one thing to work hard, but this was the first time she'd seen a mana stabilization process turn so life-threateningly difficult. Perhaps because Sujun is so impossibly young, her case is a terrifying first in human history. After a brief recovery, the girl finally blinked awake, which triggered the panda to wake up as well. The second it opened its eyes, it went into full savage battle mode, instantly charging at Brown Hair and swinging its target with lethal intent. The general intercepted the strike, realizing instantly that the panda had succumbed to a mana-induced frenzy. He summoned his lion to the field to deliver a reality check, but strictly warned it to prevent any backlash from hitting Sujun. Even when staring down a lion 20 times its size, the beast remained absolutely feral. Before the general's magic beast could even unleash its true power with just one thunderous step, it caused the bed to buckle and snap in two. Sujun was pinned to the floor in a scene that felt like a nightmarish case of déjà vu. But as she rolled over, she saw the panda still squaring up against the lion. Not out of loyalty, but because that painful fall made it incredibly cranky. It didn't flinch before its massive adversary lunging forward with light-speed aggression, leaving even the general speechless. Seeing it act more aggressive than a feral lioness, he shrunk his magic beast size to make it more manageable. Thinking that the miniature lion looked like an easy target, our little national treasure immediately flashed a look of pure malice and lunged in for a brutal scrap. Meanwhile, the general rushed over to inspect Sujun's condition, but the kid's complexion suggested things were taking a turn for the worse. Unexpectedly, the clash between the two magic beasts turned them into absolute menaces. From cratering the ground to shredding ancient tomes, even the friendship bracelets of Shri and Brown Hair were caught in the crossfire and snapped into pieces, causing the kid's little heart to instantly shatter, wanting to pass out just to escape the emotional damage. The moment the panda took a heavy hit, Sujun felt the impact too, suffering a violent gut-wrenching pain in her stomach immediately after. Then, for some reason, she coughed up crimson blood, making Brown Hair cry a river, fearing the child was at death's door. Even the general was baffled. Could a magic expansion really be this volatile? But the old physician arrived just in time, declaring it was poison. He quickly administered a vial of medicine. Though she struggled with the incredibly foul, bitter taste, the kid managed to tough it out, and then in a flash, it worked like a miracle potion. She felt incredibly refreshed the moment she finished downing it, leaving the physician bewildered, as the kid should have been, in excruciating agony while the medicine worked. Seeing Brown Hair sobbing and drowning in self-blame, the kid quickly moved to comfort her. Witnessing that heartwarming scene, the physician felt conflicted. There's no way a child this compassionate could be a villain, realizing he'd been completely played by that purple-haired teacher. Suddenly, Sujun slipped from Brown Hair's arms, only to faint on the other side for peak dramatic effect. But it was just the sedative taking hold. One night's rest would purge half the toxins from her system. But as for the remaining half, it's a gamble because she's currently in the middle of a forced evolution. Ascending to a higher demon class is definitely no walk in the park. Turning back to the battlefield, the two beasts were biting each other like savages when the lion suddenly looked as dazed as a dazed rhino, completely unable to pinpoint the panda's location. It turns out the panda had finally transcended its limits. Once Sujun regains consciousness, it will manifest once more, so he left the situation to the general. While the physician searched for an antidote to neutralize the lingering toxins, he charged toward that fraud teacher to demand answers, convinced this viper had poisoned the princess and no one else. Yet the villain acted as if he were weary of living, immediately confessing with a chillingly detached expression. It was a slow-acting venom he'd planted long ago, waiting for a magic evolution to ignite it. Ignoring the insults, he was stunned. His plan backfired so early, as it was intended for her 6th year. Who knew that at such a tender age the brat could already evolve her beast? Though he looked composed, he was internally terrified, because this is a literal cheat code, not just genius. But no one anticipated that even the flare-up of the Emperor's curse was also this man's twisted handiwork. He flashed a ghoulish, distorted smile, basking in the sick satisfaction of the masterpiece he had engineered, but he was truly on a suicide mission to trigger the curse twice. Miraculously, the Emperor survived. This sent the physician into a murderous frenzy, and he immediately reached for his own toxic vial to unleash its contents, but the villain merely mocked his desperate efforts, stating he had no right to be self-righteous because that poison was originally a creation of the physician himself. Hearing that caused him to explode in fury, denying the claim because he was manipulated and never intended to harm a single soul. But unexpectedly, the man he once trusted secretly unsheathed a hidden blade and drove it straight into the physician's gut, leaving the old man drowning in agonizing regret for having endangered an innocent child who is barely 3 years old and for causing such grievous harm to his esteemed emperor. At this time, Princess Pan was sneaking through the royal garden, casting paranoid glances in every direction. Only when she was certain the coast was clear did she feel safe enough to test her magic. Because currently, both the prince and Sujun have ascended to the next level, while she still hasn't even summoned her magic beast. So she was desperate to practice in secret. The moment the water rippled slightly, Pan was overjoyed that she could finally manifest her power. But as soon as it emerged, it splashed right back down, leaving her feeling utterly crushed. But before her sorrow could take root, a chilling laughter sliced through the air, giving her the fright of her life, as if she'd seen a phantom. But it was just that purple-haired snake gloating, because he's a total piece of work. Despite the physician being a legendary polymath with the most elite medical prowess in the realm, his combat magic is weaker than a newborn chick's. So the old man couldn't outrun him for long before the treacherous teacher buried a blade in his back. But that agonizing tragic scene was witnessed by Pan as she trembled, hidden deep within the dense foliage. The physician spotted the little girl and instantly panicked, pleading for her to run before the nightmare worsened. Pan obeyed and bolted, her heart heavy with the crushing realization of her own powerlessness, desperately seeking anyone who could save the dying physician. But it seemed she was already too late, as the purple-haired killer sensed her presence and gave chase. Fearing that Pan would be silenced forever, the old man mustered his final spark of life to release a toxic cloud, instantly causing the villain's face to contort in agony, though he retaliated with a brutal burst of magic. The strike sent the frail old man into instant unconsciousness as the predator resumed his hunt. For Pan, who was sprinting with every ounce of her strength, while her eyes were streaming with hot tears of pure, unadulterated terror. Seeing the sketch the prince had crafted for Sujun lying in tatters, Shri decided to score some points with his crush. So he unleashed restoration magic to make the drawing look pristine once again. Fortunately, after checking on Kon, he returned and realized this panda was far more volatile than the prince's own beast. The rest of the household was sound asleep. When Sujun was jolted awake by an ominous presence at the door, causing even Shri to startle because her sensory detection was significantly sharper than his own. The figure at the threshold was none other than the physician stumbling back with his body mangled and bloody. Knowing his life was fading fast, he brushed aside the identity of his attacker and lunged toward Sujun's bedside, the only mission that mattered now, and immediately produced a scroll detailing the secret method to purge the kid's poison. Though he couldn't guarantee its success, it was their only glimmer of hope. He gasped out frantic instructions explaining they must obtain the horn of a legendary creature, but suddenly vomited a torrent of blood and began to lose focus, his back a gruesome crimson mess. Shri immediately began a triage. Even the panda that had been snapping at the physician now looked on with a mix of curiosity and genuine fluster. The old man signaled that he was all right, reflecting on a life spent offending countless people. Ever since his 30s, he had showcased such superior genius that he became a magnet for jealousy and spite, with enemies constantly praying for his downfall because he always carried himself as the undisputed best and was never wrong, earning him a long list of foes. Luckily, the emperor always cherished him, but now he had finally betrayed that royal trust by letting a traitor get too close. Gazing at the unconscious child's face, the physician used his final breath to whisper a desperate apology. But just as his eyes fluttered shut, he remembered Pan's peril and gasped out a final warning, causing our arrogant panda to actually tear up at the heartbreaking sight. Shri quickly carried the physician to find the emperor and beg for high-level healing magic, leaving his crow behind with a strict order to guard the house. As soon as the crow perched near Sujun, the kid finally blinked awake. Seeing brown hair suddenly dissolved in tears made Sujun's own heart sink like a stone, unable to comprehend why she felt this strange hollow sense of heartbreak. Pan was pushing her body to the breaking point, sprinting toward the palace. Just a few more yards and she'd reach Kon's safety, but luck was against her as the purple-haired devil closed the gap. Fortunately, the little bunny inside the palace sensed the encroaching darkness and bolted, leaving the prince bewildered. Trusting the little bunny's instincts, Kon could do nothing but chase after it into the night. Suddenly, 2 sentries materialized, baffled as to why the prince was prowling the grounds in the dead of night again. He curtly commanded them to assist in tracking down his rogue bunny. The moment she caught a glimpse of Kon's silhouette, Pan was overwhelmed with relief and shrieked for help. This sent the purple-haired snake into a frantic panic. He couldn't afford to be exposed now. He instantly wove a sinister spell to summon a spectral serpent to intercept her. And just like that, Pan was ensnared by the magic beast, her desperate cries muffled by its suffocating coils. She was silenced, rendered unable to scream or signal for a rescue. They were lurking mere inches behind Kon, yet he remained completely oblivious to the lurking danger, giving the traitor the perfect opening to manipulate the serpent and abduct the child. With no future left in the Luala kingdom, he intended to sell Pan out as a tribute to buy his way into the Kai kingdom. As for the bunny, it sensed the impending disaster and desperately tried to signal the alarm. Finally, following the frantic rabbit's lead, the group decided to investigate the gathering shadows. That's when they discovered the bunny aggressively gnawing on the purple-haired man's face. He snarled at the creature, claiming such lowly behavior was beneath him since he still held a prestigious title. The snake then donned a mask of tragic sorrow, acting as if he were a broken man since being fired as Kon's tutor. This triggered the prince's guilt. After all, he still blamed himself for Sujun's injuries. He felt the man had been punished enough. However, the bunny's instincts were far more reliable. Usually a timid creature that shies away from everyone, it was now purely hostile toward the tutor, fearing he'd strike again. The man maintained his pathetic facade, though his hand reflexively reached out as if to soothe the beast. Hearing his excuses, the boy feigned satisfaction and turned to leave, causing the traitor to smirk. He marveled at how effortlessly the prince could be manipulated. But before taking 3 steps, Kon's intuition screamed that something was deeply wrong as he spotted a clue on the earth. He pivoted back with the gaze of cold steel, demanding to know if the man had seen Princess Pan. The mention of her name made the snake flinch, knowing he was on the verge of being exposed, but he masked it with a hollow laugh. But fooling a prince isn't that simple. He immediately barked a command for his men to apprehend the traitorous tutor. While the man feigned the role of a timid victim being wrongfully accused on the outside, in reality, a lethal surge of magic was swirling within the hand concealed behind his back. Cone shifted into full Sherlock Holmes mode to analyze the evidence he'd uncovered. It was Pan's cherished fan lying abandoned and forgotten in the dirt. This was a priceless heirloom gifted by her birth parents when she was a mere toddler. She never let it out of her sight for a single second. There was zero chance she'd just abandon it here. Therefore, despite the man's flat-out denial of seeing her, the math wasn't adding up. This purple-haired rat was definitely hiding something. And then he faced the prince's true soul-crushing aura. The tutor was shaken. Cone was no longer the frail, sickly chick he once toyed with. He unleashed the stolen toxins he'd pilfered from the physician's lab in a desperate, venomous counterattack. The servants lunged forward to shield the prince, only to be engulfed by that searing, poisonous inferno. Seeing the grotesque purple flames made Cone's heart shatter into a million pieces, his eyes overflowing with tears of burning rage and grief. But the pain meant nothing to the guards, as this was their ultimate chance to prove their unwavering loyalty to the prince. Seeing the two sentries begin to buckle, the purple-haired coward chose to flee rather than risk a direct clash with Cone. Meanwhile, in the Kai Empire, the king was busy harvesting a magic beast from a broken man on the floor. He was siphoning the power into Ni, granting him a terrifying new reservoir of raw strength. Yet, he was a cruel master, refusing to let the boy process the trauma for more than 3 days. That oblivious green scholar actually believed this was a grand gesture of fatherly love, thinking the king was incredibly generous for gifting a beast he'd spent decades cultivating. He commanded Ne to force a synchronization with the creature which had been a dominant force of nature 30 years ago, a beast that once sowed absolute chaos across the heavens. He wanted the boy to unleash that carnage once more and prepare to execute Cone and Sujun during the promotion exams. The green scholar, blindly loyal, only worried that the ritual would drain the king's own stamina. As for the innocent lives being sacrificed or the broken old man, he didn't give a single damn if they rotted in hell right now. But Ne wasn't a monster like the others. He checked on the old man's well-being and offered a sincere apology. He never intended to usurp his magic beast, and he certainly didn't expect it to be a literal dragon. Leaving the old man floored, it turns out he was a fellow transmigrator. He'd been rotting in this dungeon for decades due to the king's insatiable greed, and he suddenly gripped Ni's hand, suspecting Ni was also a soul from another world because people here mistakenly call his dragon a giant snake. Ni was left dazed, but before he could wrap his head around it, a spatial rift suddenly tore open, summoning him away. As he gazed at the chaotic scene on the other side, he knew this was a portal linked directly to the Luala kingdom, and he had to handle the crisis there first. Stepping through, he was immediately greeted by the punchable face of that purple-haired rat, while his serpentine beast was still ruthlessly coiling around Princess Pan. Recalling his last stealthy infiltration, he remembered hiding in the brush when brown hair and Shri appeared. But since he was wounded back then, he hadn't known how to vanish without being detected. In that split second, the purple-haired traitor recognized Ni as the 17th prince of the Kai kingdom. Seeing the boy on high alert and ready to scrap, the man confidently put his trash personality on display, boasting about being a Luala traitor whose loyalty was for sale to Kai, acting like it was a badge of honor. With one glance, Ne identified the red ruby around the man's neck as the stolen property of the Kai king. Desperate to suck up to the prince, the guy quickly opened the spatial portal to ensure his safe return, which genuinely caught Ne off guard, as such a connection requires a tethered object at the destination. He couldn't believe such an unprofessional, hideous-looking goon was actually entrusted with this much power. Ne cut straight to the chase. Why am I here? I've got a packed schedule and zero time for this. And didn't pull any punches when he saw Pan captive. Should I call the guards, you some kind of creep? The traitor intended to use Ne as his golden ticket. He was done being a double agent and wanted a high-ranking seat in Kai. But this desperate simp knew too much. He knew Ne had been sneaking into Luala, so he couldn't be allowed to reach Kai alive. So, Ne set a trap with an impossible demand, knowing the king viewed useless pawns as disposable garbage, claiming that if he could successfully abduct Princess Sujun, then he would truly prove his worth. Hearing this made the purple-haired snake smirk, not expecting Ne to be so cold-blooded toward the girl who once saved him. He hadn't realized that such a formidable child was actually just a tiny girl who lacked even basic purification magic. But this purple-haired villain had been playing the long game. While she was distracted with practice, he'd secretly laced her with toxins, so he could confidently brag that the girl wouldn't even survive to see her 10th birthday. Therefore, she was already a walking corpse. Upon hearing that, Ne's expression turned icy as he radiated a suffocating, killing intent. Yet he maintained his icy facade, insisting he verify Sujun's condition personally before making his exit. He adopted a menacing tone, warning the man that if he wanted a glowing recommendation to the king, he'd better fall in line. This made the guy tremble like a kicked puppy with its tail between its legs, left with no choice but to obey. He led Ni to witness Sujun's agony. Today was the day the first wave of poison truly ignited, undoubtedly the most torturous day for the child. Seeing the man point at the panda and call it a puppy gave the boy a massive, "what the hell is wrong with you" moment. But setting that aside, seeing a fragile 3-year-old enduring such excruciating pain made Nay's heart bleed. As the heavens opened and the rain began to lash down, the purple-haired rat became visibly restless, itching to return and claim his blood money, but Nay wasn't about to let him off that easy. Ni began spinning a web of excuses to stall the man and pin him to the spot, noting that Sujun was currently guarded only by a defenseless maid with 0 magic skills. It was the perfect moment to strike. He commanded the man to go in and finish the girl off once and for all. The guy hesitated for a second, knowing that if he crossed that line, the Emperor would hunt him to the ends of the earth, but lured by such a tantalizing offer that this kill would buy him a seat at the high table in the Kai kingdom. The cunning Nay dangled the prestigious royal teacher title as the ultimate bait. The man was ecstatic. Blinded by greed, he charged in like a rabid dog to end Sujun's life. The very second his magic beast followed its master into the fray, it finally released Pan, and Ni lunged forward to catch the falling girl. Knowing his magic beast was stolen from another and might despise him, he still begged for its power in this life-or-death emergency. Immediately summoning a juvenile dragon with a head as round as a sphere, he stroked its crown, pleading for it to whisk Pan to safety because his presence was required elsewhere. Yet the hatchling didn't reject Ni. Perhaps it was just a total simp for a handsome face, as its cheeks flushed with joy. He was dead set on ensuring that purple simping rat didn't get a chance to breathe, let alone snitch. After witnessing its master depart, the baby dragon immediately pivoted to the mission. It was assigned coiling its tail around Pan's leg and dragging her away with sheer clumsy effort. All for the grind, and for its gorgeous master, it pushed itself to the absolute limit. Harboring a toxic surge of resentment, the traitor blamed Sujun for the loss of his prestigious teaching post. Even the heavy sin of murdering the physician was being pinned squarely on the kid. He finally dropped the act, revealing his hideous face, obsessed with exacting his revenge. While Sujun was still drifting in slumber, he commanded his serpent to devour her. But as the snake lunged, materialized from the shadows, seizing the opening to launch a lethal sneak attack. But it turned out that intervention was totally overkill because our national treasure had already snapped her eyes open and delivered a haymaker that sent the snake crashing into the wall. How dare you kill the vibe? The purple-haired coward jumped in a blind panic. Good lord, this brat has a total hair trigger temper. But it wasn't just the panda. Even Sujun reacted with lightning speed, ordering her beast to finish off this purple-headed trash. Even Brown Hair the maid had been wide awake for a while, leaving Ni completely dumbfounded. They likely knew from the jump and only faked their sleep to bait him into a final fatal move. Shree's crows finally found their moment to shine, diving in to relentlessly peck at the serpent. The other 2 birds erected a barrier to shield the group, but due to her freakish constitution, Sujun absorbed most of the mana. This left the 2 little birds dazed, unable to comprehend what was happening. Could it be that the panda had finally unleashed its full inner thug? It immediately lunged forward to shred the purple-haired guy's face. Sujun, refusing to be sidelined, immediately used her magic-infused fist to charge into the fray. But getting tagged by small animals only happened because he'd underestimated them like a fool. The old weakling is dead. Now the purple-haired villain donned his final boss mask and began to flex his true potential, expanding his family's oppressive magical aura. After the panda was blown back, he immediately traced a sinister magical circle of hellfire and aimed the devastating blast straight at Sujun. Just as she was cornered and about to be incinerated by the impact, Ni abruptly intervened and pulled the kid into his protective embrace, leaving Sujun completely and utterly bewildered. But the purple-haired rat was 10 times more confused by the betrayal. Surprise! Na buried a magic pack punch straight into his solar plexus, forcing the traitor to cough up blood in bitter disbelief. He never expected to fall for such a trap. But this was the ultimate way to safeguard the truth. After all, dead men tell no tales. With its soul-linked master extinguished, the giant serpent vanished into thin air instantly. But Nay wasn't faring much better, having just forcibly bound a stolen magic beast, and exhausted a massive amount of mana, triggering a violent backlash. Seeing Sujun reaching out to tend to him, the boy recoiled and avoided her touch. Because she is the princess of the Luala Empire, he pinned the kill squarely on the kid's head, leaving Sujun staring in total shock. Clearly, Nay was the one who did the dirty work, yet he shamelessly forced her to take the fall and asserted his dominance. claiming that if he says Sujun did it, then Sujun did it. No debate, no arguments allowed. The entire chaotic sequence was recorded from start to finish by the keen eyes of Shree's crows. But Maid didn't expect the girl to go so far as to actually agree to take the heat for him. Just as he prepared to vanish, Sujun quickly dashed up and seized the boy's hand, desperate to heal his wounds. But this trivial bit of pain is nothing, compared to the hell Nee's old man has put him through since he was a child. But witnessing the kid's radiant smile as she vowed to keep his secret safe, the boy froze in a daze, struck by how much she resembled that person from his past life, and found himself unable to look away. This child was a living memory of his girlfriend, back in the modern 21st century, leaving the girl's brain lagging in confusion. This brat is barely 7. So where on earth did he find a girlfriend to be moping over? She snapped back to reality and tried to heal his wounds while sneakily poking his chest, flustering the boy so badly he bolted. Luckily, Brown Hair intervened, teasing that such flirting would leave her husbandless. Nee sprinted to where the baby dragon had stashed Pan, unaware the crow was still tailing him, and gave the hatchling a head pat, before channeling his mana to flash dry the girl's soaked garments. Once he confirmed she was out of harm's way, he vanished just as a faint mumble drifted out. "Bunny, come back." It was pure luck that the trader's teleportation array, despite his death, remained stable for a few moments, allowing him to quickly step through the rift to return home, lest he be caught and spark a royal scandal. And sure enough, the moment the boy disappeared, the bunny led the prince straight to the clearing where Pan lay, and he quickly shook her awake. The second cone touched the girl. He noticed her clothes were bone dry, proving someone had just placed her there. Then the realization hit him like a lightning bolt. The old physician was still in mortal danger. Meanwhile, in Sujun's chambers, Brown Hair was reeling that the kid intended to take the fall for that boy. After all, there's a corpse right in her room, and the blame couldn't possibly rest on a maid. It wasn't a total disaster since the purple-haired rat had already confessed to murdering the physician. So even if Nay hadn't delivered vigilante justice, Sujun was prepared to end the man herself to settle the score. But eyeing the gruesome wounds on the traitor, the kid struggled to decide if she should claim a punch or a kick. Was the killing blow finally settling on the idea to pin the whole homicide on the panda? Leaving the little furball stunned, who even plays dirty like this? She then coerced her tiny pet into stepping in a pool of blood with its paws to make the beast attack more believable. Ignoring its frantic protest while completing the setup, Brown Hair suddenly broke into a theatrical scream, feigning terror that a child like Sujun would dare stand so close to a fresh corpse. She wasn't bothered before, but the comment suddenly gave the kid the absolute creeps, and they immediately clung to each other to survive the fright. Both of them began imagining vengeful spirits, and demons sending a cold shiver down even the brave panda's spine. Pan then reported that the physician had been backstabbed by that double-crossing snake, sending Cone into a state of shock. But before he could react, a piercing shriek echoed from Sujun's room. Terrified that the purple simping villain had returned to finish the girl off, they all charged in together to play the hero. At that moment, Shree's crow returned to report that the target had been neutralized by a mysterious boy to protect Sujun. Turns out, they had been monitoring the entire chaos, treating the ordeal as a secret test for Cone, which he passed with flying colors, not only securing the evidence, but also framing the traitor leaving the Emperor. Amazed at how much his son had evolved, not only growing more composed, but also taking the initiative to shield others. He let out a satisfied smile. Having just crossed back knee was drenched in blood, causing the white-haired elder to jump in alarm. It was nothing major, just that the purple-haired target had been dealt with, causing the array to glitch during his return. However, the elder only asked out of habit, as he didn't truly wish to meddle in the affairs of the younger generation, because his own clock was ticking down. As the baby dragon joyfully lunged toward him, the severed bond triggered a violent magical rejection, sending the hatchling tumbling back. A magic beast is an extension of one's own soul, essentially a fragment of the master's essence. So when the dragon tried to re-merge with him, it resulted in a painful clash. He used his wooden staff to keep the two separated and officially handed the creature over to Nee. On the surface, a magic beast is a mirror of the master's temperament and bloodline. But at the end of the day, it's merely a construct forged from pure mana. Hearing that, Nee finally understood. His true magic beast is essentially a manifestation of his future self, which implies that a day will eventually come when the two must part ways. But after settling that, the boy quickly pivoted to ask about the baby dragon's name and Sujun's panda. Discovering that a legendary national treasure had surfaced in this western realm left the old man absolutely floored with shock. He immediately deduced the kid must be a transmigrator, since one's beast is a reflection of their own innate attributes, meaning the people of this world could never conceive of a panda, let alone know of its existence. The baby dragon was resting peacefully on Nee's shoulder when the old man suddenly seized the boy's hand, accidentally sending the dragon tumbling into the distance, to the middle of nowhere as he was gripped by a frantic need to deliver a warning. Even if he dies, Ne must never let a soul find out that he is a transmigrator. This made him reel, never expecting to find another person here just like himself. But suddenly, the man began coughing up blood, realizing his clock had finally run out, and he wished to ask Ne for one final favor as the baby dragon's former master. If the opportunity ever arises, he hoped Ne would seek out the queen of the Qiantian Empire. She was his one true love. Though they were torn apart decades ago, her image remained etched perfectly in his mind. She was a radiant beauty whose magic beast took the form of a majestic fire phoenix. Until his final breath, he never stopped yearning for her. Witnessing this, he felt a wave of empathy, realizing how much the woman meant to the dying old man, and he quickly moved forward to help him close his eyes in peace. According to the historical records he'd studied, the Qiantian Empire had been completely decimated. Many years ago, when a coalition of nations joined forces in a total war, everyone except the Kai Empire was involved. In a single night, that mighty superpower collapsed into ruins, and the queen was seized by the late emperor of the Luala kingdom to serve as his concubine, which is why she harbored a hatred that burned to her very core. At this moment, Conan Pan rushed frantically to find Sujun. But instead of a happy reunion, the kid was in a state of total panic because she hadn't scrubbed the evidence yet. The crime scene was wide open, making Pan glimpse a corpse for the very first time, sending her into a piercing shriek of terror. This left Sujun flustered, terrified that these gruesome sights would psychologically scar the other kids. Who knows what the panda was thinking? But it tried to snap them out of it by smacking the bunny right across the face. However, the most effective way was simply gagging it to block the noise, to prevent more screaming. Even though Kon was shaking in his boots too, he refused to show a single weakness in front of Sujun and forced himself to man up. He put on that cool guy facade, which honestly made the kid's heart skip a beat, because in that moment he looked exactly like the formidable emperor. After bullying someone's bunny and nearly burying it, the panda finally stood down, perhaps sensing the diversion was no longer needed. Even Pan, though she was trembling like a leaf, was determined to be useful and pushed herself harder. Since Sujun is younger, yet remained fearless, so she felt she had to endure it as well. This touched the kid deeply. This was truly the definition of a god-tier friendship. She had no idea how to repay their loyalty, but despite being moved, she couldn't let these two get dragged into the abyss, because last time just bruising a teacher led to a brutal punishment. This time, a dead body would never be ignored, so she turned down their help, and prepared to shoulder the entire burden herself because Sujun had discovered that the purple-haired trader's family was a high-ranking, powerful clan, and his father had even saved the emperor's life in the past. Worse, the purple-haired guy was their only heir, so his death would undoubtedly ignite a massive scandal. Seeing that the girl was trying to protect them from the fallout, Kon stood his ground and shouted with authority that true friends must share both the glory and the nightmare. Radiating the aura of a true sovereign, he vowed never to abandon his comrades in their darkest hour, and even Pan chimed in, admitting she felt useless but refusing to be left behind ever again. If Cloud were present, she would undoubtedly double down on this risky decision. Just as Pan suspected, she had been observing everyone from the shadows underground this whole time, silently acting as the ultimate cheerleader for her comrades. Freckles immediately cautioned her against overexerting her mana any further. But in this moment, Cloud felt a surge of bliss, knowing that even if they were separated or in peril, the four of them would remain eternally tethered, a realization that moved Freckles to his core. He pulled his little sister into a tight embrace, realizing she had finally lowered her guard to let others in. But Cloud was built different, vowing to train so intensely that even from the depths her butterflies could protect them. So with their pact sealed, Sujun resolved to simply wing it and improvise when the inevitable confrontation arrived. But when the Emperor made his sudden entrance, they were paralyzed with shock yet didn't forget to desperately scramble forward and confess to the crime, creating a chaotic mess of overlapping voices. Everyone had their own agenda. Kon stepped to the front, insisting that as a man he should take the fall. But Pan protested that since she was the most expendable, she should be the one to endure the punishment. Only Sujun, leaning into her top-tier acting skills, clung to the Emperor's leg and wailed to claim total responsibility. This left him stunned, never expecting such fierce loyalty from mere children, so he closed his eyes to channel his magic. He gave the kids a genuine heart attack. They were convinced they'd just earned a one-way ticket to the afterlife. But unexpectedly, that overwhelming surge of power manifested into a spectral hand, gently patting Pan's head, while two other hands offered silent comfort to Kon and Sujun. This sight brought a flood of tears to everyone's eyes. They never dreamed the Emperor would one day dispense his affection so equally and harbor such profound care for them all. The children were left completely breathless with emotion, especially Sujun, who finally saw the Emperor's true colors. He was far more compassionate than she had ever dared to imagine. He then commanded Brownhair to escort the trio back to Kone's chambers and stay by their side through the night. As for Shri, he was stuck on janitorial duty before accompanying the Emperor to confront the Purple Clan. While Brownhair was setting up the beds, she felt the piercing heavy gazes of the little ones following her. But the second she questioned them, they all activated their innocent angel modes and denied everything. Despite claiming they were fine the moment she moved to grab an extra pillow to sleep on the floor. They gave a verbal okay, but their intense lingering stares left Brownhair completely speechless. Their heads were shaking no, with enough force to snap their necks while their hands death-gripped her skirt. Tears welled in Brownhair's eyes, assuming the kids were still traumatized. After all, they're far too young for such horrors. She decided to test the waters, asking if they'd prefer she stayed put instead of getting more blankets. Sure enough, it was exactly the green light the little ones wanted. Their eyes sparkled as they nodded like bobbleheads. That was the master plan all along. If she hadn't folded, they would have just kept spamming their cuteness. The kids weaponized their most adorable faces, clutching Brownhair's skirt and pleading for her to stay. But then the grumpy-faced general marched in to stand guard over them while they slumbered, since a high-level magic user would be far safer. But in total contrast to their previous sweet act, they all immediately flashed expressions of pure, unbridled disgust that they couldn't even bother to hide. This forced him to swap shifts with the handsome Shri to guard the door. On the outside, he played it cool, but internally, his tears were a literal ocean of rejection. While the kids were snug and drifting off, Shri suddenly sat at the head of the bed muttering to himself, causing Brownhair, who was already snoring, a way to be violently jolted awake by the noise. That's when she made the gruesome discovery that Shri's hand was bleeding profusely. It looked more mangled than grilled meat slathered in chili sauce. The moment he saw her panic, he gestured for absolute silence so the children wouldn't be disturbed. So the two retreated to the garden to swap places. Brownhair quickly began dressing Shri's gnarly wound. Tears started to stream, but for him, these flesh wounds were trivial compared to the Emperor's, as last night was pure mayhem. Sujun, lurking in the bushes and giggling, was convinced her sister had snuck out for a secret moonlit date. But her heart skipped a beat when she saw Brownhair scream in horror because the Emperor had been mauled while raiding the Purple family's estate, which sent the kid into a spiral of genuine worry. Shri wore a mask of melancholy as he recounted the tale, for the Emperor is a man of peerless loyalty and honor. However, the patriarch of the Purple family was the very man who once saved his life. So, last night, facing their entire treacherous clan, he refused to dodge his benefactor's lethal blade, allowing himself to be maimed, a revelation that left everyone in a state of absolute shock. The Emperor didn't even flinch. This was the blood debt he had yearned to repay since that fateful day, considering their bond of gratitude officially severed and the slate wiped clean. Recalling a decade ago when the late Emperor and Empress perished, the kingdom was plunged into total ruin. With all his siblings slaughtered, Emperor Shizuli was left isolated to face a bloodthirsty mob, who intended to use a single cold blade to send him to the afterlife to join his parents. Just when it seemed he was too broken to resist and was merely awaiting his execution, a glowing purple magic circle abruptly intercepted the strike. It was the Elder from the Purple family who intervened and spared the Emperor's life. If not for that moment, he wouldn't be standing here today, so that ancient debt had to be settled with this single brutal stab. The Emperor, completely unfazed by the agony, snapped the sword in half with his bare hands, leaving the old man reeling because he never expected the sovereign to go to such extremes. He summoned his magic beast with a suffocating aura, asserting that purging that piece of human trash was an act of absolute justice. The moment the news broke that his heir was a traitor, the entire city was thrown into a state of frenzy. The masses were drowning in gossip and confusion, but it wasn't just that one delusional idiot. Even the young prodigies of the clan, the supposed future of the family, were revealed to be turncoats, manipulating public opinion and gaining up to launch a coordinated assault on the three of them. One coward skulking in the corner thought the Emperor was bluffing by bringing only 3 men. He didn't realize Shizuli was no pushover, but a master strategist who knew the rat had conspired with dozens of nations to act as a mole. A literal snake in the grass, he used his magic to summon an elite mercenary army from rival empires. The reason this loser sold out his country was utterly pathetic. He was gifted, but felt his genius was being overlooked by the crown. So he turned traitor, obsessively plotting to commit regicide against his own king. But this was light work. The Emperor knew the clan was infested with rats and used this as a golden opportunity to exterminate them. The general hadn't even swung his blade a dozen times before the enemy was already screaming for reinforcements, because the kill count was skyrocketing at a dizzying, terrifying pace. But it was a cakewalk, because this mob only had the numbers they possessed, 0 actual quality. The 3 of them stood back to back, radiating confidence that they would soon claim the traitor's head. Mid-hype, the general suddenly dropped a grim buzzkill. The other two are young and reckless, but he's got one foot in the grave and actually values his life. Truly, the lord of mood killers and the king of negativity, leaving the other two unable to mask their pure disgust. Seeing Brown Hair looking paralyzed with fear because she couldn't fathom 3 people tanking hundreds of soldiers, Dree played the ultimate heartthrob, patting her head to soothe her and whispering that the nightmare was over. But that sentiment was only for the lovebirds. Sujun was internally spiraling, desperate to check on the Emperor's status. Meanwhile, the scholar transformed into a nagging mother, treating the wounds while roasting the Emperor for being reckless. Yet he felt zero remorse and told him to shut it, making the scholar lose his mind. Acting like he didn't hear a single word, the scholar vented his frustration on the Emperor's back, which was a roadmap of deep cuts, making the Emperor feel like he was about to walk into the light. "You've been my scholar a bit too long, old friend." But this was a sweet punishment. If he didn't value his own safety, then these agonizing wounds meant nothing. She finally arrived, but remained hidden in the brush to eavesdrop on their private conversation. It was because the lacerations were so severe and deep that only physical medicine could help the wounds finally scab over. Hearing that caused the kid's eyes to flood with tears. She never expected him to be so brutally mangled. Hearing Sujun's voice, the Emperor frantically threw his robes on to conceal the gruesome injuries on his body. Seeing the kid so genuinely distressed about his health, and coming all this way just to check on him, it made the usually cold and sidelined Emperor feel a rare spark of happiness. But before the heartwarming moment could even settle instantly, his expression hardened, barking at her about why she was loitering instead of doing her laps. He slapped another 10 laps onto her sentence until her legs fall off, ensuring she wouldn't have time to be a royal busybody, leaving Sujun so terrified she could only obey and bolt. Seeing her run like that, the Emperor must be fine. But before she could escape, the Emperor abruptly coughed up blood, causing the girl to freeze before instantly crying out in panicked concern. Her small face was a mask of pure anxiety, but instead of welcoming her warmth like he usually would, the Emperor refused to let Sujun witness his frailty, so he unleashed a spell to forcibly whisk her away. Sujun was instantly engulfed by a mountain of blankets and pillows that materialized from thin air to carry her off. No matter how much she thrashed, leaving even the panda struggling to keep pace, those blankets cocooned the kid into a ball. And just like that, she vanished, being teleported at high speed straight back to her private chambers. Fortunately, Brown Hair was there to catch her just in the nick of time. Otherwise, she would have taken a nasty tumble. Sujun was safe, but she remained completely dazed by the experience. Normally, external magic has zero effect on the kid's unique body, yet she had been evicted so effortlessly. She scanned the room and saw bedsheets scattered everywhere. Essentially, the Emperor had used physical objects as a proxy for his spell to eject Sujun, so the magic manipulated the fabric instead of the girl, meaning there was no energy for her to absorb. The Emperor's desperation to send her back made the kid realize he was merely hiding his pain to spare her heart. She double-checked with Brown Hair to confirm that the Emperor was only 25, a fact that left her absolutely stunned. Throughout all these years, Sujun had subconsciously viewed him as a venerable father figure, forgetting that in her previous life she had already reached 22, making their age gap practically non-existent. Yet this young Emperor was already carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. The scholar helped him to his feet. Even with a crimson stain still on his lips, he maintained his stoic, "I'm fine" facade, making the old man let out a knowing, soft chuckle. He's grown into a powerful sovereign now, but is still like a vulnerable child, never daring to show his true emotions to a soul. Naturally, it's all because he can't bear the thought of Sujun drowning in worry over his health. Since his own childhood, the Emperor was starved of affection from his father and openly loathed by his biological mother. Every single day he had to mask his misery and play the happy child just to earn a fleeting smile from her. But his parents didn't give a damn, merely playing out their twisted roles as the cold CEO and his captive canary. When he first felt his heart stir for Empress Ware, he was completely clueless about how to express his devotion. It's only because of the kid's arrival that he's changing. Though he's still a novice at love, he can finally show a hint of weakness. So the scholar resumed his broken record lecture, sternly reminding the Emperor to be gentler with his own heart. The Emperor knew exactly how he should cherish the children, but he flashed a stubborn look as if to say, "So what?" leaving the scholar to simply laugh it off. Truly the absolute ruler of the realm, doing exactly as he pleases. But the atmosphere suddenly turned suffocatingly heavy when the Emperor ordered the funeral for the physician. It was a bleak, stormy night. Only a handful of loyal souls were scattered about the grounds to attend the final rites. It was only in that somber moment that Sujun realized how profoundly lonely the physician's life had truly been. Just as the ancient proverb goes, the one who stands at the absolute peak of glory is fated to stand alone. That day, Sujun also caught a glimpse of something chilling when she saw Jen appear with an unnervingly gentle expression. But when the kid tried to find someone to explain the change, everyone avoided her gaze like the plague, as if the mere mention of that persona was a forbidden taboo. Following that came the burial of her devoted servants, just outside the towering obsidian walls of the Imperial Palace. Not long after, Cone was finally able to delete dragon blood from his daily regimen. With the physician gone, the boy's vitality began to resurge and his health steadily stabilized. Suddenly, a baby dragon materialized and rushed toward Cone with a joyful wag, acting like a pampered pet. But the very second it turned around, it flipped into full battle mode against its rival panda. This left the bunny completely flustered while trying to play peacemaker between the two feuding beasts. It was obvious to everyone that this baby dragon was absolutely obsessed with the prince. Shri patted the boy's head, telling Cone he must cherish this dragon forever since he had been sustained by its lifeblood for 3 long years, meaning the two of them now shared an unbreakable soul-compatible bond. Therefore, the creature became Cone's second source of power. A magic beast is usually the crystallization of one's own mana, but there exists another rare path to union, which is through a sacred soul contract. Very few individuals possess the mental fortitude to command 2 magic beasts, as there are only 2 ways to achieve it. The first is by seizing one by force, which is not only barbaric but also lethally dangerous for both master and beast. Naturally, the emperor would never allow his own flesh and blood to be placed in such a high-stakes, perilous situation. The second way is by nurturing the beast from its infancy, so it develops a profound love for its master and chooses to submit, sealing the soul contract. Meanwhile, our cheeky little national treasure teased the innocent bunny. "Watch out, buddy looks like you're officially being replaced," sending the bunny into a crying fit until Cone panicked and coddled it, swearing he was only joking. But Pan's heart broke for the rabbit. Was it really so inadequate that the prince required a second beast? Shri knew this bunny was far too fragile for a future king like Cone, so the emperor had already meticulously paved a more formidable path for the boy. Sujun finally grasped why he was so obsessed with upgrading the prince's magic beast. After all, it was a move made purely for Cone's survival. She also understood why Pan's face was clouded with such heavy sorrow, fearing that she might be the next one discarded, since that bunny was viewed as nothing more than a useless, unwanted stray. But Cone wasn't the type of cold-blooded ruler to ditch a loyal friend for a shiny new toy, declaring that his little bunny was more than enough and he didn't need a second beast for anything. Because the prince sensed a hidden power within this little guy, he trusted it just as Sujun had placed her trust in him. Witnessing the two of them bonding so passionately made the baby dragon's heart shatter in rejection. It was a touching scene, but to secure this rare dragonling, the emperor had nearly lost his life being hunted by its monstrous mother. Yet he appeared and granted his approval without a hint of regret, only demanding they crush the intermediate exam. Hearing that challenge, the trio shouted in a unified roar of determination and immediately accepted. But could they actually pull it off? Challenge accepted. From that day forward, Sujun and the two boys pushed themselves to the limit with their grueling drills, until she marched into the kitchen to prep poultry honey in hand. No longer the girl who wept for chickens, but now a predator waiting for the panda to flame grill one so she could apply the honey glaze herself. Then she proudly presented her spoils of war to the emperor for his royal tasting. After conquering the kitchen, she turned her sights toward brutally dismantling the straw practice dummies. But through that destruction, she discovered the real reason the emperor forbade them from shredding the servants' work. Because it was Shri and Brown Hair who pulled all-nighters until the crack of dawn to stitch them back together. Truly a pair of human-powered manufacturing machines. In just a few hours, they finished the repairs and headed back, leaving our Shri reminiscing about those long nights together, which felt more like secret dates than actual labor. So the kids lurking in the bushes hatched a destructive plan to play matchmaker. No sooner said than done. The next day, they went on a rampage, tearing everything to shreds without a single care for the consequences. Leaving Shri buried under a mountain of straw, Brown Hair, noticing the dwindling supply of strawmen, suggested they work even later than usual tonight. He caught the green light and immediately accepted the overtime with a smirk. Finally, thanks to the kids' meddling, they got a front row seat to some dog food romance. Time flew like a stray dog sprinting across a field, with only 3 days remaining until the big exam. Unlike before when they feared they'd be trained to death, were surprisingly granted time to rest and paint to soothe their minds under Shri's perfectionist guidance, with every stroke meticulously critiqued. He claimed that with his method, anyone could produce a masterpiece. But just as she began to think painting was a walk in the park, Shri suddenly unleashed Step 4, and boom! He had conjured something breathtakingly beautiful out of nowhere. This left an average artist like Sujun salty. Hold up. The jump from Step 3 to 4 is a total scam, bro. Yet Pan managed to master those elite skills and drew a flawless self-portrait. Before she could even process the awe, she glanced at Cone, who had rendered himself like a classic work of art, leaving the girl weeping internally. It turns out she was the only noob in the squad. Princess Pan was the undisputed MVP, far outclassing the boys, though Kone's artistic talent was certainly nothing to sneeze at. Only Sujun's canvas was a disaster. Was this supposed to be a portrait, or just a vague suggestion of a face? It looked less like royalty and more like a crude sketch of a prehistoric caveman. Shri tried to bolster the kid's spirits, warning her that a hideous drawing would haunt her later. Hearing that she wouldn't be punished with extra laps, she shrugged it off. A little ugliness was fine, but baby, you're way too naive. Because those portraits are exactly how they'll appear during the intermediate exam, regardless of their protests. Sujun was baffled as to why her looks were being graded by a sketch for an exam, so she sought an explanation from the wise Shri. Turns out, while royals receive royal seeds, they are practically prisoners within the palace until they secure their intermediate license. The revelation left the kid's brain lagging. She was effectively grounded by the crown for lacking intermediate rank, yet the only way to earn that rank was to venture outside for the trial. It was a classic catch-22, which was exactly why they were currently sweating bullets over their art lessons. Realizing the girl was still lost in the sauce, Shri decided to flex channeling a surge of mana into the parchment. The paper suddenly jerked to life. Seeing her own distorted, hideous reflection twitching like a vengeful poltergeist on the page, the kid was absolutely traumatized. Those sketches weren't just drawings, they were sentient greetings. Shri then manipulated his magic to mold them into disturbingly cute yet monstrous dolls, leaving everyone jaw-dropped as they watched the paper come to life. It wasn't just a parlor trick. They could actually navigate and mimic the movements of living beings. The royal children were forbidden from leaving, but these paper proxies faced no such restrictions. Fortunately, this was merely a rough draft. On the actual day of the exam, Shri would polish them to perfection and tether their souls to the dolls so they could finally breach the Imperial gates. Finally, the gears in Sujun's head clicked, and she began to see the big picture. The intermediate exam was essentially a high-stakes battle royale between paper avatars. Kone immediately assumed the big brother role, warning the girl that she'd better draw herself pretty if she didn't want to fight in such a cursed form. Apparently, the doll had a soul. Being roasted for its looks caused it to snap, and it lunged to bite Kone, but luckily, before it could draw a single drop of royal blood, the bunny viciously decapitated the paper person with its teeth. This sent a shiver down Sujun's spine, seeing as that paper person was technically her own twin. But the one truly caught in a tremor was Kone's doll, which began shaking like a leaf in the wind. It was even more horrified when the panda lost its cool to avenge its pint-sized master, throwing a devastating haymaker that sent the bunny on a one-way trip to the afterlife to reflect on its life choices. Meanwhile, Kone's doll was so paralyzed with fear that its head was literally about to pop off. The two magic beasts continued their chaotic feud. The bunny refused to yield, constantly chirping that the doll was an absolute nightmare to look at. Shri could only watch the mayhem in silence, realizing the kids still hadn't grasped the gravity of the upcoming trial. The intermediate magic exam is a triennial event, a brutal gauntlet open to both commoners and highborn elites. In reality, it's a proxy war between noble houses, especially since mastering magic has become a cutthroat business lately. The competition is riddled with dirty players who use underhanded tactics to infiltrate the competition, assassinating participants and sparking full-scale diplomatic wars between rival empires. Shri was genuinely concerned about whether these little ones would survive the treacherous journey ahead. He initially believed Sujun's paper avatar was a unique disaster, but he hadn't prepared himself for Cloud's creation, which was even more of a visual catastrophe. When asked if that eldritch horror was considered beautiful, Freckles' soul left his body as he hesitated. But the general, showing his seasoned maturity, immediately stepped in with some much-needed comfort. He claimed that back in his day, his own exam avatar was also a complete eyesore. But after that pep talk, the kid's mood hit rock bottom. Thanks for the encouragement, General. The day of the exam finally dawned, yet the kids' artistic skills were still stuck in the toddler phase. Luckily, Sujun had a secret weapon, her third brother, a literal prodigy when it came to the canvas. He managed to perform an artistic miracle, salvaging the girl's avatar to look like an actual human. Cloud's drawing also received a professional makeover from Freckles while she was catching some Z's. Some Z's. Once the artwork was finalized, the Emperor used a complex array to soul bind them to the paper, transforming them both into paper dolls. Kone was busy being a total sister simp as usual, but when he turned around, his soul nearly evaporated, because his formidable Emperor had suddenly transformed into a literal titan. He was floored by how gargantuan the world appeared from his microscopic perspective. The two magic beasts were still mourning their master, when they suddenly froze in their tracks. Curious about the tiny Kone, the Emperor scooped both kids up in his massive palms. While their spirits ventured forth, their physical bodies would remain behind in the safety of the palace, guarded by elite forces while Shri acted as their escort to the grand arena. He warned them to use this transit time to master their new, lightweight paper bodies. Otherwise, if they arrived at the arena unable to even walk straight, it would be a humiliating disaster for the Kai Empire. And here's the lethal catch: if their paper doll is destroyed, their physical body kicks the bucket too. This left the kid with a massive question mark. If the stakes are that high, why bother with a fake body? But this is actually for their protection, as a priest stays on standby to recall their souls if things go south, retrieving them before the heart stops. Then they'll be safe, but Sujun is currently as flimsy as a wet noodle. One tiny nudge and she's eating dirt. Made the kid so livid she wanted to blow a fuse, screaming, "Am I just some toy to you?" But to Kon, she just looked incredibly adorable in her miniature form. Beyond controlling their new vessels, they must also assert dominance over their magic beasts, fearing these pint-sized bodies might get swallowed whole by their own pets. So, his moment had finally arrived. The panda immediately bared his claws to threaten them. "Ha ha, I'm the big boss now." Meanwhile, the Emperor went to confront Shri, giving him a heart attack since he assumed the Emperor would be busy chaperoning the children right now. But the Emperor gave off a, "Where I go and what I do is my business, not yours to gatekeep" energy. However, it turns out his real mission was to borrow Shri's identity to mask his own legendary looks. Out of nowhere, he decided to hijack this top-tier face that everyone sims for, leaving Shri with a massive question mark. But faced with the Emperor's sheer audacity in wanting to use his ID to enter the competition, everyone else was left completely speechless. Back at the ranch, Kon and Sujun had finally mastered their new bodies, and soon the Emperor entered disguised as a guard. He fooled the prince, but he couldn't hide from Sujun, who alerted Kon. Clearly, there was something incredibly sus going on here. He carried himself exactly like the usual arrogant emperor, just with a palette swap, yet his own son Kon was totally oblivious. This shocked the kid so much she nearly coughed up blood in disbelief. So, Sujun quickly lunged onto the emperor's hand and scaled his shoulder, whispering in his ear to blow his cover. Is he trying to play cosplay or what? It gave him the fright of his life. He'd spent all that effort on a disguise only to be snicked on instantly. But he quickly regained his icy composure and immediately hoisted the brat up without a shred of royal mercy. The teleportation rift manifested and everyone hurried inside except for Sujun, who was still left dangling. This savage way of carrying her was a dead giveaway. It's definitely that stinky emperor leaving Pan all alone. Because she hasn't manifested a magic beast yet, she's disqualified from participating in the trials. The moment they arrived, the kid was floored because the arena was a skyscraper as massive as Landmark 81. The Emperor strictly warned them both to keep their mouths shut and swiftly escorted them into the heart of the building. As soon as he presented the passes to the guards, the aliases Lin Tian and Lin Kong were officially confirmed. The kid was curious because these were the secret names her parents in this world had originally bestowed upon them. So they were using them as cover identities for the trial to prevent their royal lineage from leaking. They were ushered into a private contestant suite. Tomorrow morning, they'd ascend for the first phase of the test. Naturally, the kids had 1001 burning questions, but the Emperor playing the role of Shri didn't give them an inch. The room was cavernous, but totally empty, so the Emperor pulled out 2 miniature beds, as if he'd been hoarding high-end dollhouse furniture since he was a toddler. As for him, he just required a cold, hard spot to sit and meditate. This chilling vibe made Kon suspect something was off, yet he still failed to recognize his own father. Outside, Pan was being escorted in by Freckles, followed by Nee and a sea of other contestants gathering at the site in their paper doll forms, each accompanied by a designated guardian. The sun was blindingly bright, yet he commanded them to sleep, which was a tall order, unlike Kon, who was already sawing logs. Seeing the kid's eyes still wide open, the Emperor lost his patience and unleashed his overbearing CEO energy. "Close your eyes and sleep, or I'll end you." This terrified Sujun into slamming her eyes shut, but she suddenly bolted upright in a panic. Because in his slip-up, the Emperor had referred to himself as the King. Yet he stubbornly doubled down on his lies, making the atmosphere turn awkwardly silent. After what felt like an eternity, Sujun finally drifted off into dreamland. The Emperor then wove a secret spell over both kids because he was dying to see their adult forms. That's the real reason he replaced Shri to support them personally. As the magic sigil flickered to life, it transformed Sujin's paper doll into an incredibly stunning and ethereal young woman. Seeing the girl bolt upright, the Emperor sternly commanded her to stay still, because the magic array was peaking. If she wiggled, her form would end up as twisted as a nightmare. They arrived a day early, specifically to sculpt these avatars, a process that takes 10 grueling hours. Kon finally blinked awake, but catching sight of Sujun in the body of a 10-year-old girl, he felt a wave of intense awkwardness wash over him. However, once he realized the stunning person before him was actually Sujun, Kon's eyes sparkled with utter confusion because his brain simply short-circuited. Had he suffered some trauma and slept through a decade-long puberty like a cliché romance drama? Noticing his son was way too deep into fictional tropes and losing his grip on reality, the Emperor quickly debriefed him, which finally prompted Kon to check his own reflection. He had also surged in height. This is the ultimate countermeasure to keep contestants anonymous. Whether you're a child or an elder, everyone wears a generic, unrecognizable face. Knowing the prophecy said Kone wouldn't see 12, the Emperor longed to see his son's future and gave him a gentle head pat. But he couldn't help stealing a glance back at Sujun because for some reason, the longer they lived under the same roof, the more he cared. As they matured, a booming announcement suddenly echoed. All participants gather on the first floor. The first trial is about to commence. He ushered the two kids out. Once they passed, he'd use his mana to pull them back to safety. Regardless of the daunting failure rate mentioned by others, the Emperor held absolute faith that his two children would breeze through this round. Seeing Kon doubt his own potential, the Emperor immediately hyped him up to boost his morale, making Sujun quietly giggle. She never imagined he'd evolve this much and ditch his toxic traits, which was a huge relief. Empowered by the Emperor's trust, though, the boy still believed it was just Shri. He marched forward with newfound grit. Just as they exited, the sound of a heated brawl drifted from the floor above. When they went to investigate, even Sujun's eyes widened, unable to mask her inner greed because right before her eyes sat a literal mountain of shimmering gold coins piled to the ceiling. Whether in the 21st century or this realm working her fingers to the bone wouldn't earn a fraction of this loot. Her mouth watered and she felt a desperate urge to just touch it and see what rich felt like. But suddenly, a stranger nearby intercepted her, sporting a magical interface older than a dusty tomato, but in Sujun's perspective. The person's facial features were a total blur. This was the incognito mode of the competition. Blinded by the allure of wealth, the crowd swarmed and fought like rabid animals, just to snag a handful, making Sujun wonder, since there was an endless supply, why they didn't just split it and retire. Why risk their lives over it? But suddenly, a realization hit the kid as she scrutinized the gold. This wasn't a reward, it was the actual exam prompt, and it was far more sinister than she suspected. If you lay a finger on that gold, you'll fall into a mindless frenzy just like the rest of them. After playing the knight in shining armor, the stranger vanished with a "see you later," as if he knew exactly who Sujun was. The kid quickly grabbed Kon's hand and bolted for the third floor. The boy was totally lost on the mechanics, demanding to know why they were skipping floors. That's when Sujun dropped some truth bombs. Based on her razor-sharp intuition, the opening round was a blatant trap for the greedy. Those blinded by avarice are destined to wander eternally within that golden labyrinth. But Sujun's expression soured, sensing the game was rigged against the poor. If a starving orphan saw that gold, how could they possibly resist? It validated the Emperor's cynical view. This trial is a playground for nobles to flex, while commoners are systematically set up for failure. The kid realized she couldn't fix the world's deep-seated rot, leaving her looking bitter and utterly dejected. Life is undeniably cruel. After all, a crooked path is never meant to lead straight. The second they set foot on the next level, they triggered phase 2, catching both Sujun and Kone completely off guard. Lying on the cold floor were two distinct ritual cloths. One side was marked true, while the other was labeled false. Participants were forced into a high-stakes binary choice. Suddenly, some peacock with way too much ego started hitting on Sujun, putting Kon on maximum alert, and he immediately stepped in to shield the girl. Clearly, this contestant was no innocent child, but his true identity was actually a 25-year-old man. The 17th prince of the Haha Empire, who bored to death, decided to meddle and mentor them on the exam format, claiming that once a path is chosen, you must commit to a streak of perfection or total failure. A single blunder and you're disqualified. He seized the moment to harass Sujun by tilting her chin despite them being complete strangers. An old creep of 25, regardless of the opponent's true age, he was targeting a child who looked barely 10, yet he still wore that predatory smirk. Even his own 19th sister felt a wave of secondhand cringe and turned her back to distance herself from her shameful kin. But he targeted the wrong girl. Sujun took a deep, steadying breath and then channeled all her fury into a devastating kick, striking right at that guy's critical crossroad. The sickening sound of cracking eggs echoed as his face contorted in pure agony. Even through the screen, you could feel the phantom pain. Even the panda standing beside her was visibly shook. Witnessing its master's savage execution, it instantly took notes and performed a demonstration kick that sent shockwaves rippling. It then began relentlessly hunting the other guy's bunny, delivering a flurry of strikes without a shred of mercy, leaving the poor creature wailing. Who gave you permission to touch her friend? Kon, standing nearby, was breaking out in a cold sweat. It was clear Sujun didn't need a bodyguard, but watching that guy writhing in the dirt, he also felt a sympathetic shiver because he could practically feel that soul-crushing trauma. Since the exam was the top priority, Sujun firmly grabbed Kon's hand and hauled him toward the all-correct chamber, though the kid was acting a bit too narcissistic for her own good. It had become second nature. She mused over how that creep could even perceive her beauty, through the magical distortion leaving Kon staring at her with total starry-eyed infatuation. The face might be a blur, but the posture, elegance, and drip still scream whether someone is a 10 or a 0. Watching the duo depart, that guy finally managed to peel his face off the floor, but he remained incredibly bitter and salty. He was supposed to be a prime 25-year-old youth, yet he was forced to masquerade as a mere teenager for this trial. What stung even more was that he'd already flunked the exam 3 times, and now he was being bullied by 2 kids, so he lost all chill and unleashed his pet, a demonic bat, to join the fray. But the moment the little pest poked its head out, it immediately caught a lethal boot from the bunny panda. The bunny was no pushover either. Knowing its main weapons were its 2 massive fangs, it sank them directly into that guy's mug. Instead of intervening, Sujun simply stood back with folded arms, observing the carnage because based on that flashy attire, this guy was undeniably a high-ranking noble. No actual child would act like such a practiced playboy. He was likely around 18 or 19 in reality. According to the kid's intuition, this guy was definitely a low-life scumbag who had shattered countless girls' hearts. Consider this a divine intervention, trashing a creep to purge a piece of filth from society. And thanks to that skirmish, Sujun pivoted her entire strategy at the very last second and ditched for the all-wrong room. Random guessing has the best odds. As it turns out, the exam was a test of judgment picking the false keys. And so as the clock continued to tick away, Kon had exhausted every single brain cell yet still couldn't crack a single question on the paper. Glancing at Sujun, who looked intensely focused, he assumed she had mastered the material and was some kind of hidden genius. While the kid was battling the question booklet, she noticed the prince looked like a deer in headlights. So she kindly decided that as soon as she finished, she'd slide the answers over to the boy. But this sent a blush creeping up Kon's neck. He didn't want to be the dead weight who not only failed, but had to cheat. It would be a total L. Meanwhile, in the all-correct room, Cloud was also completely lost. She wished Sujun were there to carry her, then she spotted Nee riding at lightning speed. That guy definitely knew his stuff, so she deployed her butterfly to go recon for answers. A truly elite perk for failing students, like a literal magical cheat code. Sensing a magic beast sharing its vision with its master, Nee glanced down to catch Cloud's gaze. "You've got some nerve trying to copy my work, Brett?" But when he saw the tiny girl cheerfully waving, "Hello?" at him, it sent a jolt of shock through him. He didn't expect this child could actually perceive him. He began to spiral into overthinking. Not blind despite the blindfold, she must possess an awakened sensory ability. At that same moment, Sujin's helpfulness became a source of pure dread for Kon, as she nudged him and he tried to play it cool. These 3 questions are basic total child's play. But the kid wasn't having it, immediately calling his bluff. "Don't act so tough, Your Highness, your paper is still a ghost town," leaving him dying of embarrassment because he was exposed before he could even finish his cool guy pose. But suddenly, a deafening roar erupted. It turns out the sky was raining down. Searing, fiery boulders targeted at the exam hall. Meteors were falling, fulfilling the secret dream of every student. And just like that, the kids were absolutely thrilled to ditch the exam room immediately. At this moment, the Emperor was a bundle of nerves for his 2 children, while Freckles was casually brewing coffee, when she suddenly began to dredge up the past, recalling how Empress Swayer used to whisper secrets regarding the Emperor, making him flinch. Did that woman actually have the audacity to slander him to others? Sure enough, in Freckles' memory, Swayer was constantly swearing and plotting to assassinate the Emperor. Unable to reveal the brutal truth, Freckles put on an "I see all" smirk and lied that the Empress really adored him. But just look at his face. He's clearly not buying it. He immediately let his pride swell regardless. With these god-tier looks, who wouldn't be hopelessly obsessed with me? Back in the day, the Empress was perpetually cursing the Emperor but could never land a killing blow because she simply lacked the power. It made Freckles want to burst out laughing. In the entire Tian kingdom, only she and Swayer possessed spirit blood, so how could they lose to a mortal? Seeing her friend was a total simp. She decided to play wingwoman and suggested she could just help her slit the Emperor's throat. Hearing all that, Swayer finally confessed that she truly couldn't find the heart to end him. Outside, the meteor bombardment became increasingly more savage, shattering Freckles' trip down memory lane. The Emperor swiftly erected a shimmering protective barrier. She could lounge there sipping coffee because her butterfly link confirmed Cloud was safe. She then turned, curious if the emperor was dying of worry for his precious heirs, since he had no way of knowing their status. Naturally, as a father who wouldn't be stressed, but the emperor donned a mask of confidence, trusting they'd manage. Meanwhile, the panda was carrying the entire team's safety, intercepting those falling boulders before they could crush them. Sujun grew careless, allowing a stray ember to ignite her soft fur, while everyone was losing their minds. Clueless on how to douse the flames, the little bunny suddenly erupted into a wail, and a miracle manifested floodgates of tears. Just like that, the fire was snuffed out in a way where logic has completely left the chat, leaving them both floored. They didn't expect a personal fire brigade to function like that. Suddenly, that creep from earlier was rolling on the scorched earth because he was literally on fire. The entire hall was in absolute shambles. It was every man for himself while the high-level mages stepped up to defend. Finally, Sujun's brain kicked into gear. Click, click, she was searching for a way to stop this inferno before everyone turned into roasted pigs. Her eyes locked onto a water jar that had materialized out of nowhere, and she immediately synchronized with Conan. Though she couldn't conjure water from thin air, she could certainly manipulate the flow. So she chanted a sharp command, forcing the water to drench the raging flames, clinging to a victim who was being incinerated alive. That guy, having just been yanked from the brink of death, showed zero gratitude and even whined that the water was filthy, nursing a petty grudge. He chose to repay a life-saving miracle with malice, but Sujun didn't give a single damn about his status. She was fully locked into a speed run to save lives, but their water supply was reaching a critical low. Unable to sustain her current method, she barked a tactical order to her panda companion. The duo executed a flawless combo. The panda slammed the water with a heavy-duty punch, triggering a massive splash that cascaded upon the hall like a localized monsoon. And thus, the inferno was snuffed out to the collective shaky sigh of relief from the battered survivors. But among the crowd was a gorilla of a man who found this pint-sized girl incredibly intriguing. Turns out, that was the exam supervisor who roared at them to stop stalling and finalize their papers. With an inferno that massive, where would the papers even be? Their soul-crushing disappointment was like a teacher refusing to cancel finals during an apocalypse. Yet that 17th Prince of Haha still clutched his singed paper and scrambled to submit it, because this was the hard-earned wisdom he'd gained after flunking 3 times already. But Sujun was so preoccupied with her rescue mission that she completely forgot her exam. She was officially cooked. The gorilla supervisor, seeing the kid's empty hands, assumed he'd have to fail this brilliant child, but he never expected that standing right beside her was someone as meticulously prepared as Cone, who proudly handed in both of their perfectly pristine papers one by one, leaving the crowd speechless that the prince could maintain a death grip on his belongings amidst such absolute chaos, causing the gorilla supervisor to marvel, truly a brilliant and resilient child, well played. Examining Sujun's script, he was instantly blown away by the sheer genius etched onto the page, unable to fathom that a child this young could actually secure a perfect score on such a brutal trial. Expecting another masterpiece, he pivoted to Cone's paper, assuming the boy would be equally formidable. But his jaw dropped in disappointment when he realized the page was completely hauntingly blank. Returning to the main event, the supervisor began purging those who failed to protect their exam papers by using magic, to violently yeet them straight out of the skyscraper. The survivors naturally advanced to the next stage, but before they could even steady their nerves, the gorilla supervisor abruptly unleashed a spell to shove the entire group into the bottomless abyss. Everyone plummeted into the abyss. Luckily, Sujin and Cone interlocked fingers to avoid being separated. But the 2 magic familiars weren't so fortunate and were instantly ripped away from their masters. In the waiting lounge, Freckles received a butterfly ping from Cloud confirming she'd advanced. The Emperor frantically pulled out a guide to pinpoint their next destination. The contestants were being airdropped into a dense forest scattered to the winds. At this stage, the Guardians are permitted entry to provide backup and ensure the kids secure a hard-fought victory. Only now did the Emperor bother to skim the servant's manual he was issued, prompting Freckles to laugh right in his face, since every other pro knew this round occurs within a simulated forest box. Suddenly, a magic sigil flared on their flanks. Cloud's butterfly was forcibly dispelled and sent back because the trial demanded the kids survive on their own, resulting in all magic familiars being kicked from the server. Just as the words left his mouth, the panda and bunny fell from the ceiling, landing squarely on the Emperor's face, leaving the mighty sovereign standing there in stunned silence. Meanwhile, Sujun and Cone were in a terminal freefall, when their hands suddenly slipped apart in the rushing wind. Despite a desperate lunging reach to reclaim their connection one last time, it was an exercise in futility. And then Sujun abruptly regressed back into her tiny paper doll form. Every contestant reverted to a doll tumbling into a miniature box simulating a lethal forest. The gorilla supervisor barked the rules. Each box contains 6 kids who must brawl for the right to enter the true forest. Seeing Sujun poking her head out to be a busybody and eyeing his Samsung tier physique, he immediately shoved the kid aside, sending her tumbling across the dirt. But suddenly, he emerged from the undergrowth to check on Sujun after witnessing that Titan gorilla bully the kid. Yet, she didn't just play nice. She had the absolute audacity to demand that he haul her up. This made Nee question his entire reality. It wasn't because he'd never encountered someone so shameless, but because she was the carbon copy of his past life girlfriend who once tripped herself on purpose and used that exact same bossy tone to demand he pick her up back then. That memory made the young man's face flush a deep crimson, recalling how he fell for his girlfriend's trap. She had instantly flashed her playful side and yanked his hand down, leading them both to lose their first kiss to Mother Earth. The two had been laughing and flirting in the snow. He'd seized the moment to plant a kiss on her forehead as they gazed into each other's eyes during that romantic flurry. To any bystander, they looked like a pair of total lunatics spitting the reader's facts, but after the flashback of his ex, instantly, Nee went stone cold and turned his back to depart. Then what was even the point of coming over to check on her? This left our Sujun absolutely fuming. You couldn't even handle a simple favor. But then the kid froze, as she suddenly remembered her own boyfriend from the 21st century. Unintentionally acting cute, she felt her heart skip a beat, though neither recognized the soul before them. But as soon as Sujun steeled her nerves and slapped her own cheeks like an anime protagonist to hype herself up, Lin Qian, let's go. Hearing that specific name, the exact same as his girlfriend's, instantly caused Nee to whip around to confirm the source. He still couldn't pierce the magical veil over her face, but his gut was screaming that this person was disturbingly familiar. But of course, the author won't let them peek just yet. That immediately pulverized any lingering hope that his girlfriend had also been isekai'd when Sujun confirmed it was merely a fake alias she used to enter the fray. Hearing that Ne's world completely shattered, his expression darkening instantly as he turned to walk away. Strictly maintaining a cold boundary between genders, he flatly refused to give the girl his name. The flickering romance drama was cut short by a piercing, blood-curdling scream from deep within the forest. Fearing it might be Prince Kon in danger, Sujun immediately sprinted toward the source of the sound, ignoring Nee's sharp warnings that the whole thing could be a lethal trap. While the kid was spiraling with worry for him, Kon had actually safely reunited with Cloud. With that iconic blindfold style, there was no miscalling her. When the topic of Sujun came up, he explained they'd been ripped apart during the fall and he needed to track her down immediately. Clueless as to whether the kid was even in the same sandbox as him, but suddenly, Kon flipped his nosy mode to the max and started firing off a million questions about everything. Wondering how Cloud could identify him so easily, he kept yapping with zero chill. This level of eavesdropping and gossip was truly top-tier elite behavior. Naturally, Cloud had arrived with freckles. She also had to mask her identity as the Princess of Luoluo, while the real reason she could pinpoint Kon so effortlessly was thanks to her secret bombshell, which she finally unveiled, leaving Kon completely jaw-dropped. All magic familiars were supposed to be seized and sent back to the waiting room, yet she still held her butterfly. But this was actually butterfly number 2 that she had stashed away, leaving Kon speechless. Truly, the space attribute is broken. But that little secret was immediately sniffed out by the gorilla supervisor. It wasn't just about confiscating pets anymore. He escalated the difficulty, releasing a ravenous swarm of hamsters into the simulation box. But to their current forms, those tiny little fluff balls were absolutely gargantuan, literal monsters chasing their heels. At the same time, the 19th princess of Xia was lurking in the thicket watching the chaos. Seeing Kon and Pan, she assumed they were power players. So she plotted to use them to eliminate the other 3, but retreated in total disappointment. Yet she hadn't managed a few steps before an icy chill ran down her spine, the signature aura of a true rodent predator. And just like that, everyone, trapped inside the box, shared the same fate, a terrifying nightmare dubbed the hamster sweep. Meanwhile, the sadistic 15th Prince of Xia was using his magic to pin innocent souls to trees to slow roast them alive, leaving them thrashing and sobbing for a hero. Sujun appeared, and seeing the trio, she sighed in relief because it wasn't Konan, but she couldn't stomach the atrocity before her. These people were being tormented in such a blatant and disgusting way. The second he laid eyes on Sujun, that guy showed his predatory side. Even without seeing her face, he was obsessed. This guy is a total lolicon. But before he could even lunge, he caught a savage kick from Sujun right in the face. He was instantly pulverized by the kid in a pathetic display of divine justice. Suddenly, the others began wailing, pleading for the girl to liberate them before they were roasted to a crisp, making the fired-up Sujun freeze. She had completely neglected the most urgent task, but before she could slash the bindings to free them, Nee swiftly channeled his water magic to douse those cursed blue flames. The girl then went over to inspect the damage to their limbs and discovered their feet were burned to cinders. Naturally, they were disqualified from the competition and forced to bow out early. So all 3 of them instantly flickered and vanished, returning to dust. Suddenly, without even needing a final duel, the 3 of them advanced to the next phase. But it wasn't a smooth ride. The gorilla supervisor's massive hands immediately snatched all 3, hurling them toward the real forest. With zero mercy, he instantly launched the trio like heavy bowling balls into the spatial rift. At that exact moment, they hit the dirt with a bone-jarring thud, reverting to their teen forms. Scanning the area frantically, Sujun wondered where those 3 victims were being held now. But supposedly, once their souls are recalled, the injuries they sustained would be completely erased without a scar. Hearing that the 15th prince cackled, he couldn't just be a minor cameo. He had to play the ultimate villain. Because those blue flames weren't ordinary fire, but a soul-scorching karmic flame designed to destroy others. He wore a total scumbag smirk, knowing that even if they return safely, their physical legs will be gone in the real world too. Just as the kid prepared to strike, Nee intervened, reminding her this is a sanctioned trial where dirty tricks are the norm. Turns out this was a bitter personal vendetta. He'd flunked the last 3 times because they crushed him, so now he's out for blood. Identity and names were supposed to be ironclad secrets, yet this creep somehow knew their entire history. Wearing a smug grin, he tried to hit on the girl again, promising to trade top-tier secrets for her loyalty. But that arrogant prick was instantly snatched up by Nee, hoisted by the collar, and hurled away like a piece of worthless, stinking trash. That didn't stop the guy from doubling down. Instead, he craned his neck to bark insults back at Nee. But Nee wasn't about to play the victim, daring this loser to show him exactly what he was capable of. The creep started howling, revealing his vile true colors as he swore, a blood feud promising to skin them alive and shatter their bones. Even though Sujun attempted to silence the guy's delusional rambling, his tongue kept wagging and he simply wouldn't stop yapping his head off. Despite knowing a lady should be poised and graceful, Sujun finally hit her breaking point. She delivered a thunderous strike directly to his punchable face like a bolt of divine lightning. This left Nee questioning his entire existence, as the girl was acting exactly like his former girlfriend. Back when she was playing the hero, she didn't fear a single soul on this earth. Regardless of the opponent's age, she'd beat them to a pulp. Even if she was labeled a playground bully, she believed those toxic brats deserved a brutal masterclass in manners. Back then, those punks were ganging up on a helpless little girl, so she terrified them into fleeing sobbing for their parents. Leaving a boyfriend like him speechless, she was truly a certified high-tier lioness. But when he witnessed the way she gently patted the bullied child's head with such genuine tenderness, he just stood in the shadows smiling, knowing that no one possessed a heart as pure as his girl. Reliving those memories, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sujun was a carbon copy of her soul. But there was no way that loser would take an L from a girl. He unleashed his karmic fire suddenly to close the gap and held her tight to dodge the blaze. Unexpectedly, that blue flame was incredibly deceptive, zigzagging and swerving like a sentient predator hunting its prey. While they were pinned down, the panda suddenly materialized and caught the cursed fire on its fluffy fur. Seeing the round, bi-colored fluff ball struggling in agony on the ground, Nee finally managed to piece the puzzle together and recognize that the girl before him was indeed Sujun. The moment they entered this forest, the ban was lifted and magic familiars were permitted to return to aid their masters. So the baby dragon reappeared, but that brat ignored him, too busy chasing girls. Leaving the dragon's heart in pieces, the little creature immediately began to wail in absolute despair. The resulting deluge submerged everyone in tears, and even the supernatural flame that could incinerate the very soul was instantly snuffed out by the deluge. This sent the guy into a blind rage, his veins bulging with fury as he radiated pure, unadulterated killing intent. With a feral roar, he summoned his primary magic beast for a desperate final stand. That hideous bat fluttered into view once more, and Sujun couldn't restrain a burst of mocking, savage laughter right in his pathetic, punchable face. Predictably, the moment it emerged, it was met by the panda's brutal combo pummeled until it lost its will to live and collapsed into a heap. This sent the baby dragon into a full-blown panic. Its fragile personality and devastatingly powerful form were a total mismatch. The guy felt utterly humiliated, forced to watch his signature magic get dismantled in a single humiliating heartbeat. He went full berserker mode, his entire body engulfed in a raging sea of blue fire, and then he launched fireballs at god speed, moving with such insane velocity that he blurred the very air. This was his hidden trump card, the lethal secret weapon he had spent years concealing for this exact moment. It forced them into a desperate, frantic sprint, running so fast their pants were practically flying off, but they still couldn't evade every lethal shot. Sujun took a direct hit to her arm, fueling the guy's massive ego as he began to cackle like a maniac. saw the kid was wounded and quickly channeled his elite water magic to soothe the searing, agonizing burn. However, no matter how much mana he poured in, that fireball continued to blaze. Unable to douse it, Nee pivoted to healing spells, desperately hoping to dull the excruciating, soul-tearing pain even a little bit. But in a horrifying twist, he watched as his healing magic was completely devoured by the cursed flames instead. But luckily, his intuition was razor sharp. He deduced the inferno was devouring mana rather than it being Sujun's trick, so she dodged a major bullet. He positioned himself as a human shield for the kid, while that psycho continued cackling like a deranged maniac over his own twisted, scorched spoils of war. The curtain falls here,